So guys, what if Naruto was heir of devil and had romance with Pervy Rias special movie? I like to think of myself as an observant woman, after all, I share a territory with a rival of mine, and we both have eyes for talent. Most of the humans here in Kyoto, however, didn't have the kind of talent that I needed, some barely had potential, and it won't take much too long for us to bring them up to snuff for what lies ahead. Recently, I had been fortunate enough to gain a new pawn who holds a sacred gear. I thought it was simply a twice critical at first, but I realized later on that it was actually the fabled boosted gear, one of the 13 Longinus. Alongside this pawn was a new bishop who also had a sacred gear, the Twilight Healing. While both are great for my peerage, they both still needed a great deal of help. Issei-san in particular, sure, he had a great sacred gear, but he also had practically zero aptitude for magical capability. As for Asia-san, she is much too timid and kind-hearted for wats to come. As much as I hate to admit this, even if it's just to myself, she may become more of a liability in the future, the crippling point that will tear us down. I also hate to admit that Sona might be a better king than myself. She picked her peerage so easily, and she spent time and dedication into making them valued pieces of her peerage. She didn't wait like I did, something that has proven to be costly for me. I was worried as the date for my meeting with him drew closer, and I couldn't help but think that despite everything we've done thus far, my efforts won't be enough for what may come. I needed time to think, so I didn't show up for school and took a walk through my town. I had hoped to clear my head and come up with something, but the stress and anxiety proved stronger than I estimated. It wasn't until I passed by a new music store, one that was playing some soothing music from their outdoor speakers, that I found something to help me calm down. Ria's Gremory curiously opened the door to the music store, taking a cursory glance at the different instruments and equipment that was on display. She saw guitars, pianos and keyboards, drum sets, different forms of brass instruments like trumpets and the like, and even some software that helped with musical editing and similar intentions. Running the store was a woman with stunning white hair that reached her waistline, teal eyes that almost glowed, and a pale complexion that was flawless. She was dressed in a black button-down shirt, matching slacks, and white shoes. Around her neck was a tie that was as teal as her eyes, while her hair had messy bangs, but they just added to her appeal. "Welcome," she greeted, "can I help you with anything?" "I heard music playing on the speakers outside," Rias answered. "It was nice, and I was just wondering who was playing." The woman raised a brow with an amused twitch of the lips. "I'm glad that someone appreciates his efforts. That would be someone who hangs out here a bit too much, Hess in the back, if you want to meet him." Nodding, the redheaded young woman gave a grateful smile. "Thanks." "No problem. Oh, just to warn you," the woman began, "Hess not exactly someone who can hold a conversation." Rias raised a brow in curiosity before she mentally shrugged it off and went to the back, going through the door. Her blue-green eyes widened slightly at the studio before her that was filled with state-of-the-art equipment that looked far superior to whatever the store itself was selling. And, sitting at a piano with large orange headphones, was a blonde teen that looked to be her age. He had wild blonde hair that was slightly matted down by his headphones, and strangely whiskered cheeks that reminded her of Kitsune Imkai. He was surprisingly dressed in the Kuo Academy uniform, but his tie was loosened and the top button was undone, giving him a more comfortable look. The blazer of the uniform was draped over one of the chairs in the studio, and he seemed to be lost in the music. Music she couldn't hear because his headphones were plugged into the speakers. She spotted an extra pair by the computers and sound systems, so she walked over and put them on before plugging them into another auxiliary port. As soon as she did, she felt the soothing sounds of the music produced wash over her. Its effect was almost instant, and she felt her worries drown away in the sound. The gentle sounds of the woodwinds blended so beautifully with the strums of the guitar at the beats of the drum, and at the core of it all was the piano keystrokes that were supplied by the blonde seated away from her. Relaxing into her seat, she closed her eyes and simply enjoyed the music with her enhanced devil senses. It was a wonderful feeling. Having her troubles simply fade away with the symphony, she recognized the style as jazz in nature, but it held a certain flair to it that she couldn't help to appreciate. Slowly, the music faded into silence, and she opened her eyes to look at the blonde teen. He slowly opened his own, and they were a stunning shade of azure blue that looked to be as deep as the oceans themselves. A faint smile was seen on his face, one that only enhanced his natural roguish appeal. She smiled as well and removed her headphones just as he did. She slowly made her way over to him as he pulled out a small laptop and typed in some notes. He must have heard her approach, for he looked up as soon as she stepped onto the smooth carpet his piano rested on. "That was wonderful," she praised, earning a curious look from him. "Your music," she clarified. "I listened to you play." Realization hit him, and he turned back to his laptop with a noticeable flush on his cheeks. How he must not receive many compliments. I can't believe I never noticed him before at the academy. Hess definitely got a face to remember with those markings. The door to the studio opened, and the woman at the front walked in with a small smile. "Alright, Naruto," she began, "time for you to get going. It's been well over the hour you requested." He turned to her for a moment before closing his eyes with a defeated sigh, nodding in understanding. He packed up his laptop in its carry-on case and shouldered it while carrying his school bag lazily by its top strap. As he walked out, he grabbed his blazer and carelessly laid it over his other shoulder before waving at the woman. She in turn waved back with her smile becoming a grin. "See you soon, yeah." He waved over his shoulder as he left the store, Rias and the woman exiting the studio to re-enter the main room of the building. "I see what you mean about him not being a conversationalist," the Gremory heiress mused aloud. "Yeah, that's how he was when I first met him, took me weeks before I figured out he was mute," she replied offhandedly, catching Rias' interest. "Mute? I thought he just kept to himself." "Well, that too, but he showed me he was mute after a couple of weeks. It was during one of my random spiels that I asked his opinion on, and he just answered back in sign language." Oh, that must been why she never really noticed him. In Kuo, a majority of the students were rather loud and excitable, especially when certain people were within view. "How often does he come here?" "A few times a week, Hess always working on different tracks, and he told me that he wanted to make a CD someday when he was finished." "How long has he been working on it?" "Here," the woman smiled fondly and looked at nothing in particular, "going on 2 years now." 2 years? Rias repeated, shocked at how long it was taking. "The first year was actually me showing him a few things, mostly how to use the editing equipment in the studio. After a while, he found his own groove and rolled with it, pun intended." The two women shared a small laugh at the simple joke. "Well, thanks for introducing me and telling me a bit about him." With that, she walked out of the store and headed back to the academy. She took hurried steps down the path Naruto walked before she spotted him a fair distance away, sporting his orange headphones once more as he strolled down the sidewalk. Not wanting to lose him in the crowd he was about to cut through, she hurried after him. As she power walked so that it won't look so strange, she pushed her senses outwards to try and get a feel for the blonde teen. She didn't know why she did, but a nagging feeling in the back of her mind prompted her to do so. And what she felt echo back to her made her glad she listened to that feeling. She felt an above average level of power from Naruto, with most of it centered around his upper chest. Just below his neck, a surge of excitement rushed through her, and she smiled brightly before changing her pace to a light jog. She noticed him pause in his own steps and turn back to look at her with a raised brow. This only made her mentally smirk, for there was no way he would have known she was coming, since he was wearing those headphones. It meant that he must have sensed her approach, which further proved that he had some hidden power. Pleased to see that he waited for her to catch up to him, he regarded her silently with his brow still raised. "I was hoping to walk with you back to the academy," she answered his silent question. He tilted his head and raised a hand to speak to her in sign language, something she hadn't needed to know beforehand. "I can't understand what you're trying to tell me, Naruto-san." He blinked in surprise and narrowed his eyes slightly. Seeing the accusation, she raised her hands up placatingly and explained, "That woman at the store told me your name. I apologize if I'm coming off as rude." His accusing look sobered to a casual one, making her smile. "I don't think we've ever met before today." He shook his head, prompting her to offer him a hand. "Rias Gremory, it's nice to meet you, Naruto-san." He looked at the offered hand for a moment before he took it in his own and shared a shake with the beautiful Redeed. Once his hand was free again, he set down his school bag and pulled out a small notebook and a pen before scribbling something quickly on it. Turning it to her, she read, Naruto Uzumaki, nice to meet you too." She nodded after reading it, prompting him to put the notebook in the small pocket on the front of his shirt, something that wasn't on standard uniforms. She said nothing about it, simply falling in step with him as they headed for the academy. As they walked, she noted that he was a head taller than she was, and his marked cheeks looked natural instead of drawn on. He also had his headphones hang around his neck, resuming the music at full volume so that they could project it loud enough to hear. "Are you a part of the music club, Naruto-san?" she asked, getting a headshake from him. "Really?" I'm surprised, you definitely have talent." He looked away from her at that, and she noticed his cheeks were once again flushed, proving her earlier theory correct. He really didn't get many compliments if he reacted so bashfully. "Did you try to apply for the club before?" she continued, earning another shake of the head. "Why not, if I may ask?" He pulled out his notebook and scribbled his answer before handing it to her. "I didn't feel like it. I've listened to them before, and I don't like the style they use." "Yes, I suppose a clash of styles would be problematic." She handed him back his notebook and continued, "Well, have you signed up for any club?" She was pleased to see him respond in a negative, this time giving her more attention. "You know that Sounda will scold you if you don't join one, right?" "I tend to avoid her whenever she's nearby. I have more than enough tardies and absences to warrant punishment." She giggled at his blunt response. "Somehow, I'm not surprised. No offense." He shrugged and waved her off, a small smile on his face. She mentally noted that it was a nice smile. "What if I offered you a way out of trouble?" He raised a brow before motioning her to go on. "I run the occult research club, and I'd like to offer you an invitation to it." He looked skeptical and wrote down, "Why?" I've never really shown interest in the occult before. You don't need to have an early interest to become a member, besides, you won't know if it does interest you unless you give it a try. He turned away with a thoughtful expression, and she mentally hoped he would agree to join. It was agonizing for her couple of minutes before he turned back to her and shrugged with a faint smile, nodding afterwards in agreement. She gave him a beautiful smile in response that made his cheeks flush once more. Excellent. I'll come find you after classes are over. He blinked at how quickly she wanted him to join, before noting how they had already walked through the gate and were on the school grounds. I'll also talk to Sauna and ask her to back off on scolding you, she continued before adding mentally, and also to back off in general. Good thing I noticed you first. Take that, Sauna. He nodded in understanding, and she bid him goodbye before heading off to her current class. Holding up his wrist, he checked the time and saw that he had history next. With a grimace, he ignored the schedule and headed for the school's roof. He wasn't a history buff, and he wasn't planning on becoming one. So, I believe he has a sacred gear, Rias concluded, informing her queen, Akeno Himejima. Akeno tapped her chin thoughtfully, giving a small hum as she went over what her king and closest friend had told her. Uzumaki, I don't think I've heard much about him. I suppose any rumors about him are as silent as he is. That was in slightly poor taste, Rias admonished. My apologies. If I am going to add Naruto-san into my peerage, then I want the rest of us to welcome him fairly and not poke fun at his mutism. I'm going to bring him here personally, so please make sure the others are here beforehand. Yes, but you. Finding Naruto was a bit more difficult than she thought. After getting a copy of his schedule from Sona, she expected to find him in his calligraphy class. Instead, she was informed by the teacher that he was absent and that they hadn't heard from Naruto all day. Neither have his other teachers. So, while she outwardly made it look like she was searching for him, inwardly she used her senses to find him. She got a response from the roof, and she made her way there to see him leaning against a railing with his hands in the air in front of him. She raised a brow when she saw that nothing was there, but then noted that he had his headphones on again. She saw him swing his head to music she couldn't hear, his fingers dancing in the air as if they were hitting the keys of a piano. Realization came to her as she saw that he was playing along with the music, immersing himself in it despite not having a live instrument in front of him. Such dedication to an art made her unconsciously smile, for she believed that he could apply that dedication to other areas, namely to her peerage. Walking over to him, she wasn't surprised to see him stop playing when she got within a certain distance. He turned to her and removed his headphones, giving her a small wave in greeting. I was looking for you, Naruto-san, she informed him. I told you I would find you after classes ended, remember? He nodded once. Well, come along, then. I'm going to take you to the clubroom now to meet the others. Nodding again, Naruto put away his headphones and gathered his bags, stuffing the school blazer into his school bag so he wouldn't have to wear it. His clothes also remained loose, which she couldn't blame him for. For girls as gifted as her in certain areas, the uniforms were very restricting. Leading him out of the main school building, and for the older one, she guided him inside and took her position behind her desk, while the other members of the occult research club regarded him. He couldn't help raising a brow at the members, not expecting them all to have something in common. For starters, Akeno was one of the two great ladies of the academy. She had her own fanbase, just like Rias did. It wasn't exactly surprising to see her in the club, though, considering how often the two were seen together. Hibuyudo, who was regarded for his politeness and good looks, was a surprise. Naruto had seen him a couple of times helping the kendo club, and he thought his fellow blonde was a member, despite the club being comprised of nothing but female students. Kaneko Taoju was known as the school mascot for her adorable looks. Honestly, Naruto couldn't blame the students for seeing the petite girl that way. Her features reminded him of cats, and he absently wondered if she styled her hair to look like folded cat ears. Issei Haidu was a definite surprise to see, considering who he was and the relentless rumors. Read facts about him. He was a pervert of the highest order, and he was damn proud of it. Naruto couldn't help but praise him for being so adamant in his beliefs and admirations, absently finding himself jealous of how vocal Issei could be, while he couldn't utter a word. And lastly was Asia Argento, the newest girl of the school that was rumored to be staying at Issei's home. He didn't bother listening to rumors, preferring to determine the worth of them with his own eyes and ears. Based on how close Asia was sitting to Issei, Naruto couldn't deny that something was going on between them, perhaps a crush on her part for the resident pervert. Absently, he remembered his late mother telling him that you don't always choose who you fall in love with. Along with that was something along the lines of look underneath the underneath, something that a family friend always liked to say. I wonder how Kakashi is doing, anyway, he mused before Rias spoke up and reclaimed his attention. Everyone, this is Naruto Uzumaki, she informed. He will hopefully become the newest member of our club. He raised a brow at the hopefully she threw in there. Wasn't he already accepted by her? The others introduced themselves. Akeno's voice held a slightly sultry undertone that he easily picked up. He couldn't help but blush at her voice and at how she looked to him with interest. Kiba was as polite as always, offering a smile and a handshake that Naruto readily accepted. He was always happy to get a warm welcome. Kaneko was rather stoic in her greeting, which strangely only added to her natural cat-like charm. He didn't understand it, but it probably wasn't important, so he simply gave her a wave. Issei looked to him briefly before turning away with a grumble of damn blondes trying to steal his harem. A sweat drop formed on the back of Naruto's head at that. Wow, was this guy insecure? He was mute, and he still had more confidence in himself than Issei seemed to have. And lastly was Asia, who walked over and gave a polite bow in greeting that he returned. Her innocent aura was absolutely adorable, and he found it an endearing quality that would hopefully remain with her. Innocent people tended to have the most impactful opinions, he believed, for they weren't yet biased by the beliefs of others. Now, Naruto, Rias continued, getting his attention once more, you probably noticed that I said you would hopefully become a member, right? He nodded with a confused expression. Well, the reason for that is because your acceptance is entirely up to you. He raised a brow at that, even more confused than before. There are things you need to know before I ask you if you wish to join us. She paused to take a breath before looking to him seriously, making him pay closer attention. Let me tell you about the three factions. So, Rias continued as she ended her explanation. Now that you are aware of the three factions, and of how all of us here are of the devil faction, I need to know if y'all still accept becoming a member of this club. Naruto, who had been listening attentively since she started speaking, took a moment to think about everything she had told him. It was definitely a lot to consider, especially the fact about the club being a front for this peerage thing that Rias was king of. Slowly, he pulled out his handheld notebook and took the time to write out his question. Once he finished, he offered it to the redeeded woman. Akeno acted as the passer, handing the notebook to her king to read. I understand what you've been saying, but I still don't know enough to make a solid decision. What are the benefits and consequences of this choice? Is it simply a fancy way of saying that I'm a slave to you, or is there something more that I'm missing? You're asking me to change who I am so drastically, and I can't make a call so quickly. She nodded as she read, seeing where he was coming from. I suppose I should be happy that you're not rushing into this. It shows that you don't blindly follow offers with tempting outcomes. But you, Akeno spoke up, perhaps we should give him time to think about his answer after we answer the questions he offered us. Let him reflect on what has been told and come to a decision on his own. Rias nodded in agreement, despite how much she wished Naruto would choose right away. Time was running out, and Akeno knew that. But Akeno was also someone Rias trusted immensely. If she said to give Naruto time, then she would accept that advice. Very well, then, she turned her attention back to Naruto and continued. The benefits of becoming a devil are quite a lot. You can gain access to magical power. Your physique and lifespan improve greatly to the point of living hundreds of years. You gain the protection of myself and my peerage, and you may one day have a peerage of your own if you rise up in ranking. Think about it, Uzumaki-san. Issei chimed in, a noticeable blush on his face as he giggled pervertedly. You can have your own harem if you work hard enough. Isn't that awesome? Naruto gave him a dry look alongside Kaneko. Asia looked uncomfortable about Issei's declaration and surprisingly frowned in what Naruto assumed to be jealousy. Yes, I was right about her having a thing for the pervert, wonder why, though. As for the others, they merely looked amused at Issei's comment, though Naruto noted that it wasn't cruel amusement, it was more like an adult watching a child at play and finding amusement in it. Ignoring his fellow classmate for the time being, Naruto turned back to Rias and waved for her to continue. Rias noticeably frowned at what she needed to say next. Unfortunately, the consequences, as you put it, are about as much as the benefits. For starters, you will gain a weakness for light and holy-based items or weaponry. Also, if you are to speak the name of the Almighty, it causes some mental pain, which can prove to be fatal if you aren't careful enough. She steepled her hands in front of her face as she continued. You also become a natural enemy of the other two factions, the Angels and Fallen, and another negative, if you really see it that way, is that you aren't fully human anymore. However, Kiba cut in, well, you are classified as a servant of Butchu. The Gremory family have been known to be the most understanding of masters. They treat their servants and peerages with respect and care, comparing them to a family. Butchu is a good king, too, Kaneko added from her seat, still as stoic as ever. She saved my life, Issei added, scratching the back of his head awkwardly. I'd be dead if I wasn't brought into her peerage. Asia-chan too. Naruto looked to the ex-nun with a raised brow, making her look away shyly. It's true, she stuttered out, not used to having attention from others. I was able to have friends when I joined the peerage, and am happy to have them. She turned back to him with a bright smile. I don't regret my decision to accept her offer. Rias gave the others a grateful smile for their supportive words before she turned back to Naruto. I've told you quite a bit today, so take some time to think it over, like Akeno suggested. However, I hope you can give me an answer in a couple of days at the least, no more than 2 from now. Akeno handed Naruto his notebook back and he nodded to Rias before he offered the others a small smile. Grabbing his things, he headed out the door and for home. The queen turned to Rias and asked, would you like me to follow him? We don't know if any fallen stragglers are around after the fiasco with those 4 others a few weeks ago. Please do, just make sure he gets home safely, Rias replied, prompting Akeno to leave the clubroom. Turning to the others, the heiress concluded, that'll be all for today. Focus on any jobs or flyers you have for the time being. Yes, but you, her peerage responded before the club dispersed for the day. Arriving at his apartment complex, Naruto gave a friendly wave to the owner of the building. She was a nice woman who had offered him a room for cheap if he helped with small repairs alongside his rent. He was happy to accept the deal, considering how most of his funds came from the dwindling money his last caretaker left him and his part-time job. Heading up to the 2nd floor, he entered his apartment and set his things by the front door. He had a thoughtful expression as he kicked off his shoes and moved over to his small couch. Taking a seat, he leaned back against the cushions and reflected over what he had been told by Rias and the others. In all honesty, Naruto had known that there were people in the world that couldn't be considered human. He himself wasn't fully human, either. His mother was only half human, and her mixed blood kept him from being truly human. Not that he was complaining, of course. He was proud of the blood he carried, and he couldn't help but consider it responsible for his immediate interest in music. After all, what race held as much respect for that art than the sirens? But, on the flip side, it was that same blood that was responsible for his mutism. A siren's voice is a dangerous thing. Something his mother told him many times before he lost her. According to his parents, on the day he was born and he gave his first cry, he unconsciously drew upon his latent vocal power, and it was mixed in, unfortunately. The newborn has no control of themselves or any sort of power they may have, and the stress that was put on his vocal cords was too much to handle. The result was the loss of his voice, his first cry being his only cry. While his mother tried to hide it, he could tell that Kushina was devastated over what happened. He was too, for he would never be able to sing with his mother, never know what his voice may have sounded like. But he never blamed her or her blood, something she did constantly whenever she thought he wasn't listening. He loved his mother, he loved his siren heritage, and he loved music. That was enough for him. After his mother was killed, his father Minato tried to care for him alone. However, being a single father was hard for the man. He tried his best, even having Kakashi give him a hand on a few occasions, and Naruto loved the man. But he was still glad that he had called his own mother for help. Grandma Tsunade was a wonderful woman, and her niece was like the sister he never had. He believed that things would be okay, and that he would heal from the loss, that is, until he lost the remainder of his family barring Kakashi. Naruto still didn't know who did it, but all he remembered was coming home from school to the sight of police at his home, and a crime scene unit gathering evidence. Based on what he had learned from Rias, along with his mother's otherworldly blood, Naruto knew now that it couldn't have been done by humans, unless they had holy or demonic weapons to pull it off. There was no fire, but the wounds he saw on his family looked burnt at the edges, not to mention the strange bullet holes that they suffered. But no bullets on the scene. Sure, the killer's cold picked up the bullets, but there still should been at least 1 or 2 that were stuck in the bodies. After that horrible day, Naruto stayed with his dad's teacher, a perverted writer named Jiraiya. The man made Issei's peeping look amateurish, and he proved to be a self-proclaimed master of peeping. It was his excursions that helped inspire him to write his Icha Icha series, which wound up being a major hit. All that showed Naruto, though, was how many perverts there were in the world, and it was sadly a rather high number. Now, he had a great appreciation for the fairer sex, but he wouldn't view them as simple pleasures to the eyes or body. He wanted something more in a significant other, someone who could be independent, strong, thoughtful, and hopefully have as much of a love for music as he did. Sadly, he hadn't found her yet, but he wasn't giving up hope. While the man was a massive pervert, Jiraiya was still a man who lent a hand and an ear whenever Naruto needed one. He was a support that Naruto needed, considering how Kakashi had been called back into service not long after his family's death. The blues never stopped playing for Naruto's life, though Jiraiya had grown ill a few years ago, and his aged body wasn't strong enough to fight it off. He ended up asking the doctors to pull the plug and left Naruto the rights to his books. He didn't want them, though. He just wanted to stop losing people he cared about. The rights were eventually sold to a group of authors who worked for Jiraiya, and it was the profit he made that helped him get by for so long. Most of it went towards food, house payments, and education, all of which ate away at it faster than he realized they would. By the time he entered Kuo Academy, he had sold Jiraiya's old home in exchange for his current apartment and found himself a part-time job so that he wouldn't go under. He he still found it ironic that he worked at an establishment that sold a food he and his mother both loved. Back to Rias' offer, Naruto was on the fence about it, it was tempting for sure, but the downsides were just as much as the upsides, they balanced out, with one major consideration standing out in the forefront. If he accepted, he gave up his life and freedom, if he denied it, he kept his freedom. But he may lose potential companions in the process. It was something he craved ever since he lost Jiraiya and was left alone. He still wished Kakashi would leave the service, but the man dedicated his life to it, for it was the service that his friends and squad mates Obito and Rin sacrificed their lives for. Naruto respected that decision, once again remembering a lesson he had learned from the people who cared for him. That lesson was those who break laws and rules are scum, but those who forsake friends and family are worse than scum. Kakashi didn't want to forsake their memory, and Naruto would respect the man's decision and resolve. That still didn't lessen the pain of being alone, though. He gave a silent sigh as he laid himself across his couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. What should I do? He mused, hoping for an answer. None came, not that he was surprised. Looking at the time, he noted that it was getting late, so he decided to put the thought of Rias' offer in the back of his mind, in favor of making some dinner and getting some rest. He'd ponder on it some more tomorrow. It's not like he would go to school where it would only distract him. Uzumaki-kun didn't show up for school today, but Akeno informed Rias as she handed her some freshly made tea. I assume he's avoiding this place so he can think in private. That's fine, Rias replied after taking a sip. He seems like a trustworthy person, so I doubt he'll skip out on giving me an answer, even if it's to decline my offer. What if he does? Akeno pressed, looking concerned for her closest friend. What will we do? What we've been doing before I noticed him, Rias answered. I can't expect Naruto to be the defining piece that will secure me a victory against Riser. She frowned in distaste at the mere mention of his name. If he accepts, then he'll be happy. But if he declines, he'll respect that decision. I can't force my needs onto others, otherwise they will be proven right about us devils and our selfish ways. Akeno nodded in understanding, though she held a faint frown that caught Rias' eye. What is it? Did something seem off about Uzumaki-kun? Off? In what way? The queen shook her head unsurely. I don't know, he felt like a human with an above-average aptitude, but I can't help but think that we may have missed something. Maybe it was just his sacred gear. Rias suggested. We aren't exactly aware of what it is, after all. Or if he even has one, Akeno argued calmly, it could just be something unique about him in general. Perhaps, but we shouldn't spend so much time wondering about it. We need to focus on Issei and Asia's training. If I'm going to challenge Riser to a rating game, we all need to be as ready as possible. Understood, but panting in exhaustion, Naruto wiped the sweat from his brow as a grin formed on his dirty and scuffed face. His eyes held a green glow that bled back into their natural blue, gazing at the fruits of his training. The trench was seen on the ground, moving from his standing position to a tree before him. As for the tree itself, it had been vertically bisected. Both halves of the tall tree had tipped over beneath their weight, and he could see that the tree behind the first had a nice deep cut going into its bark. His grin grew and he gave a pleased fist pump for his success. Ever since he had discovered this power, he had been trying to gain some measure of control over it. It wasn't easy, for he was working with something that he couldn't tell anyone about. If the government found out, he would surely be hunted down and brought in as a possible weapon. He didn't want that, he wanted to live his life away from military. Once the excitement left him, he walked over to his duffel bag and grabbed a bottled water, taking a generous helping of the soothing liquid within. Another downside of his ruined vocal cords was how sensitive they were and how they constantly grew sore. Drinking water helped, somewhat, or at least it felt like it did. He looked up and saw that the moon was already getting pretty high in the sky. It was time to call it a night then. Gathering his things, he left the woods and headed for his apartment for a well-deserved meal and rest. During his training, he thought some more about Rias' offer. Since he was so on the fence about it, he thought of a possible solution. He just hoped that it would work out with a beautiful redeed. Mentally groaning at that offhand thought, Naruto blamed his dad for his interest in red hair. It was that interest that helped him meet his mother, after all. You're serious, aren't you? Rias asked in surprise after reading Naruto's answer to her offer. Nodding, Naruto gave her a determined smile. His answer made sense to him, considering he had experienced it before when Jiraiya have him some lessons on running a company. Most times, employees were hired right on the spot because their skillsets were what the company needed. But sometimes a potential employee was placed on something called a probationary period. It was a time before full-time hire where the hopeful employee proved that they had what it took to be part of the company. They were still paid for any work performed, but they could be denied at any time the employer felt they wouldn't be a good fit. If that worked in the real world, why not apply that concept to this whole peerage thing? He would be a temporary member with the option to leave or be denied within the time frame allowed. It was perfect. I don't know what to say to this, it's unheard of. Rias continued, still getting over the surprise at such a proposal. I don't even know if it's possible. Naruto tilted his head at a reply before he wrote a rebuttal. You know the devil who created those evil pieces, right? Why not propose this idea to them? I don't mind being the one to test it. You can't be serious. She argued, looking to him in concern, which caught him by surprise. If it fails, you would become a devil by force, or something worse might happen. I can't just put your life at risk when you don't need to accept my offer. It's crazy. But you weren't the one risking my life, he wrote back before he gave her a grin, thumbing his chest. He mouthed out, I am. She frowned at him, moving around her desk so she could stand directly in front of him. Naruto, I can't let you do this, please, we can figure something else at a later time. She bit her lip for a moment before she finished. Don't ask me to do this. Her blue-green eyes locked onto his blue, and she found herself getting lost in their depths. Such a feeling stunned her, for she never thought she would ever meet someone with such an intense gaze. And that intensity was accompanied by a determined grin. He only nodded, and she knew then that there was no way she would convince him to back down from this. He had made his choice, and he would stick by it. For someone who can't speak, he sure as hell can't send a message, she couldn't help thinking, unable to fight a small smile from forming. Sighing in defeat, she nodded in agreement. Fine, I'll call my brother and see if he could speak with Lord Beelzebub. She paused, visibly anxious. Try to tell you his answer tomorrow. He grinned at her reassuringly before he placed a hand on top of her head. The grin forced his eyes closed and he chuckled, missing her cheeks flush slightly at what would be perceived as an affectionate gesture. Removing his hand, she noticed that his warmth went with him as he waved her goodbye and walked out of the clubroom. Unable to do nothing but stare at his back as he walked away with confidence, she whispered aloud, I hope this will work. A familiar teasing voice spoke up, making Rias mentally groan. That was rather sweet of him, assuring you like that. Don't look too far into it, Akeno, Rias warned, giving her queen an annoyed look, complete with brow twitch. He's just a nice guy, is all. Oh, I'm sure he is, agreed the Nadeshiko woman. I hope you don't mind if I try to steal away his niceties from you, but you. She giggled in a conspiring manner, I'd love to have him under me. Rias fought a shiver at that. She respected Akeno's sadism and enjoyment of teasing innuendos. But, sometimes they left rather vivid mental images. Those very images ganged up on her thought process, and she pondered what Naruto would look like in a more appealing outfit. He was a handsome man, after all, and the academy uniform did not do him justice. Growling to herself, she brutally squashed those traitorous thoughts and prepared to contact her brother. That didn't stop her cheeks from getting flushed. Not that Akeno was any better off, considering she was the one who brought up such thoughts. A probationary piece, you say? Ajuka Beelzebub, one of the four Satans, repeated in interest. Nodding in confirmation was someone who looked like an older male version of Rias. He was the holder of the title Lucifer, and once went by the name Surzich's Gremory. However, he dropped his family name after taking the title, leaving Rias as the next heir to the Gremory name. It was something Rias Tan asked me to bring up to you. Apparently, she has her eyes set on a potential new member of her peerage, and they want a trial period before they give a solid answer. Think it might be possible, Ajuka. Of course, it's possible. Anything's possible, Surzich's. The problem isn't in possibility, it's in results. Ajuka turned to his equipment, going over various data before pulling out his files on the evil pieces. I could easily make something to act as a temporary, or as your sister called probationary, piece. The problem is, I won't know the effect it will have on the target unless I see the results for myself. He waved off his friend and added, I doubt anyone would be foolish enough to volunteer for something with such a risk. Actually, Surzich's began, giving an amused smile. The potential member already offered to be a test subject for the piece. He couldn't help but find enjoyment in the surprised look Ajuka gave him. So, since you can make one, and someone is volunteering, I'd like to request one right now for my little sister. Sighing in amused defeat, the holder of Beelzebub fiddled with his equipment before activating it. The piece created was a pawn with archaic markings littering it. Before you ask, those brands are what make the piece temporary. Your sister simply needs to push her power into it before placing it in the person she's interested in. If everything goes well, she should be able to just as easily remove the piece by pulling it out with her power. Grabbing the offered item, Surzich's sent it off to his sister using his personal magic portal, giving his friend a grateful smile. The Lucifer stated, I'll make sure to have Rias send you her findings on the piece as she uses it. Shed better, it's not every day I do favors like this, even for an old friend's family member. He then gave said friend a stern look and added, I expect to have this favor returned also. I'll make it up to you, Surzich's promised with a friendly smile before he left Ajuka to his work. Arriving back in his office, he found his wife and maid waiting patiently for him. Well, Rias Tan has a way to increase her numbers, temporarily, anyway. You do realize that this may seem unfair regarding the contract, right Lord Lucifer? Grafia queried. Serzich's mentally sighed at how his wife demanded to be professional during times they were working. It bothered him to be addressed by a title by his wife, despite her being his maid. As her brother, I am allowed to do one thing to assist her in this, so long as it isn't anything major, he explained to her. That was something our families agreed on when I tried to argue the marriage contract. The way I see it, helping Rias get another pawn, one that might not even be a permanent member of her peerage, isn't major. How often has a single pawn tipped the balance of a rating game, after all? Grafia Cold pointed out the various times a pawn did decide the outcome, but deep down, she too wanted to help Rias. They were family, after all, and she never enjoyed seeing her family in distress, so she remained silent and resumed helping her king and husband with his work. How do you feel? Rias asked the blonde musician, having just put the probationary piece into him. He was currently laid across the couch in the orc clubroom. A hand reached up and rubbed his chest where the piece had sunken into him. The feeling it gave off was hard to explain, but it was almost like his body turned into water just long enough for it to sink in without issue. Mentally shrugging it off, he sat up on the couch and stretched his arms before he popped his back. Rias backed away so he could stand up, watching him as he stretched the rest of his body before turning to her and shrugging. Do you feel any stronger? Even a pawn gets a boost in physique when they're reincarnated. Naruto looked thoughtful before he perked up and wrote his answer. Those markings on the piece might be limiting what I'm capable of. It won't make sense to give me all the perks if I might just decline taking this role full time. That makes sense, I suppose, she relented. We'll have to see what you're capable of later. You told me that you had a shift today, right? He nodded with a small smile. Go ahead and get to your job. We'll meet up later. He nodded again as his smile turned thankful, waving her goodbye. He left the clubroom. As he left, Rias spotted that he left something behind and moved to grab it. When she raised it up, she saw that it was a flash drive with a label of demos on it. She was torn whether or not to return it to him immediately, for her curiosity was growing on what he could have stored in the device. She reasoned to herself that she could give it to him when she saw him later, smiling to herself as she moved over to her laptop to take a listen. Sure, she felt a little guilty, but she wanted to see the results of Naruto's musical dedication. Up in the realm of the angels, two siblings were currently conversing over something of major importance. Michael, is it really such a big deal? A beautiful blonde woman asked the current leader of heaven. Just because they were sealed away doesn't mean that their container will continue where they left off. Michael looked unsure, a worried frown on his face as he remembered the 6 siblings that the Heavenly Father ordered him to seal away into a sacred gear. They haven't shown up since they were sealed, and now their energy signature is coming from Kyoto in Japan. The devils could influence the wielder into striking us. Gabriel looked downcast at that. Brother, we can't assume that the devils are so eager to start war once again. They had their own civil war to remove their old leaders, after all, and the new leaders want to foster peace as much as we do. I know, sister, but I can't help but be cautious. That sacred gear and those sisters, they could easily match a Longinus if they train their container well enough. I still think you're being overly paranoid about this, Gabriel insisted. If it makes you feel any better, it'll go down to Kyoto when Zenobia and Arena head there in a few weeks. Will that ease your worries? Slightly, he conceded. However, I would like you to take a close look at the wielder and come to your own conclusion about if they will be a problem. Brother, she began, a rare frown on her face. Gabriel, please, Michael cut off, making her go silent. I don't like feeling this uneasy, and I need to make sure that our people will be safe, especially since father has passed. Both seraphs looked down at that, giving a silent prayer for their fallen creator. After a moment of silence, Gabriel stared at her brother with her frown still in place before she relented with a sigh. Very well, then, I do this under protest, though. The pout she gave at the end made Michael smile, its warmth making his sister slowly smile in return. With the plan decided, the female seraph left her brother's office so he could resume his work. After his shift, Naruto was seen in a separate dimension with the Occult Research Club. It was created by the Grimory family so that they may safely train their peerage and any overly destructive techniques or powers they have at their disposal. The realm had been modified to look like an open field with some trees and ruined buildings. Rias had Kiba and Kaneko work on Issei and Asia's physical training, while she and Akeno would see if Naruto had a sacred gear or something else that had been gifted to him by his blood. The peerage had been upfront with Naruto about what they could do, even telling him some facts that were a bit personal. One of those facts was how Kaneko was a Imkai who had been reincarnated into Rias Rook. She was a rare form of the Nekomata race that were called Nekishim, one of the last 2 alive. Hearing this, Naruto gave them his thanks for their trust before he returned the favor, informing them of his siren blood. At first, they were confused as to how a siren, even if he was only one, partially could be mute. rude, Issei going so far as to ask, albeit tactlessly. They would never forget the grief his false smile held when he wrote down the reason his mutism. It was after the reveal that Rias sent the others away, hoping to let Naruto compose himself, while Issei thought about his less than stellar question. Okay, Naruto, Rias began, getting his attention. I'd like you to show us if there is something you could do. An evil piece is meant to bring out someone's potential. And I need to know if you already had an ability or gift that you could use before I made you a temporary devil. He nodded in understanding, motioning them to stand back and give him some space. Once they complied, he closed his eyes to focus, reaching down for the power he had trained with for many years. 2. He opened his eyes with a confused expression, looking around for the source of the strange voice. His actions concerned Rias and Akeno, but they stood their ground off to the side. Focusing again, Naruto called upon his power and thrust his arm forward, fingers open and outstretched. From his hand, a gust of wind was launched, and its power pushed against a tree in its path, knocking over many loose leaves and breaking weak branches. While Rias and Akeno watched on with interest, Naruto frowned when the voice spoke up again. Naruto. His frown deepened as the voice seemed to whisper softly into his ear. Who are you? He thought to himself. We wait for you, the voice answered, much to his surprise. The wolf mentally asked another question, but Rias broke him away from his thoughts. So, you can control wind to an extent, can you do anything else with it? Putting his thoughts on the mysterious voice aside for now, he nodded and raised his hand. The fingers were pressed together in a knife hand fashion, and wind started to swirl around them. With a swipe, he sent a sharp blade of wind outwards, creating a trench in the ground and cutting cleanly through the tree he had targeted before. Heir Akeno began, licking her lips. Impressive control, Uzumaki-kun. He turned bashful at the praise, scratching the back of his head with slightly flushed cheeks. Anything else? Rias asked, prompting him to write out a response. I can use the wind to sense my surroundings. When someone moves, it disturbs the air, and I can feel it happening. It's like a sonar that is wind-based. That caught both of their interest. Let's test that, Rias prompted. Close your eyes and try to locate Akeno as she moves around. Nodding, he closed his eyes and took a relaxed stance, missing how the air shifted around him. Rias and Akeno saw and felt the shift, turning to watch how far the shifts traveled. When they finally stopped, Rias estimated the distance to be a little over 15 meters, roughly around 50 feet. Not a bad range, she mused before nodding to Akeno. The queen brought out her wings and took to the sky, and Naruto raised a hand with a finger pointed after her. She moved around the sky, doing sharp turns and reversals of direction. But he kept up with her the whole time. A smirk came to her face, and she darted down to the ground at high speed. She changed her trajectory to aim directly at him from ground level, noticing his brows furrow. His eyes shot open and he rolled to the side, avoiding her flying tackle. As she lifted herself back into the air above him, he stopped his roll, taking a knee on the ground while giving her an annoyed look. I couldn't resist, she defended, giggling demurely as if she did nothing wrong. Dryly, Naruto held up his notepad with a single word written on it. Sadist. Uzumaki-kun has figured me out so easily, she praised in a teasing tone, giggling once more, this time with a slight blush. She's the ultimate sadist, actually, Rias informed Naruto, looking amused when he aimed his dry expression at her. Anyway, that sensory of yours is useful. If you could sense something coming, you could be better prepared for it. I bet that's how you knew I was approaching you the other day. Huh? He scratched his whiskered cheek sheepishly, looking guilty. Anyway, I'll have Akeno help you with refining your wind later. For now, I want to see if you have something called a sacred gear. He tilted his head questioningly. That gauntlet Issei has is an example. I felt a power coming from just below your neck, and am wondering if it's a sacred gear or just your latent siren power. He frowned thoughtfully, unsure of what it could be. A siren drew power from their voice, and he lost his as a baby. It won't make sense for him to have their power still within him. Deciding to get answers, he sat down on the ground and crossed his legs, pressing his fists together on his lap. He closed his eyes and concentrated, searching within himself for anything other than his wind powers. Once again, the voice from before called to him, but they sounded further away than before. He frowned in his meditation before he focused entirely on the voice. Within his mind's eye, he saw a brilliant flash before he blacked out. Naruto. Rias called out in concern, seeing the blonde suddenly fall forward and land face first on the ground. She and Akeno rushed over to him, trying to rouse him, but he won't respond. Play My Immortal by Evanescence. The first thing Naruto registered when his senses returned to him was the sound of women singing. Slowly, his eyes opened, and he saw flower petals floating around in a calm breeze, as if they danced to the somber song that was being sung. He roused himself to a sitting position, looking around to see a void decorated in pinkish red light similar to the northern lights. There were also dozens of green trees that were covered in blooming flowers that held white petals and pink cores. Getting to his feet, he focused his hearing on the melodious singing, walking to where he felt it was originating from, walking past a seemingly limitless number of trees. His blue eyes admired the endless petals that floated around him. A serene smile formed on his lips, and he basked in the peaceful atmosphere that this void held. Walking over a small hill, he saw a stone altar with 6 women standing in a circle, all of them singing in perfect harmony. In the center of the altar was a massive stalk that had a city-sized flower that was in full bloom, the entire thing the same color of the trees and their flowers. He walked up the steps and found a piece of rubble to sit on, happily spectating their performance as he took in their features. The first woman was tall and had a figure that rivaled Rias and Akeno. She had long and flowing blonde hair, amber eyes, and wore clothes that left very little to the imagination. On her forehead was the Roman numeral of the number 5. The next woman had brown hair tied in twin pigtails and blue eyes. She was dressed more moderately than the first and had an air of self-dignity. On her forehead was the number 4. Third was a woman with purple hair that was cut straight. Her eyes were a similar shade to her hair, and she wore comfortable clothes with a buckler-styled shield on her left arm. Clipped to her belt were 2 pairs of scissors, and her forehead held the number 3. The next had short and curly blue hair and matching eyes. Her clothes consisted of a bikini top, a skirt, and some stockings, while a black flower with a blue core rested in her blue locks. On her forehead was the number 2. Fifth in line had pale blonde hair and a bob style with a black headband holding back the thicker strands. Her eyes were wine red, and she wore white clothes that looked modest and styled like cathedral clothes. Decorating those clothes were some armored gloves and a circle-shaped weapon that was strapped to her back. The number 1 was on her forehead. Finally, there was a woman with white hair and reddish-pink eyes. She wore pristine white clothes with black heels and had a prosthetic left arm with clawed fingers. Her forehead was bare, which confused Naruto since he thought there was a theme going on. And music. When they finished their song, they all turned to him. This prompted him to stand up, his hands clapping in appreciation for their harmony. The women with 5 and 4 smiled at his actions while the others remained stoic, more so than Kaneko. The one without a number beckoned him forward, and he complied without question, standing before the 6 of them. "Welcome, Naruto," she greeted calmly, surprising him. "Yes, I was the one who called you and brought you here. We've waited 17 years to speak with you, though I had hoped you would be able to return the sentiment." He cringed at that, looking down sadly. "Sister?" 4 admonished, her expression stern. "That was uncalled for. If he gets like this every time it's brought up, then there's more work to be done than I thought," she replied easily. It happened at his birth, and Hess coped without a voice for his entire life. He should be over it by now. He looked up and frowned at her, his blue orbs blazing. This only made her smirk. "So your name is justified. Good, I was worried you'd be too soft." One sighed and stepped forward. "We're wasting time. He needs to be told who we are and why Hess here." "Moo, you're always so serious," complained 5, a pout on her face as she crossed her arms, perking up her impressive bosom. Her pout became a smirk when Naruto blushed and avoided looking at her. "And you're annoyingly cheery," 3 drawled out, cutting some split ends with her scissors. Naruto felt out of place during their sisterly squabble. He raised his arm to get their attention. Something 2 noticed. "Getting back on track, we're all within what is called a soulscape, Naruto-kun." He raised a brow in curiosity, prompting 4 to continue. "A soulscape is deep within your subconscious, in the deepest recesses of your soul, and any hidden power within. It is where your siren powers rest, and where our sacred gear has awakened." He perked up at that, turning to the others as they nodded in confirmation. "The 6 of us," 1 picked up, "all make up the sacred gear, Naruto, but we weren't always here. We used to have flesh and blood bodies and had hundreds of followers." 3 continued, satisfied with her hair management for now. "We're known as Intoners, goddesses with the power of song. What that means," 1 pressed forward, "is that our songs give others strength and they empower our demons, personal companions that are linked to us spiritually. However," 5 continued, her pout returning, "some stuck-up guy with angel wings sealed us away with the help of someone he called father. They targeted us individually and erased our faith from history. Now, nobody knows about the Intoner faith, about us." He regarded them sadly, feeling sympathy for them losing so much. A kinship was felt between himself and the 6 of them, one of loss and pain. The unmarked one, he would refer to her as 0, finally spoke up again. "Once they sealed us away, they changed our prison to the sacred gear that was born within you, and that sacred gear." Now, they all spoke as one, is the Gail Symphony. As soon as they declared the title, the wind picked up and made the petals dance wildly. The title also resonated inside of Naruto, making him feel a strange sense of pride, but also a sense of sadness. "You felt it, didn't you?" 0 asked, making him nod. "Our souls have been linked, and they have been since you drew your first breath. You, Naruto, are the last link to our diminished faith, the last one to bear our power. However," 4 cut in, "that power has changed, evolved in a way. You see, our power is song. But your power," she smiled to him and finished, "your power goes beyond song. It is the wind, the natural power that carries our voices and reaches all over the world. It is why we have Gail in our name." He looked unsure of everything, not knowing how to respond and wishing he could speak. 5 noticed he was uncomfortable, and she stepped forward to place a hand on his shoulder. His blue eyes met her amber, and she gave him a smile to comfort him. "We're standing with you, Naruto-kun. That's what you need to understand. All of us," 4 continued, stepping forward as well, "we are your symphony." "And you three spoke up, stepping forward, are our Gail." Thu smiled and moved over to him, her hand covering Four's on his other shoulder. "We're all in this together. We will help you grow stronger," one continued, "strong enough to show that we are not forgotten, that we still exist inside of you. But most importantly," Zero concluded, moving closer and standing directly in front of him with her hand pressed over his heart, "we will be your voice, you will be our body, all for one. And one for all," he mouthed, a tearful smile on his face. He felt it from the hands they placed on him, the link they shared, the bond that resonated between all of their souls. Naruto Shippuden asked. The road continues. Stepping back, he stuck out his hand with the palm down, his smile growing into a bright grin that dared to challenge the sun's luster. One by one, the Intoners smiled back at him and placed their hands over his own, 5 through 0 in perfect order. Once Zero had her hand placed, Naruto placed his other hand on hers, and the 6 women stilled as they felt their hearts pulse in perfect harmony. Slowly, Naruto began to fade away from the soulscape, his peaceful face being the last part of him to disappear. Once he was gone, Zero turned to her sisters and smirked. "We chose well," was all she said, earning agreeing nods from the other Intoners. They all then moved over to the giant flower, placing their hands on the stalk and sending their power through it. The bloom at the top gained a green aura, drops of pure light raining from its petals and washing over them. They would stand with him, just as he would stand for them. And music. When Naruto came to, he sat up slowly and saw that the wind was raging around him. Strangely, everything had a green coloration to it, and he felt like his ears were covered by muffs or pads. Getting to his feet, he saw the wind slowly die down until they faded away, letting the others approach him safely. "Naruto." Rias called as she and the others rushed over to him. Her eyes widened when she saw something new about him, gasping out, "Sacred gear, you do have one." All he did was grin with pride, his green eyes regarding them all happily before they faded back to blue. A couple of days passed after Naruto awakened the Gale Symphony and met the Intoners. Turns out, the titles he gave them were correct, since they each were named after the number they bore. Well, they were okay with their names. Naruto felt that being called by a number was an insult to what they used to be. If they were really goddesses that had been sealed away, then they needed actual names, not numerical titles. He promised them to give them names when he thought of them, something that warmed their hearts as he proved once again that they had chosen well. Currently, Naruto was rushing back to Kuo Academy, still dressed in his raiment stand uniform, complete with stained apron. Rias had told him that there would be a meeting today between herself and someone important, though she looked spiteful at referring to the person in that manner. Whoever it was that Rias was going to speak with, they were not someone she liked, that much was obvious. Rushing through the entrance to the school grounds, he unconsciously used his sacred gear to have the wind blow at his back, increasing his speed so that he almost blurred to the door, pushing it open with his momentum. He stumbled slightly as he entered the clubroom before he righted himself, looking embarrassed at his entrance and giving Rias an apologetic look. He then took note of the 2 new people that he had never seen before. The first was a woman with silver hair and eyes, dressed in a stereotypical maid's uniform that strangely looked great on her. He hoped that Jiraiya's perverted tendencies hadn't somehow rubbed off on him before his death, because he felt that his thoughts would be something the super pervert would think. The other person was seated on the same couch as Rias, something Naruto noticed made her tense and annoyed. That alone made Naruto deduce that the blonde man was the person Rias was meant to speak with. He wore a burgundy blazer and matching pants with a white shirt that wasn't buttoned up all the way. Just looking at the guy made Naruto feel a sense of ire, for the man regarded him with disinterest and a slight sneer. "Who is this human who thinks he can barge in on this meeting?" he asked in annoyance. "That is my newest club member," Rias answered calmly, testing out a temporary evil piece that Lord Beelzebub made for me." "Ah," he replied, his expression once again taking on little interest. "I remember father telling me that Lord Lucifer finally contributed to your little rebel streak, but honestly, this was what you wasted a prototype piece on, a lowly human who looks like he works in the slums." Naruto bristled silently, and he felt the Intoners growing ire from within him. "Who the hell is this jackass?" Issei growled out, having come to see Naruto as a cool guy during the few days he had spent with Rias Peerage. Alongside him, the other Peerage members also held small frowns at the insult to their companion. "Seated next to Lady Rias is Lord Riser of House Phoenix," informed Grafia calmly. "He is Lady Rias' fiancé, due to a contract between the Gremory and Phoenix houses." Riser smirked at the introduction, his face showing one of superiority to the others, Issei and Naruto, specifically. Then, the man flexed his power and called forth a large magic circle with his family crest on it. From that circle came a group of women who stood behind Riser obediently, while one of them took a seat on the couch beside him. "And those women are his peerage," Grafia continued before gesturing to the girl who sat down, along with his younger sister, Lady Ravel Phoenix. So, Riser cut in as soon as the introductions were finished. Where was this pitiful waste anyway? I would have thought that a servant of Myria's would have been more punctual. Irritably, Naruto gestured to his stained uniform before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a flyer with the Gremory crest on it. He then slammed it on the table in front of everyone, glaring at Riser. Ah, Graphia spoke up, I see, you were late and are in such a state due to fulfilling your obligations, not want to shirk your responsibilities for any reason, the maid nodded, her tone showing a slight approval towards his actions. Ha. Hess just a mere scullion. How pathetic. Truly Myria's, Riser is shocked and disappointed that such a pathetic drag is one of your servants. Riser said, addressing himself in the third person. I fail to see his commitment to his duties as something to scoff at, Riser-sama, the silver-haired maid said, eyes narrowed dangerously. He fulfilled his task and rushed right back here immediately afterwards. I was unaware the House of Phoenix looked down on those who take their obligations seriously. Rias winced, knowing that her elder sister-in-law Graphia, someone born to the House of Lucifer, a noble family of pure-blooded devils from the extra demons who were proud of their commitments and loyalties, would take any negative comments against a hard worker personally. Riser gulped, and so did Ravel. Both Phoenix members feeling the tense atmosphere, the rest of the unfamiliar girls glared at the maid, but she turned to them and merely rose a brow. That small gesture was all it took, and they shrank away from her, dropping their glares and cowering. Naruto blinked. Who was this woman dressed like a maid, and why were these people so afraid of her? My apologies for the display and the lack of consideration, she said, speaking to Naruto. Had I known of any prior duties, I would have seen this meeting occur later. Graphia then turned and bowed slightly to Naruto, while also giving him a minute smile. It pleased her to see Rias' probationary piece was dedicated to his employer and to Rias. He blushed at her actions and nervously waved her off. He didn't mean to gather so much attention, and it wasn't this woman's fault he was late. Why Lord Lucifer finally contributed to your little rebel streak, and why Lord Beelzebub would waste such an important prototype piece on something as pathetic as this is beyond Riser, Riser said, still speaking in third person, unless of course this miserable drag is expendable, which explains everything. Actually, Riser's even betting that his parents were lowborn trash like he is, scraping just to get by and then dying pathetically in some matter. He gave a condescending smirk and chuckle as Naruto trembled in pure rage, such is the sad pathetic lives of these lowly creatures. Within the Gail's Symphony, the Intoners heard Riser's insult to their host's family. Needless to say, they weren't pleased. What did that bastard just say? 2 yelled out furiously. Why, that little shit. 3 added, gripping her scissors dangerously tight. How dare he say such things? 4 trembled in anger, her normally compass nature unable to stay strong. Hess a dead man. Second comes the death, but first comes exposing he has that many girls with him to try making up for his subatomic size dick. 5 promised, her amber eyes flashing dangerously. Oh, 1 began, cracking her armored knuckles. It's going to be a pleasure ripping his head out of his ass. No wonder that Gremory girl doesn't want to marry him. I don't blame her. 0 was silent as her sisters raged, stewing over the insult to her chosen vessel. Of all the death and suffering ever caused with our power, she began, her voice dangerously soft, freeing that deed from this fucking swine is one I am going to treasure inflicting most. I sincerely hope that this House of Phoenix doesn't mind losing an heir because this son of a bitch just crossed the line by insulting Naruto's family. She then gave a grin brimming with bloodlust that demanded to be nourished. It was a look her sisters had seen before they were all sealed away. A look that still sent chills down their spines. I actually feel somewhat indebted to those feathered sanctimonious cocksuckers that ruined everything when it was supposed to be over, she continued, referring to the angels that sealed them into the Gail Symphony. If it weren't for them sticking us in here, we wouldn't be getting to butcher this pompous child and his group of sluts. Shuddering as their rage echoed within his mind, Naruto put a hand to his head as it started throbbing. Oh good, they were pissed. Well, he could do without the headache. It was still nice to know that his new partners cared so much about him. Rias bolted to her feet and rounded on her would-be fiancé, Riser. How dare you? She snarled as her eyes glowed red and black energy with a red outline danced around her dangerously. She could try tolerating Riser being an arrogant womanizer, for she had known he was for many years, now but insulting her peerage, even if Naruto wasn't a fully accepted member, was going too far for her to forgive. Worse still, it was an insult aimed at a friend's deceased family. The third son of the Phoenix clan merely stood up with his condescending smirk and grabbed Rias by her chin. You will need that willful streak beaten out of you, my dear Rias, he said firmly, his tone turning dangerous. He was unprepared for a distortion in the air to appear around his arm before his hand was separated from his body, a clean cut through the wrist. Furious, he turned to glare at the one responsible and saw it was the same lowborn brat he had just insulted. Naruto was glaring at Riser, breathing hard like a winded bull. But what really surprised everyone was that his eyes were no longer blue, instead, they were glowing green, and wind was swirling around him. For a moment, Rias worried he might attack Riser, which wouldn't help the situation. However, he suddenly winced and grabbed his head, falling to a knee as he felt the Intoners start to bicker within his mind. 0, stop. one yelled, her arms wrapped around the eldest sister. She tried to pull Zero away from the center stalk that represented the core of the Gale Symphony. 1. Zero started, growling as she spoke, if you know what's good for you, yowl. Zero, please. Not like this. 4 urged as she helped 1 pull her away. You're willing to do whatever you must and cross any line you want in the name of obligation and responsibility. 1 continued, as much as we are complete opposites, and as much as I considered you as a traitor to the Intoners, she paused briefly, getting Zero's attention. I understood and respected that about you, and the reasons why you turned on us, even when you almost cut us all down back then. But this isn't the way and you know it. He deserves punishment compounded in blood. Zero argued, her tone demanding retribution, and I mean gallons of it. And we agree. 2 tried to reason, but not here, at least. It's too private for his execution. 3 supported, staring down her older sister. Wait for a more fitting moment, 5 added, smirking deviously, when the time is right, we'll all help Naruto-kun put that child in his place. Zero went silent, contemplating everything her sisters said. She finally relented, a smirk returning to her face. Finally, something we can all completely agree on. Besides Naruto being the perfect container, and you all make a great point, this bastard peacock deserves to die before the eyes of all the world. He'll be patient for now, she promised, pulling back her power and influence. Naruto gasped as Zero's influence on his mind retracted, but he kept his glare aimed at Rias' obviously unwanted fiancé. He wasn't going to forget a thing this bastard said or did for a long time. Riser snarled response, even as he grabbed his arm and placed the ends of the injury together. A quick flash of fire came from them, healing the wound and reattaching his hand, while flames erupted threateningly from his fingertips. Enough, a stern voice cut in, making all attention focus on the wife of Lucifer. This isn't why we're all gathered here, she declared, causing Riser to dispel his flames, while Naruto's eyes faded back to blue, and the wind ceased. After they both had their respective elements dissipate, Riser clicked his teeth in annoyance. Indeed, he agreed with Grafia, trying to save face. Such low-born trash is of no consequence, especially since my Rias and I need to prepare for our wedding. Rias glared at the man she was going to be forced to marry with undisguised disgust. I refuse. I have no intention of bringing my family to ruin, but I will not allow such insults against those that serve and aid me to stand unchallenged. That would dishonor my family in an even worse way. This pact between our houses was just proven a farce by that spiteful arrogance of yours, and I will not be part of it. So, you mean to settle this dispute in a rating game, then, my beloved Rias? Riser questioned her with an arrogant smirk. Iridide nodded firmly, her eyes blazing, gladly. At her words, the Phoenix laughed. Very well, then. I'll accept this challenge, if only to show you how pointless your rebellious nature is. I'll even give you 10 days to prepare your peerage for the game. He then gave her a wicked grin, licking his lips hungrily, and when you lose, my beloved, you'll have to accept our marriage without complaint. With that, Riser gave Grafia a faint nod before he and his all-female peerage vanished in a magic circle bearing the Phoenix family crest. As soon as they were gone, Issei raged out, who the hell does that fucker think he is? Indeed, Kiba agreed with a rare frown on his face. Such insults aimed at a member of our club at a comrade will not be taken lightly. Fried yakitori on the menu, Kaneko added, her brows furrowed even as she spoke stoically. Asia fiddled with her uniform before she moved over to her fellow blonde. Naruto-san, will you be okay? He turned to her and met her concerned green eyes with his angered blue. Seeing as it wouldn't be fair to give her such a look, he forced himself to calm down and gave her a weak smile. Nodding once, she didn't look convinced, but she accepted the nod and embraced him to show her support. Normally, Issei would have been rather jealous of such an act, but he knew that Naruto needed the support of his friends after hearing insults about his late family, so he said nothing and just turned to Rias. 10 days to train. I say we get started right now, but you. Rias nodded with a faint smile, and we will. I just need to speak with Sona for a moment before we leave. She then turned back to Grafia and handed her a file that was on her desk. This is for Lord Beelzebub. It's what I've noticed so far about the probation piece he lent me. The maid took the file and stored it away in a pocket dimension before speaking to her husband's sibling. A word of advice, Lady Rias. Riser may have deplorable conduct and unwarranted pride, but he will not be an easy mountain for you and your peerage to climb. You must give it everything you have and beyond. I know, the young Gremory assured her sister-in-law, although, I'm surprised you are giving me advice at all, considering how by the book you prefer to be. Offering Rias a smile, Grafia replied, I make exceptions at times when it comes to my family. The two shared a brief hug before the maid left the clubroom. Rias then turned to her peerage and declared, we'll start our training tonight, gather a week's worth of clothes and necessities, and meet back here in 3 hours. Yes, but you, the others replied while Naruto nodded. Naruto, Rias called, making him stop from leaving. I have something for you. The others left the clubroom, while Naruto moved over to her, pulling out his flash drive. She smiled at the surprised look he had on his face. I hope you don't mind if I listen to your demos, but you left this here the other day. I guess it probably fell out of your bag. He looked embarrassed at misplacing it and at Ria's admitting she listened to them, shuffling his feet, he gave her an anxious expression and silently asked her opinion. Knowing what he was asking, she kept her smile and answered, your demos were great, Naruto, I think that they're fine the way they are, especially the one titled The Journey, 1. He rubbed the back of his head bashfully, his cheeks flushed once again in embarrassment. Keep up the progress, Naruto, I can't wait to listen to your CD when you finish it, especially with all the effort you've put into it. He gave her a grin in response and nodded, silently promising that he wouldn't stop working hard, giving her a wave goodbye. He left her alone in the clubroom as he headed home to pack. With no one around, Ria scowled at nothing and declared aloud, Riser, you're going down. Of course, you can take time off, Tucci told his blonde employee, smiling warmly at the young man. You've put plenty of time here while going to school and working on your music, I don't see a problem giving you a break. Thanks, Naruto signed to him, I should be gone for about 2 weeks. Take some time to rest, too, his coworker almost ordered him. AM was always looking out for him, ever since he started working for her and her father. You've looked pretty drained these past few days, so, use this time off to relax. He smiled at her concern and nodded once, I will, he promised before he bid them goodbye. Heading back to the school, he adjusted the duffel bag that was hanging on his shoulder as he enjoyed the late afternoon breeze. During these 10 days, we'll be training you in using our weaponry, Zero informed him from the mental link he and the Intoners shared. I use all of them, but the others specialize in different weapons. What do they use? He asked back. I use chakrams, or bladed discus weapons, 1 answered. I use swords as my weapon, 2 continued. My scissors, 3 spoke up, but those can translate to daggers or knives for you. I use hand to hand, but I usually wear combat bracers, 4 stated. And I use spears, 5 finished. Naruto gained a thoughtful expression at the variety of weapons he was supposed to train in. How am I going to carry those weapons into the raiding game? Kiba could lend me a sword with his sacred gear, and I could fight barehanded, but what about the others? Don't worry, by the time we're finished with you, you'll be a walking armory, Zero assured him, and he could practically feel the smirk she was giving him. For now, just listen to that girl and get better acquainted with your temporary piece. But I haven't felt any different since Ria's put the piece into me. I don't feel stronger, I don't feel weaker in sunlight, and I even tried to read part of the Bible online the other day. The Intoners looked to one another, all but one of them at a loss at what to do. However, Zero's smirk became a small grin at hearing everything he had said. Naruto, do me a favor and buy some empty vials. Why? He asked in confusion. I've got an idea, was all she said in response, but it still made a shiver crawl up his spine. Ria sat calmly at her desk, waiting for the last member of her group to arrive. Naruto was running a little late, but she didn't see any harm in it. He lived pretty far from the school, and he couldn't access devil magic because of the restrictions on the probationary piece. From what she and Naruto had recorded throughout his time possessing the piece, it seemed as though the brandings that Ajuka Beelzebub placed on it had the pawn act as nothing more than a title. In layman's terms, Naruto was only a devil in name, nothing more. He couldn't summon his wings, couldn't access magic, didn't get a boost in physique, and wasn't affected by elements that naturally weakened newly made devils, like sunlight. Hopefully, the Satan who created the piece would lower the restrictions if he decided to continue making probation pieces. They were meant to let others experience what being a devil entailed without immediate agreement. After all, she was brought out of her musing by Naruto entering the clubroom with an apologetic expression. With a smile, she waved off his apologies and gestured for him to take a seat. When he took a spot next to Akeno, who looked pleased by his actions, Rias addressed her peerage. We'll be spending the next 10 days at one of my family's summer homes here in Japan. It's secluded enough so that we won't be disturbed by anyone who doesn't know of it. Not that I don't doubt our chances, Issei spoke up nervously, but do we have enough members to take on a full peerage? Quality over quantity, Issei-kun, Kiba replied with a reassuring smile. We just need to focus on improving ourselves. Kiba is right, Issei, Rias continued. They may have more members, but I doubt they'll be expecting us to put up much of a fight, which gives us the advantage. Underestimation, Kaneko simplified for the perverted pawn. Issei hummed in thought before nodding. I think I get it, we get them to lower their guard, which lets us take care of them quickly. I can't wait to see their shock when they realize their error in judgment, Akeno mused wistfully, giggling in growing excitement. Oh, the looks of utter despair and agony as we. Anyways. Rias cut off loudly, preventing Akeno from going into detail. Sometimes, her sadism got out of hand. I'll have Kiba and Kaneko help you and Asia in your physical training, Issei, then, Akeno, and I will help you both get a better understanding of devil magic. But, what about Naruto-san? Asia asked in concern. Naruto simply smiled and handed her his notepad. I'll be refining my wind power with Akeno-senpai when she isn't helping you or Issei. There are also some things that I want to try out with my sacred gear. That reminds me, what's yours called? Issei asked. I have the boosted gear, and Asia-chan has twilight healing. Gail's Symphony, it's a wind and sound-based sacred gear. That's disturbingly fitting since you like music so much, he replied after reading Naruto's response. It's almost like your gear was made for you. That's not too far off, actually, one spoke up in Naruto's head, her voice sprinkled with slight amusement. Alright, let's get going, Rias declared as she summoned a large magic circle that encompassed the entire floor. In a flash of red light, they all left Kuo and arrived in a large parlor that looked ready to entertain several guests. Okay, the rooms are down the hall. Go ahead and pick one for yourself, so you could drop off your things. Afterwards, wait for me back in here. Nodding their understanding, the members of the orc left to pick their rooms for their 10-day stay. It was time to get to work. Okay, since you can't use our magic or wings, we need to figure out alternatives to help you during the raiding game, Ria said to Naruto as she paced in front of him. Currently, she had Akeno teaching Asia basic magic, while Kaneko and Kiba physically trained Issei. I have an idea that I'd like you to try. He tilted his head and waved for her to continue. I saw this in one of my manga, and it involved someone who also had wind-based power. What I want you to try and do is create a solid platform of wind that you could stand on in midair. This could help counter any of Riser's pieces who may try to get an aerial advantage over you. Not a bad idea, actually, Five mused. Nodding in understanding, Naruto took a breath to concentrate before he leaped as high as he could. At the peak of his jump, he thrust a hand downward and sent out a gust of wind that pushed him higher into the air with its recoil. His eyes slowly turned green as he put more focus into the hand releasing wind, picturing the air solidifying beneath him into a circular platform. Rias floated near him with her wings, ready to help him if this attempt failed. Her blue-green eyes looked beneath him, watching as the air shifted and swirled within an oval-shaped boundary. The winds within the boundary were trapped and held together as Naruto's feet approached them in his descent, and she readied herself to catch him just in case. When his feet made contact, the platform held for a moment before Naruto lost concentration as he tried to keep his balance. With the platform destabilized, Rias flew over to him and caught him with his arm over her shoulders, earning her a thankful look from the blonde for the help. Well, it's a start, she mused aloud as she landed them both safely. You made a good attempt, but next time try to make the platform lower, so that you're not so high in the air. He gave her a nod in understanding. We'll keep working on that later. For now, I want to know what you plan to do to train your sacred gear. Pulling out his notepad, he wrote down his training plans before handing it to her. I wanted to try and shape wind into a close-ranged attack that bursts outwards when it hits someone. I also wanted to see what other shapes I can turn wind into. Good ideas, she complimented. For the first one, maybe have the shape fit into your hand, like a bowl or something similar. For the other, you could maybe try to create a sword or something out of wind. That's what I was going to have you try so you could train in our weaponry, Zero spoke up. Good to see that Shess on the same track as we are. Naruto grinned at that, nodding both to Rias and to Zero. Not that Rias knew, she smiled back and held up her hand with the palm upwards. Within it, she generated a sphere of black energy that held a fierce red outline, easily keeping it stable in her palm. This is my power of destruction. It was hard for me to get a handle on it first, but now I can control it like this with ease. She watched him study it closely, holding up his own palm. Take in the air around you, she instructed, watching as it began to swirl towards his hand and contain it within a ball shape so that it continuously twists and turns. This way, the power inside will keep growing stronger since it will act like a compacted hurricane. His brows furrowed as he concentrated on the wind in his hand, gritting his teeth. He put his left hand over the wind so that both of his hands cupped it into a crude sphere. Before their eyes, the wind created a thick shell that contained the churning air within. Looking ahead, Naruto took aim at a tree in front of him before he charged it, his left hand keeping the air churning within his right palm. Within the Gail's Symphony, the Intoners watched as Naruto thrust a spiraling sphere of raging wind into the tree. As soon as it made contact, it began to grind away at the bark before it destabilized and burst against the tree. Due to it being wind under his current control, Naruto had been able to direct the impending burst so that there wasn't any backlash against his hand, and the result was the tree shattering under the pressure of the wind, which continued to travel forward as an enlarged sphere that barreled through many more trees before finally dispersing. Two sets of eyes widened as they saw the path of destruction that had just been made, amazed at the power behind it. You unreal, Rias gasped out. I only gave you the idea. But, you took way beyond what I thought you would. Naruto didn't appear to hear her, holding his right hand before his eyes and clenching it a few times. To Rias, it looked like Naruto was barely coming to terms with what he was capable of. She was in the same boat, and it excited her beyond measure. If a simple suggestion led to that, then who knew what else Naruto had at his disposal. But the Intoners, they were all smiling or smirking with pride for their partner. That makes some heads roll for sure, 5 commented. Definitely, and to think he'll only improve from here on, 4 continued. 3 chuckled disturbingly, think of what that will do to that bastard who insulted his family. I doubt we even need to think, Tu replied proudly, nice job, Naruto-kun. I wonder if he could make that into a ranged attack as well, one mused. Zero simply smirked in silence, not needing to say anything to show her pride in Naruto. 3 days had passed since the day Naruto successfully made that devastating wind attack. Out of curiosity, Rias asked him if he was going to name the technique, and a name came to him in a dream. In the dream, he saw himself and Jiraiya, the both of them dressed differently than he was used to. Jiraiya was teaching him the very technique he made, except it was made from an energy that he didn't hear the name of. However, he did hear that it was called the Rasengan. So, he decided to stick with that, liking how it sounded. The Intoners also enjoyed seeing the wind technique, and they brought up one's notion of making it a ranged attack as well. That was something Naruto was interested in trying, but he wasn't sure if he had the time to try it out, considering what he already had on his plate in terms of training. Currently, Naruto was standing unsteadily on a wind platform that he had successfully made, thanks to Akeno giving him some advice. She was more adept in magic than Rias, so her opinion was greatly valued on this endeavor. He was trying to move around while maintaining the platform, allowing him to take part in mid-air combat. Faster, Rias ordered as she had him practice dodging on his platform, sending weak fireballs at him with her magic. She winced when she saw one get a bit too close, only being avoided by a wobbly shift in stance on Naruto's part. Still, she didn't let up, for he had asked her not to go too easy on him. Keep your focus, Naruto. Dodge. She unleashed a trio of fireballs that he evaded. The first was dodged by him ducking under it, the second with a strafing shift of his platform, and the last by leaping over it with a near split of his legs, before he landed on his platform once more, without falling through it like the times before. He looked surprised at the success before grinning brightly. Standing up to his full height, he wiped the sweat from his brow, and had his control over wind make the platform move around, as if it were gliding through the air. He stood calmly, not getting too emotional or overzealous, as he willed the platform to move, ascend, and descend at slowly increasing speeds. Rias saw him executing this and smiled proudly, pleased to see that their training was bearing great fruit. Next, she would have him practice attacking and defending while maintaining his platform. On the night of the 5th day, Naruto was seen in the parlor of the Gremory summer home. He was smiling contently as he cleaned off the dusty instruments that were on his stage. There were violins, basses, guitars, trumpets, drums, a piano, flutes, and various other instruments, all placed together for the sole purpose of entertaining the audience. Currently, he was wiping some wood polish on a guitar before he would clean the strings and tune it. I thought I'd find you here. He heard Rias speak up. He turned to her and offered her a smile and greeting before he gestured to the instruments he had already cleaned. Yes, I can see you've been busy, despite me telling you to rest. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly at her accusation before he finished cleaning the strings. Sitting with his legs crossed, he rested the guitar across his lap and began to tune it, frowning at how it hadn't been tuned in possibly months. Hey, Rias spoke up again, softer than before. When she had his attention again, she looked to the side awkwardly and asked, can you play something for me? He blinked at the question, not having expected that. When she looked back to him, he pointed to the piano on stage, something she shook her head negatively to. No, play that, she answered, pointing to the guitar in his lap. I want to listen to you play something that's special to you. He looked at the guitar, holding it gentler than he had been beforehand, raising his head to meet her gaze. He smiled faintly and nodded once before holding up a finger for her to give him a moment. She sat across from him and waited for him to finish his tuning, and listened to him take a few practice drums before nodding in satisfaction. Play Tuesday's Child by Jesse Cook. And so, he began to play, and Rias immediately saw him drown himself in the rhythm the guitar made. His eyes were closed serenely, and he swayed his head to the music that began to echo throughout the parlor. She felt the wind pick up around him at some point, moving around the instruments and gently gliding across one of the violins, to add a soft undertone that blended perfectly with the guitar. Her own eyes closed as she tried to immerse herself in the sounds and melody like he did so easily, but it was easier said than done. Her imagination started to draw up an image of a summer sky, with a gentle breeze that pushed clouds slowly. The clouds began to mix and phase through one another, starting off as shapeless masses of air and water, before ending in random images that she enjoyed. She saw one shaped like an arrow, one shaped like a fox's head, and another shaped like a blooming flower. And just when she felt herself falling deeper into the spell of his music, stop music, he slowly ended the melody, finishing the song with a soft strum of the guitar strings. He smiled as he finished, his eyes still closed in peaceful content, a peace that his siren blood yearned for. Rias opened her eyes and watched as he just sat there, smiling softly before a straight tear fell down his cheek, dripping onto the guitar from the bottom of his chin. Concerned, she reached over and cupped the cheek that once held a tear, prompting Naruto to open his eyes and meet her gaze. She was taken aback by the warmth they held, and she felt her heart skip a few beats, while her cheeks began to grow pink. He gave an awkward smile, scratching the cheek she wasn't touching before he made to grab his notebook. However, she stopped him by grabbing his hand with her free one. He met her gaze once more and saw her lean in close. This time, he was the one with flushed cheeks as she closed the remaining distance and gently pressed her lips to his. It was a simple peck, lasting less than a few seconds before she pulled back. She gave him a smile and said nothing. But there was something that was silently exchanged between their eyes, and slowly, he smiled back, feeling truly happy for the first time in many years. A few more days passed and Rias group found themselves on the final day. Currently, the Grimoire heiress was personally testing Issei and Asia on what they had learned. Akeno was there to help judge while Kiba trained with Kaneko, her power and defense being a good opposition to his speed. As for Naruto, he was practicing with a pair of bladed discs made entirely out of wind. He was tossing them one at a time before he spun in place and released them both, having them move in a rapid circle that started close to him before expanding outwards in diameter about 9 feet. Once they hit the 9-foot mark, they returned to him where he caught them with ease. Spear. 5 called out, prompting Naruto to bring his wind chakrams close to him before he smashed them together and stretched his arms apart, reshaping the wind into a long handle with a drilling point on one end. Whirling the new spear, he gave out wide swings at the tip and sent forth crescent slashes of air pressure that gouged into the trees that surrounded him. He then cocked the spear and charged a large rock before stabbing it, the wind being so sharp that it pierced through it and poked out from the other side. Knives. 3 ordered, and Naruto complied by regripping the spear at its center shaft and ripping it in two. The two pieces then shrunk and took the shape of curved daggers that he readjusted in his hands. In his right hand, it was held in a forward grip, while the left hand held its dagger in a reverse grip, with a mix of slashes, thrusts, and kicks. Naruto attacked another tree with a razor fury before he backflipped away and threw the left dagger at it, piercing through it and stabbing tree behind it before it dispersed. Sword. 2 cried, and the dagger in Naruto's right hand elongated into a katana shape that he held with both hands. With practiced swings, he sliced through one tree and cut deeply into the rock he had speared before, the wind producing a horrible grinding sound as it sliced deeply into the rough surface. He then spun in place and took a rising slash against another tree, this one small enough for him to cleanly bisect, as he flipped once more and landed back on his feet, stumbling briefly before quickly righting himself. Bracers. 4 yelled, and the sword dispersed in his hands before it regrouped around his forearms and shins. He took a few practice punches against nothing before he twisted in place and aimed a reverse punch at the rock he had damaged earlier. Putting all of his force into the punch, he rammed his wind-covered fist over the hole the spear had made before. The power behind it rammed against the rock, and his arm sank into it up to his elbow before he expulsed the wind and shattered it completely, rubble flying all over where he was training. Stepping away, he took multiple deep breaths as a proudly tired smile etched itself onto his face. Excellent work, Zero praised. Now, it's time to practice our trump card against that prick. Naruto frowned at the mention of the bastard who insulted his late family, say what you want to about him, laugh at his disability, or even criticize his music, he didn't care. However, speaking poorly about his family, about those he had loved dearly and lost, then there was no mercy for you, none. With a firm nod, Naruto turned his attention to the lake that was near the summer home. Determination burned within his eyes as he headed towards it, ready to practice the technique that would take Riser down. It was only a matter of time, now, and the Intoners, and he all knew that. Naruto woke up the following morning to the feel of something warm curled against his body. Blinking the sleep out of his eyes, he looked over and saw a familiar shroud of red hair resting atop his chest. His cheeks grew red, and he awkwardly reached over the arm Rias wasn't grabbing to gently shake her by the shoulder. She gave something akin to a whine at that, having one of her arms let go of his to swat away the offending disturbance. It's too early, she mumbled. Sighing at that, Naruto resorted to flicking her nose, making her recoil on reflex and scrunch her nose. She gave him a pout, and he gave her an apologetic expression in response, seeing as he cold-tried anything, and she didn't understand sign language. He settled for pointing at the morning sun peeking out the window curtains. Oh, she replied, looking slightly downcast at that. Right, today's the big day, isn't it? He nodded with a sad smile. What do you think our chances are? I want to know your honest opinion about it. His brows furrowed at that, thinking of how to answer her question, based solely on her tone. He could see that she was anxious about the event, and the nerves were making her have doubts. She needed reassurance, something that he was willing to give her. So, he reached a hand over with his pointer and middle fingers stretched outward. Without warning, he gently poked her on the forehead, prompting her to rub the spot. She gave him a confused look, only to see him give her a grin wide enough to stretch his whiskered cheeks. Absently, she was once again reminded of Kitsune Inkai when she witnessed that expression. She slowly smiled back at him, understanding the message he was giving her. You're right, she stated. It won't do us any good to worry about it before it happens. We might bring down our own confidence. He nodded firmly, giving her a corny thumbs up that she couldn't help giggling at. With that concern dealt with, they both got ready for the day. Rias leaving for her room to give Naruto some privacy. In the sense of team spirit, Rias had her Peerage wear their school uniforms save for Akeno and Asia. Akeno wore a Miko uniform that looked wonderful on her, and Asia wore her stitched-up nun clothes. Devil or not, she still felt that connection to the church, something that Rias respected, despite how it went against devil culture. Issei and Kiba wore their uniforms with slight alterations. Issei left out the blazer and tie, finding them to be restricting, while Kiba felt the same about only the blazer. As for Naruto, he left out the blazer, wore an orange undershirt, and simply loosened up his tie so that it didn't choke him. However, he added two new things to his attire. The first was the necklace that belonged to his grandmother Tsunade, who inherited it from her grandfather. It was a simple green gem that was held together by a durable cord around his neck, and the second addition was a black headband with an orange swirl insignia on it. According to his mother, the Uzumaki were a recognized family for the sirens. They weren't known as royalty, but they were respected. Their insignia was a red swirl, but Naruto chose orange to tribute his parents, more specifically, their hair. Are we ready? Rias asked her Peerage, earning nods from them. She gave them a smile and added, thank you all for helping me with this. I know that I could just demand your assistance as your king, but I wanted you all to help me as your choice. Ara, don't get so emotional, but you know we support you, Akeno replied. Indeed, after all, you are more than our king, you are our friend, Kiba spoke up. We have your back, Kaneko added, giving a rare smile to Rias. Yeah. We'll do this together, Issei declared, clenching his left fist in determination. Asia smiled with her hands rested over her chest, as if in prayer. You've done so much for me when you didn't need to. I've never had friends before, and I don't want to lose them when I've finally attained them. Naruto simply gave Rias another thumbs up, shouldering a guitar to his back. Rias looked curious about that, but she caught the amused face of Akeno and held back her question. That alone let her know that her queen had a hand in this. A magical circle appeared on the floor beside them, revealing Graphia to the group once more. It's time, Lady Rias. Nodding, the Grimoire heiress had her Peerage gather around her so that the Queen of Lucifer could take them to the rating game. Lord Azazel, I've got my report on that boy you wanted me to keep an eye on. A cloaked Fallen spoke to the governor of the Grigori. Said governor merely looked up from the morning's newspaper, accepting the report from his subordinate. Anything worth noting before I read it? S been recently working alongside the Grimoire heiress, sir. I assume Shess reincarnated him as a devil of her Peerage. Well, my brother won't be pleased to hear that, Azazel noted in amusement, especially after all the trouble he and father went through. Sir? The scout asked in confusion. Nothing to concern yourself about, it's something beyond your peril, the man joked, earning a sweat drop from his scout. Oh of course, sir, he cleared his throat and added, Hess shown an incredible aptitude for wind, most likely from a sacred gear. Azazel merely hummed at that, already knowing the origins of the power, memories nearly forgotten resurfaced, and he chuckled to himself, anything else? Thanks to you suppressing my energy before the mission, I was able to get close enough to overhear talk of a rating game, sir. Really? The ex-seraph queried, his tone one of interest before he moved over to his television set. In his hand, a magical array appeared, and he raised it to the side of his head like a cell phone. Sirziches, he greeted jovially, sorry for the unexpected call, but would you mind telling me what station your sister's game is being broadcasted on? He ignored the surprised look on his scout's face at how he had casually called the current Lucifer, focusing on said Satan's response. Yes, I promised to meet with you sometime after the game. There are things we need to speak about, after all, thanks, he bid before dispelling the communication spell. He then placed the same hand on his television, surging his power through it briefly before it flickered on and showed an empty space. Yes sir? The scout stuttered out, feeling very out of place at the moment. Why don't you take a few days off to relax? The governor suggested. You've done wonderfully. Grateful for both the dismissal and the praise, the scout bowed to his leader and left the man alone. He needed a drink to help his nerves. Alright then, Azazel began, holding up a file that had a picture of a blonde teen and a white-haired woman inside of a music store. Let's see what you've got to show, kid. When the orc arrived, they found themselves waiting in a lounge room of what Rias recognized as the Grimoire estate. Graphia spoke up before she could, saying, you and your Peerage will wait here until it is time. Lord Riser will be waiting at his family estate, making it so that you only meet on the board, if you will. Nodding in understanding, Rias decided to get comfortable as she waited. Her Peerage followed her example, and the redeeted king was pleased to see the camaraderie between them. Issei was sitting beside Asia, helping the blonde ex-nun stay calm. Sign her nerves were visibly getting to her. It was obvious that the two of them felt something for one another, something beyond friendship. It was also adorable how they both didn't seem to realize it, considering the obviousness of it. Kiba was beside Kaneko, the both of them having known one another long enough to be comfortable. She rarely spoke, and he never pushed her about it, respecting her stoic personality. While she appreciated his natural kindness, they were ready for what was about to happen. happen. Akeno was sitting on the floor across from Naruto, pointing out certain magical runes that were seen on the guitar he had brought. Based on how eager she looked, Rias could only assume that they were meant to cause nothing but misery for Riser's peerage. Something she had nothing against. Naruto gave the queen his undivided attention, which was fine. But it still made Rias twitch when she saw Akeno moving closer to him so that she could show him certain rune better. Memories of Akeno talking about stealing Naruto away resurfaced, and that caused another twitch. Grayfear returned a few minutes later, simply nodding to Rias to tell her that it was time. The club stood up together and awaited their transport, being engulfed by a large magical array that dropped them off in the middle of. "Wait," Issei began, "isn't this our club room?" Akeno shook her head and pointed to the window behind him. "Take a look for yourself, Issei-kun, we're on the board, now." Complying with her suggestion, the pawn looked outside and saw that the sky was filled with a colored void that reminded him of the northern lights he'd seen in some of his anime. He also couldn't see the city that surrounded Kuo Academy, only the grounds of the academy itself. "This is simply a replica of the school," Rias explained. "It acts as the board for our game with our clubroom being our side, while the new school building is Riser's side. The gymnasium is acting as the center of the board, and so are the patch of school grounds parallel to it. How do you want to go about this, but you?" Kiba asked, summoning a basic sword with his sacred gear. "I want Kaneko and Issei to head for the gym, meet with any of the pawns Riser will send and take them out quickly. Kiba, you and Akeno will take the sports track next to the gym, heading around towards the new school building." "They all know what about me and Naruto-san?" Asia asked nervously. "Asia, y'all stay with me, we'll head to the other side, so that we all cross the halfway mark at relatively the same pace. And Naruto," she turned to the mute blonde, "think you can go as scenic route?" He smirked at what she was implying, nodding once in determination. She nodded back and turned to the others. "Alright then, let's get going." Surziches sat with his wife and son Milikas, Rias' friend rival Sona Citri, and his fellow Satan, Seraphol Leviathan. Seraphol was a beautiful devil who had the appearance of a young woman in her late teens, save for the larger than normal breasts. She wore an outfit that a magical girl from television and manga would wear, complete with a staff meant to banish evil or something of a similar nature. Like Sona, she had black hair and stunning violet eyes that were watching the rating game attentively. "So Tan, be sure to pay attention to Ria Tan, okay?" she asked her younger sister with a smile. One thing that many people saw right away whenever Seraphol was around Sona was that she had quite the sister complex for the younger woman. Some even compared it to the complex Surziches had for Rias. "I know, sister," Sona sighed out, feeling on the fence about her current placement. On one hand, she wanted to support Rias and study how she handled a rating game, in case they ever matched up in the future. On the other hand, she could only handle so much of her older sister and her quirks. "Who are the two people with blonde hair Rias Tan has with her?" Surziches asked his wife, having met all of Rias' peerage before, save for Asia and Naruto. "The young lady is Asia Argento, the nun Haidu and spearheaded in rescuing that I spoke to you about. She possesses the sacred gear called Twilight Healing." Grayfia answered diligently. Rias reincarnated her as a bishop piece. Fitting considering her sacred gear, Surziches noted, "To think my baby sister would get a nun in her peerage. There are firsts for everything, I suppose." As for the young man, Grayfia continued, fighting a twitch of her lips, "Hess the one who accepted being the one to test the probationary piece that you had Lord Beelzebub create. Rias informed me that his name was Naruto Uzumaki." "Naruto Uzumaki, eh?" The Satan repeated with a chuckle, sounds like his parents were some serious ramen fans. His joke was met with Grayfia tugging at his cheek, her pointer finger and thumb pinching the skin for a firm grip. "Lord Surziches, I'm sure many would find your humor to be in poor taste, especially with such a dedicated young man." Okay. He'll watch my mouth, I promise," pleaded the man, pitiful waterfall tears streaming down his cheeks. Once his mother let go of his father's cheek and backed off, young Milikas innocently asked his father, "Daddy, why did mama do that to you?" "Because your father needs to learn not to behave like a child, considering his position in the netherworld, dear," Grayfia answered for Surziches. "What your mother said," the current Lucifer confirmed defeatedly, much to the amusement of Seraphol. "Kaneko, a little help," Issei called as he rolled away from a pair of lowly twins wielding chainsaws of all things. "Busy," she called back, carrying a section of gym bleachers as a makeshift club that she swung against another pair of twins, these ones being Nekomata in comparison to her Nekishima. "So, we face the blight on our sister race, eh?" "Nigh," the redeeded twin hissed out, prompting Kaneko's amber eyes to gain a hard look in them. Shifting her grip, she hurled the bleachers like a war spear, before using her enhanced rook strength to leap high into the air. The twins leapt back from the throne seating just as she planned, moving right to where she was going to land. They couldn't even scream before she was upon them with a punch that shook the gymnasium with its force. Nai had been knocked out instantly while Lee was barely conscious. Kaneko continued her attack by roughly gripping the brunette's hair and hurling her full force at the chainsaw twins. Issei saw the flying pawn pawn and wisely got out of the impact zone while adding his third consecutive boost to his sacred gear. 4 of Lord Riser's pawns have been eliminated. The judge, one that had been handpicked by both the Gremory and Phoenix House, announced. Grafia would been the announcer, but she requested to decline so that she could spend more time with her son, something that both houses respected. Back on the board, Akeno and Kiba were confronting the 2 knights of Riser's Peerage, Carloman and Cirrus. Carloman, taking her role as a knight quite seriously, declared one-on-one combat against her opposing knight, which Kiba accepted. Now, both blonde knights were taking part in a high-speed duel of blades where neither of them let up. Carloman had the slight advantage because of her armor versus Kiba's school uniform, but it also came at a disadvantage. Sword birth. Noble rapier, Kiba declared, using his power to call forth a weapon with a needle-like blade that was incredibly light. This only enhanced his speedy assault, and his clothes did nothing to restrict his movements, unlike Carloman and her armor. Damn it, she cursed as she received cuts to vital parts that her armor couldn't fully protect, namely her legs, which crippled her speed. She was forced to a knee after a well-placed laceration to her Achilles tendon, and the feel of a thin blade beneath her cheek made her look up to see her victorious opponent. "You have won, my fellow knight," she spoke with nobility fit for knights of old. With her submission, she was removed from the game, and Riser was declared losing another piece. Not even a minute after, it was announced that his second knight was defeated, and Kiba looked behind him to see Akeno walking over to him without so much as a dirt stain on her clothes. "Enjoy yourself, senpai," Kiba asked with an awkward smile, never having fully gotten used to the sadistic nature of his superior. "Not as much as I would like, I'm afraid," she replied wistfully. "Oh, woe is a queen such as I who cannot find enjoyment in a raiding game." The sweat dropped at her antics. Well, I'm sure that you can find a more enjoyable time facing Riser's queen," he suggested with a strained smile. That made Akeno smirk, lightly licking her lips. "Ara the bomb queen, eh? We'll just have to see, won't we?" And with that, she continued onward with Kiba behind her for support. 4 pawns stared at the redeeted king that their master was fighting to claim, and a blonde woman dressed in clergy clothing. However, they were not in a position to fight, said King, since they weren't in range of promotion. Their situation grew direr when they saw Rias casually raise up both arms and produce twin spheres of destruction in her palms. "Mercy?" Mira pleaded. With a smile befitting her devil race, Rias answered with a simple no before she launched both spheres that raced towards the pawns and eliminated them without hesitation. She nodded in satisfaction before she sensed a spike in power and turned to fire another destruction sphere, disintegrating a massive tree that had been launched at Asia for a sneak attack. "Damn it," a voice spoke up as 2 women strolled forward. "I thought I had her," she finished with a pout, crossing her arms beneath her bosom that was accentuated by her blue cheongsam. "Focus, Shulin," a brunette, one with red hair mixed in and a mask covering the right half of her face, admonished. "Lord Riser told us to do everything we can to stop his fiancée." "Yeah, I know that, Isabella," Shulin fired back in annoyance. "You act as if I never pay attention." "If you two are done arguing," Rias spoke up calmly, "you should know that your king will never be called anything by me except for scum." The insult to their master made the 2 rooks bristle, and Shulin charged first with Isabella behind her. Rias prepared to meet their charge, but it was unneeded when Issei came barreling through the window with his armored fist pulled back for a punch. She rose a brow at how it was far faster than his maximum speed before she spotted Kaneko making her way out the window he flew through. "Ah, she must have thrown him to up his speed," she mused before smirking, which means. Turning back to where he flew, Riser's rooks leapt away just as Issei's fist impacted the ground, cratering it deeply with the power of his boosts, and Kaneko's added throw. Shulin looked surprised at the power, while Isabella narrowed her visible eye. Where the hell did he get that strength? Did he promote? Isabella spotted Kaneko stand beside Rias while Issei stood in front of the 3 women. "I don't think so," she spoke up, "that shorter girl is a rook like us." "And that explains." Shulin pressed. She threw him to raise his momentum, which transferred to the ground. "That's it. Back with Rias group," Issei called back, "but you and Asia-chan keep moving, Kaneko-chan and I will handle them." Rias looked to her rook, who gave a single nod before standing beside Issei and tightening her gloves. "Alright, we'll leave it to you, let's go, Asia," Rias replied. Asia looked at Issei in worry, and he responded with a determined smile, "It'll be fine, Kaneko-chan has my back, after all." The bishop turned to the Nekishim, who just nodded once more before refocusing on the opposing rooks. That was enough for Asia to understand, and she followed her king while calling back, "Please be careful." Issei heard her, but he couldn't take his eyes off his opponents in case they initiated another exchange. Instead, he quietly activated his 4th boost and shifted his body to get used to the increased energy flowing within. "I still find it ironic that someone of the church can feel right at home with a group of devils," a voice spoke in his head, while the gem on his gauntlet gave a brief glow. Asia-chan wanted friends more than anything, and that's what we are to her. "Men, how far are you willing to go for those friends?" I'd do anything for them because they've done so much for me, he answered truthfully, sharing a sidelong look with Kaneko before they both took the initiative and charged Riser's rooks. Kaneko leapt halfway through her charge and aimed a punch at the ground to send a tremor forward, hoping to catch the others off balance. Issei had practiced this maneuver with her a few times to get used to the shifting ground, and his charge wasn't jostled at all as he neared Shulin. The Chinese-dressed girl slipped slightly as she tried to meet Issei's punch with one of her own, misdirecting her attack to hit Heir, while Issei crouched low and landed a heavy blow to her midsection. He then quickly rolled away from an axe kick that Isabella attempted, having leapt into the air as Kaneko descended to avoid the tremor. She then grabbed some loosened earth and chucked it at the pawn, who shattered it with a straight punch. But that was what Isabella wanted, appearing through the broken chunk of rock and dirt with a spear kick that struck his chest and sent him hurtling back. He slid to a stop on the ground and coughed out a glob of blood, the kick having cracked some of his ribs and nicking his lung. Shit, he groaned out, forcing himself to a knee. That's rook strength for you. He absently noted that Kaneko had ripped out a tree and was using it as a bat, taking a swing that missed Isabella, but barely hit Shulin, who had just recovered from Issei's earlier blow. Looks like you could use some help, the voice spoke up once more. You offering? Issei fired back, getting to his feet with his unarmored hand gently pressing against his chest. They'll let you in on an attack that can end this, but you need an opening and a straight shot between you and them. I'll explain it while you and the kitten make it happen. Deciding to go along with it, Issei took a breath to try and push back the pain, before he rushed in to help his friend. But Naruto, he was gliding above everyone on his air platform, keeping an eye on things from the air. While he couldn't see what was happening in the gymnasium, he heard the announcements and was happy that Issei and Kaneko were fine. Not long after, he heard about Kiba's victory, before he caught a brilliant flash and Akeno's victory was announced, that made 6 pieces taken from Riser, while none of his friends were eliminated. When he heard about Riser losing the rest of his pawns, he looked down to see Rias, Asia, Issei, and Kaneko facing down 2 more of Riser's pieces. Based on the pieces he lost, and at how there were no earlier signs of magic being used, Naruto deduced that these 2 women were rooks. He watched Rias and Asia leave Issei and Kaneko to deal with them and observed the matchup, impressed with Issei's growth and cringing at the hit he took afterwards, while he got back on his feet. Kaneko was double-teamed by Riser's rooks, and he decided to intervene. Holding up his palms, he gathered wind and shaped them into twin chakrams that he slammed together and merged into a larger one. During the merge, it changed shape into a 4-pointed star that he found himself vaguely familiar with, wincing as images raced across his mind. A younger version of himself, dressed in an orange tracksuit, had been kicked away by a tall man wielding a massive sword. As he skidded back across the ground, he reached into his pack and tossed some folded metal at a teenager with black hair dressed in blue and white. The black-haired teen caught the metal and unfurled it, revealing a 4-bladed throwing weapon that he hurled at the swordsman with all of his might. As the weapon flew, he called out, "Demon Wind Shuriken." Naruto mentally cried as he, much like the teen in his vision, hurled the wind-based weapon at Riser's rooks below. He wanted to see if he had helped his friends, but approaching heat caught his attention, and he had his platform descend rapidly to avoid a fireball that had been launched at him. "I missed," a young woman cursed. She had black hair and light brown eyes, while her kimono was intricately colored with a mix of purple, orange, and pink. Beside her was a familiar blonde woman with dark blue eyes. She wore a pink dress with white frills and a magenta bow in the front. Her hair was styled in twin tails that had drilling ends that Naruto found to be rather unique. However, he was more worried about the flaming wings that protruded from her back as she floated before him. "So," the kimono-wearing bishop continued, "you're the one who cut off Lord Riser's hand during that meeting over a week ago, yes?" He nodded. "I will give you one chance to apologize for that attack on my master, and I promise your defeat will be quick and painless." He frowned and shook his head, making her frown back. "And why not?" He reached into his shirt pocket and prepared to write his response, only to have to evade another fireball from the bishop that forced him to drop his notepad. "I won't have you writing down any runes to attack us with." Mihi yelled out, preparing another fire spell. She stopped when she saw Naruto wave his hands at her, before making gestures with them that she couldn't understand. "Are you trying to annoy me? Because you're succeeding." Ravel didn't say anything in response to her fellow bishop's growing ire, instead recalling lessons she had received when she was younger. While it was true that devils could speak any language, sign language was not a spoken language. This was an exception to them, and it was a language that they needed to study and learn like humans do naturally. She was fortunate enough to have learned from her mother, so she was able to decipher what it was that her fellow blonde was saying to them. "Mihi, relax," she finally spoke up. "Hess not trying to annoy you, Hess using sign language." "Sign language? What, is he mute or something?" she asked, still annoyed at how he cold been insulting her. Naruto nodded at the query, deciding to be polite and introduce himself. He slowly signed out his name before pointing to himself, while Ravel translated, "Naruto Uzumaki." she repeated, earning a nod while he gave her a polite bow. While his mother tended to ignore most customs and treat everyone equally, his father had instilled in him a measure of manners that he had memorized. While he didn't like them like his mother, he knew that they were needed in certain situations, like trying to calm down an angry devil woman who misunderstood what he was trying to say. Unknown to him, his introduction to Ravel had been highlighted on the viewing screen, and someone from his past had witnessed it. Violet's eyes widened at what she had just witnessed, focusing on the whiskered blonde on the screen. That boy looked just like. But it couldn't be him, right? He was killed with his family, she was sure of it, she had wept because of it. And he was part of Ria's peerage. When did that happen? As she cupped her hands over her mouth, her breathing started to pick up and tears stung her eyes. He was alive. Her young maestro, she could hardly believe it. Heir? A red-headed man who looked like a slightly older Surziches spoke up in concern. She didn't hear him, too lost in her thoughts. How long had it been since she had seen him? The last time they'd been together was years ago, and he was such a cute little thing back then. Looking at the images, he made sign language gestures to that Phoenix girl. She couldn't help but sob joyously. She thought he was dead. Oh, being wrong never felt so wonderful. Venelana. The man, Zeodicus, tried again, but he was again unsuccessful. Had grown so well and he had aerokinesis. Where did that power come from? What did it matter? He was alive. Oh, by all things holy and damned alike, if she'd known he was still alive before now, things would have been different. She shook all over and then bolted to her feet. She had to see him again in person. First thing, as soon as this raiding game was over, she had to go see him. She had to see if he remembered her, had to let him know she hadn't meant to leave him alone after that living nightmare of a day. She had to let him know she still cared for him. Her poor little maestro. If only he had known how to use the summoning contract back then. As she took off, Zeodicus ran after her in worry, following her to his wife's personal study. He watched as she looked through her albums, desperately looking for one in particular that he couldn't see. He saw her perk up and pull out a familiar album of those whom she had contracts with. It was a hobby of hers that he found adorable and had teased her about. In it were all her contracts, some old and some new, but none left out. He watched as she flipped through it, saw the one she was looking for, one that could been mistaken for a family photo. Looking over her shoulder, he recognized it as a photo of his wife with 4 humans. He couldn't remember what their names were, but the little boy with whiskered cheeks was definitely familiar, for it was the young man on Ria's peerage. I thought he was dead, he heard Venelana choke out, some tears falling onto the laminated picture. His father had signed a contract with me years ago, and he had asked me to help watch over his son and teach him a few things. He had just lost his wife, and he was lost emotionally and parentally. Zeodicus wrapped an arm around his wife, holding her close to him so he could comfort her. He was such a sweet boy, she continued. He practiced so many different instruments for hours, and it wasn't until Minato-san told me why that I found out his wife had siren blood. Siren? Zeodicus repeated in slight surprise, but they're one of the most reclusive races. Ishina-san, his mother, left her clan to be with Minato-san, Venelana explained. Naruto-kun would had her gifts if he didn't blow out his vocal cords on the night he was born. Minato-san told me that Naruto-kun practiced every day so that he could keep some link between himself and his mother. After he and his family were killed, I had assumed that Naruto was dead too. He filled in the blanks, realizing what had made his wife act this way, and seeing him today brought back all these memories and emotions. I remember you wouldn't let Rias go for hours after you came back one day. Was it the day his family died? She nodded, yes, but now, I know he's alive. She turned around to face him, her misty eyes gazing deeply into his own. I need to see him, dear, after our daughter's rating game, win or lose, I need to see him. He rested a hand against her cheek, thumbing away a tear gently with a warm smile. You will, my love, it'll help make it happen. Back with Issei and Kaneko, the pawn had recuperated enough to try and assist his partner Rook by taking on Shulin, while the Nekishim took on Isabella. That was easier said than done, considering how she had trained in a certain style for years, while he had only trained seriously for 10 days. Duck. He complied, wincing at his aching ribs before trying to punch the girl. She redirected the punch and moved away from him, resuming her stance as he got back to his feet. Damn it, I need a distraction. As if the universe answered his call, he saw Isabella get kicked by Kaneko and tumble into Shulin, both of them landing in a heap just in time for sharp discs made of razor wind to land beside them before dispersing. The wind blades had cut into their sides enough for a steady outflow of blood, forcing them to hold a hand to their new wounds while they looked around for the culprit. Issei blinked at the lucky break before he shook off his surprise and pulled his arm back, punching it forward. He unleashed a burst of raw energy with a roar of dragon shot. The energy blasted from his extended fist, racing forward as the tip of it took the shape of a dragon's head with its jaws wide. It was upon them in nearly an instant, clamping its jaws down on them as the energy exploded in a massive cloud of dust and smoke. Lord Riser's 2 rooks have been eliminated. Ravel's eyes widened at that, and she looked down to where her fellow pieces were. Mihi looked too, concerned for her comrades, and trying to figure out how in the netherworld they were both eliminated at once. Mihi, go check the situation, Ravel ordered. But, Milady. She tried to argue. Oh? He'll keep our guest occupied. Mihi looked ready to argue again, but she stopped herself and listened to her master's younger sibling, giving Naruto a warning glare. She flew down towards Issei and Kaneko. Naruto made to follow her, knowing that she could catch his friends by surprise. Ravel saw him attempt to go help Rias pieces, narrowing her eyes before she summoned 2 magical arrays in her palms. The first held her family crest, while the second had the universal symbol for restraint. Launching them skyward, she created a box-like confined space that gained purple walls and gave off great heat. Naruto was barely able to halt his movement, stopping himself from slamming into the wall before him. He turned to Ravel, who crossed her arms beneath her budding chest. Sorry, but I can't let you help them, she stated firmly. This is between us, Naruto-san. But the reverse barrier formed, and Mihi leaving to confront the enemy unimpeded. Ravel took a breath to compose herself before performing a noble curtsy. The gesture caught Naruto off guard, enough for him not to do anything to try and break the barrier. Knowing that she had his attention, she addressed her fellow blonde. My name is Ravel Phoenix, daughter of Lord and Lady Phoenix, and as much as my duties to the peerage impart of dictate I must be your opponent, I would like to apologize first and foremost to you on behalf of the Phoenix family. You want to apologize before we even start fighting? Naruto signed with a deadpan expression. Sheesh, he heard Five speak up from within his head. Overconfidence must have really run in the Phoenix family. Not that, I mean for what happened over a week ago when you cut off Riser's hand. As much as I don't like it, my brother did ask for it, insulting someone's family, threatening their friend's Thier's pride, and then Thier's going out of your way to be callous. Riser crossed that line. As a member of the House of Phoenix, I apologize for the audacity shown to you by a member of our family. Naruto frowned, so that was what she was apologizing for. He let out a deep sigh and signed his response to that. I can't accept that from you. That made her stop short. Excuse me? She asked, slightly stunned. I understand that you have every right and reason to be angry, but can you at least understand that Riser doesn't represent the views of our entire Hui? Ravel started to say, but Naruto cut her off with a raised hand. Let me finish. Well, I do understand how and why you want to apologize. I can't accept it from you, since you and the Phoenix family did nothing to need to apologize to me for. Riser was the one who did, so there is no point in blaming the whole for the misdeeds of a single part. That's why I can't accept it. There isn't any need for you to shoulder the responsibility, because Hess an asshole. Ravel jerked back in slight surprise, before she smiled with the radiance of a bonfire at that. I see, you've drawn a line between the House of Phoenix members and Riser, since you hold him solely accountable for his actions. I thank you for that, and in all due honesty, you are correct about my brother. Even my father, my mother, and my other 2 older brothers find themselves frustrated with Riser. He is far too condescending and refuses to accept that the Phoenix family and our abilities are not absolute. Naruto rolled his eyes. Why did it not surprise him? Because Hess a pretentious prick. The Intoners all asked at once, earning a mental chuckle from him. Well, now that we've dealt with that concern, shall we get started? She invited, as if the matchup between herself and him were a formal event. Naruto narrowed his eyes and unstrapped his guitar, holding it in front of him as his eyes bled green. He said nothing as she took her own stance, fire dancing in her right hand between the fingers. Strange choice of weapon to bring to a rating game, she commented before she unleashed an arc of flames that he glided around. Are you going to try and appeal to my musical side? She continued in jest, letting off a volley of thunderbolts. He simply smirked at her joke, gathering wind in his hand before strumming the guitar with force, lighting up the runes on it and emitting a sound wave that repelled the lightning and sent it scattering into the barrier walls. He then began to play a series of complicated notes that gave off the feeling a rock solo, sending out concussive bursts of wind and sound that rippled across the air as they raced towards her. Her eyes widened at the unexpected attack, using her own control of wind to redirect the blasts. In the clear, she turned with more fire on hand before she yelled and flew upward to avoid a wind spear that had been thrust at her, held tightly in Naruto's hand. He released it as he turned around, having the tip point at her like a massive arrow, before he strummed the guitar once more, firing it like a ballistic bolt that cut through the air at her. She narrowed her eyes and created a flaming javelin that she hurled at the wind bolt, sending her own burst of wind to enhance her flames and increase the speed of her javelin. She then folded her wings in front of her, cupping her hands around the tips to produce a steadily growing sphere of white hot fire. Looking away from her work for a moment, she smirked when she saw her fire javelin take on the wind bolt, grow larger from its wind, and continue racing towards her opponent. S got impressive control over wind, she mentally praised, But the House of Phoenix are masters of fire and wind, he won't win. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the incoming javelin, grasping the guitar by its neck before hurling it at the inferno. He watched sadly as the musical instrument impacted with the fire, lighting up more runes before being engulfed in a massive explosion that dispelled the flames, so he won't be engulfed. Through the smoke, he saw Ravel holding her arms up as a house-sized ball of fire floated above her. His green eyes widened at that, feeling the heat from his positions yards away. "This is it, Naruto-san." He heard Ravel call out to him, "This is my strongest fireball. I doubt y'all be able to survive, so I'll say right now that I'm impressed. I wish I could had someone like you in my future peerage." His expression turned blank as he raised a hand to his face, covering his eyes from her point of view. In a single swipe, he tore his hand away and revealed his sacred gear to the masses. It took on the form of pure white headphones that looked futuristic in style and fully covered his ears. On the outsides of them, there looked to be ventilation that distorted the air around them, while a green holographic visor connected between the headphones in front of his eyes. The thing that stood out the most was how his eyes had turned pink, their coloration breaking through the green visor before them. From the headset, Ravel heard an unknown female voice declare, "Behold the Gail Symphony." Naruto raised his arm up, wind swirling like a typhoon in his palm before it was rained inward, taking the shape of a sphere with wind raging inside. The sphere itself was half his size, much smaller than the flaming sphere Ravel had floating above her. "Don't think that those flames of yours can stand up to a maelstrom," warned another female voice, this one different from the first. "Y'd better give it everything y've got, girl." The first warned before Naruto, without the aid of his wind platform, flew forward like a bullet. Ravel's eyes widened at his approach, throwing her arms forward to launch her attack at him. She kept her gaze locked on their impact point, sweating slightly from the amount of power she had put into her fireball. She took note of Naruto placing the wind sphere in front of him, spearheading his flight so that it would hit her fireball first. "That's insane," she mentally cried, genuinely concerned about her opponent. "He'll die before the judges can remove him from play." She wanted to warn him, to plead him to dodge, but she was rendered speechless when she saw his attack make contact with her fireball and suck it in. Yes, it was true, her flames were siphoned into Naruto's wind sphere, changing the wind from a razor green to a molten amber as its eyes grew to match what her fireball started off at. What was worse was that his charge didn't slow in the slightest, the absorbed attack heading right for her. She shrieked in shock, cocooning herself with fire that was generated from her wings before it expanded to the size of a car. Her defense stood strong, just in time for Naruto to thrust his technique at her. Through the speakers of the sacred gear, Zero declared, "Scorch style. Incinerating flare Rasengan." The resulting explosion broke through the reverse barrier, spreading throughout the board like a miasma of pure heat that raised the temperature to an almost unbearable level. The heat from the impact point was so hot that it generated a mirage of nothing before Naruto and Ravel slowly appeared, both of them practically fading into existence. Naruto's uniform was singed, the right sleeve having been burnt off up to his shoulder, while his fingers had blackened slightly at the tips. He twitched his hand, revealing that the blackened skin was merely soot that had clung to his skin. Ravel, who had taken the attack, looked worst off. Her dress was nearly incinerated from the waist up, just barely covering her modesty, while her skin had many burn marks that were healing at a steady rate. Her crossed arms were also covered in soot, but they held third-degree burns that were healing faster than her other burns, as seen by her skin regaining its natural healthy shade. She lowered her arms, only to cover her mouth as she coughed out some smoke. Her gaze slowly moved to him, her eyes wide and trembling at the fact that her opponent had challenged her strongest attack, matched it, and turned it against her. It was incomprehensible to her. How could someone have a higher mastery of wind than her house? The Phoenix were known for their fire and wind. They were unmatched in those regards. But somehow this man had proved that fact wrong. She watched as his sacred gear faded away, his pink eyes turning back to green before they changed back to his natural blue orbs. His wind platform reformed beneath his feet, carrying him over to her as he unbuttoned his shirt. She trembled in fear at what he might do, but she was caught by surprise when he offered her his school shirt, keeping his orange shirt on so that he wasn't half naked. Tentatively, she took it from him as he gave her an apologetic smile, rubbing the back of his head guiltily. "Sorry about that, I didn't realize how much of a boom that would make. You should put that on before your dress gets any more ruined." She looked down to see her barely covered breasts, blushing deeply at how she looked before quickly putting on his shirt and buttoning it. "Odd, it feels warm. I'm going to go help my friends. I'll try to keep them from going after you if you promise to stay out of the way." He turned to leave before looking over his shoulder at her once more. "Your brother may be a downright asshole, but you're a better example of a child of nobility, Ravel-san," he bid before he took off. Left alone in the air above the board, Ravel could only blush at the consideration her fellow blonde showed, despite the great power he had tapped into. Slowly, a smile formed on her face as she gripped the front of his shirt, enjoying the warmth she felt both from it and her chest. Rias finally reached the roof of the school, facing down riser with Asia safely behind her. "Not much of your peerage left," she taunted. He smirked. "My dear, you think I never anticipated this happening?" You expected your peerage to lose? She asked with a raised brow. I expected you to be strung along, being the beautiful puppet you are destined to be, he clarified for her, never losing his smirk. Did you never stop to think why Eubeluna never took to the field? Rias quickly understood what he meant, turning around just in time to hear a massive explosion before witnessing a cloud of smoke rising. Lady Rias Knight has been eliminated, the judge announced. Riser chuckled at that, regaining Rias' attention. She's my strongest piece, dear Rias. Did you really think I would send her into the game so soon? No, she was meant to pick off your peerage. Another explosion went off, and Kaneko was announced eliminated, one by one. Bastard, she growled out, readying a destruction orb. Now, my dear, is that any way to refer to your future husband? It won't be long until this farce is over with, and the marriage contract between our houses will finally be completed. The day I call you husband only exists in your dreams. She roared, firing her attack and striking him in the face. His head was blasted apart before fire reshaped it into being, showing his amusement. It's pointless, Rias, he gestured behind her with his chin, directing her attention to Eubeluna and Akeno having a battle of queens in the sky. Even if your queen defeats mine, she'll be too exhausted to be much aid to you. All you have left are her, that trembling girl behind you, that pathetic pawn, and that trash of a human who foolishly decided to help you. It'll be enough, Rias promised him, glaring hatefully at the arrogant blonde. You think so? He queried as Issei finally made it to the rooftop, standing beside Rias and in front of Asia. But you? She took out Kaneko, he grit out shamefully, having been pushed aside by the rook to avoid being eliminated alongside her. I could've done something. I should've done something. Issei-kun, Asia whispered out sadly, not liking how he was feeling. The pawn gave a fierce look at Riser, his anger growing every second he saw that arrogant smirk on his face. You won't hurt any more of my friends, you prick. Riser said nothing, turning his attention to the queens just in time to see Eubeluna finish off Akeno with a proximity explosion. While he didn't like how she nearly sacrificed herself, he knew that she had a vial of his tears for such an occasion. His smirk nearly became a grin as he saw her weakly pull them out. Ah. The bomb queen cried out in pain, a blade of sharpened wind poking out of her gut from behind. She turned weakly, blood dribbling down her lip as she glared at the whiskered blonde that had somehow gotten the drop on her. The look in his eyes, the rage she saw as they slowly changed from blue to green, sent a shiver down her spine. Wind began to swirl around his right arm, taking the shape of a bracer before he reeled back. Her eyes widened before she knew only darkness. But the heavy punch, Naruto pushed the queen off of his wind sword and sent her hurtling to the ground. She was removed from play before she impacted the ground, but he didn't care about that. He was more focused on aiming his glare at Riser, who finally dropped his smirk for his own glare. So my sister couldn't even stop you? Why, I expected her to. I have no idea, she always was weak, he stated dismissively. At any rate, I'm actually pleased you lasted this long. I still need to make you pay for daring to strike me. Naruto scoffed at that, lowering himself to the roof to stand at Rias' other side. With her in the center, Issei stood to her left, Naruto to her right, and Asia behind them all. Rias gave him a relieved smile before she resumed glaring at Riser. Well, only you and your sister remain, Riser, you can give up now, she offered, or we can force you to surrender. Funny, he fired back, his smirk returning as his flaming wings erupted with life. I was going to give you the same offer, my dear. Naruto and Issei tensed themselves for a fight before Naruto noticed how Issei looked weak on his feet. He looked back to Asia, silently gesturing to the pawn. She gave Issei a glance before her eyes widened in realization, and she nodded to Naruto. He nodded back before he used the wind to push Issei back, making him stumble and fall to the ground beside Asia, who immediately set to work healing him. But that taken care of, Naruto recalled his sacred gear as the wind picked up furiously around the replica school building. Constructs of wind formed around him, taking the shape of a spear and hunting knife that he grasped before he charged at the phoenix. As he got close, he gave a short hop to thrust his spear downward, which was dodged by Riser sidestepping it. He was led into a blast of destruction that Rias launched, revealing her wings so that she could get better angles on her opposing king. The blast removed Riser's forearm, and he let loose a wave of fire to keep them at bay as it reformed. His head jerked back after his arm was restored, the wind knife stabbing into his forehead up to the hilt with impressive force. As he staggered back, Rias removed one of his legs while Naruto tripped the other, twirling the spear before stabbing Riser in the chest. The spear stabbed through the phoenix, piercing the roof to hold him in place, while Naruto leapt away and formed a pair of chakrams. A pillar of fire erupted around Riser, and he was seen standing without a scratch in its center as it dispersed. The expression on his face was of boredom, and he ignored how most of his clothing had been burnt off during his recovery moments. He cracked his neck before regarding Rias and Naruto blandly. Is that all? He asked with a dull tone, surely you have more up your sleeves. Naruto growled silently, throwing his chakrams as a hurricane picked up around Riser, guiding the weapons in a circle that picked up speed by the second. Rias landed beside him, holding her left hand next to his right. Both of them narrowed their eyes in concentration, creating a Rasengan that was wrapped in a destruction orb. Raising their arms upward, Naruto's longer reach gave him physical contact with a combined attack, while Rias maintained a connection by means of a glowing crimson line that attached to her hand. With his free hand, Naruto collapsed a hurricane in on itself, resulting in a burst of fire, as Riser easily dismissed it with his power. But the fire blocking his point of view, he couldn't see Naruto charge at him. With the combo attack raging in his hand, the fire flickered down just in time for Riser to see Naruto before him, thrusting the orb into his face, engulfing the phoenix in a massive blast of destructive energy that spiraled outward like a drilling force, carrying Riser along for a ride. For added measure, Issei got back to his feet, rearing his fist back before punching forward and unleashing his dragon shot after the trail of destruction. When the energy blast met the traveling core, a pillar of explosive energy erupted as a cloud of smoke formed above it. Rias panted in growing exhaustion while Naruto fell to a knee, and Issei stumbled back once more, only to be supported by Asia. Thanks, he grit out. Easy now, Issei-kun, she urged him, you're still weak. Rias moved over to Naruto's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. You alright? She asked tiredly, earning a shaky thumbs up from him as he tried to catch his breath. Not even he could get through that without feeling something. He was about to agree before his wind sensory picked up and he bolted to his feet, placing himself in front of Rias as a fiery javelin pierced his back and thrust out of his chest in a spray of blood. The blow made him stagger forward, falling to a knee once more as Rias caught him. Naruto. She cried in alarm, looking over his shoulder to see an angered Riser floating in the air a few yards away. She saw that some of his injuries were healing slower than others, which would have been a good sign if she wasn't more worried about Naruto's injuries. Damn it, Riser grunted out, producing another fire javelin. I had hoped to eliminate him in an instant. I knew he'd take the blow for you, but I suppose I underestimated how hard it was to dispose of insects. Naruto coughed out a glob of blood, puddling it on the rooftop as he grit his teeth. To the surprise of everyone there, he forced himself to stand, weakly looking over his shoulder to glare at Riser with his pink eye. Naruto-san. A familiar voice cried, and everyone turned to see Ravel approaching the rooftop opposite of Riser. Her gaze was focused on Naruto and the scorched hole in his chest that she could see through. About time you showed up, Ravel, Riser called out dangerously. Where the hell were you? You're a member of my peerage, and as such, you are to be at your king's side at all times. Brother, she tried to explain, only to get a fierce look from him. You are to refer to your king by his earned title. Am I clear? She recoiled at his furious shout, whimpering quietly. She never asked to be a member of Riser's peerage, having been told to join him by her parents after Riser had convinced them to. She was meant to have her own peerage, and yet she was treated as nothing more than a filler piece. She thought that she would spend the rest of her devil career as nothing more than that filled slot, until her loss to Naruto. He had fought her fiercely, and he still showed her kindness, instead of striking her down without mercy. She had never experienced such genuine compassion before, at least, not without any ulterior motive at play. Get over here, Ravel. Riser's order broke her from her thoughts. Help me take care of this trash, and I will overlook your transgression. She looked to him before turning her gaze to the others. She saw the blonde bishop looking anxious about the whole situation, the brunette pawn being healed by her as he tried to get back to his feet, Rias' worried expression as she tried to heal Naruto, and the whiskered blonde looking ready to keel over, yet somehow standing against the odds. Making her decision, she floated over the others before landing on the roof, placing herself between her brother and Naruto. Enough, brother. This doesn't need to go on any longer. He looked livid at that. You would dare speak out against me against your king. With a roar, he summoned forth a fireball that dwarfed Ravel's strongest, growing to the same size as the school building. Ravel looked on with wide eyes at the fury her brother had, while the others were more shocked about the size and heat of the flaming orb. Meanwhile, Naruto's eyes had glazed over, and his consciousness took a dive. Resting on an altar made of stone, Naruto was surrounded by the Intoners as he tried to regain consciousness. Five gently stroked his cheek before turning to her siblings. Any ideas? She asked. We could jumpstart his healing with our power, two suggested. No, that won't work. If he had the benefits of a devil, it would have. Three shot down. What if we took temporary control of his body? Four threw in. That could work, one agreed hesitantly. Zero, what do you? She stopped herself short at the sight of their eldest sister phasing through the center stalk, making it gain glowing pink veins that ran like rivers of energy. The remaining Intoners shared a look before they nodded as one, placing their hands against the stalk to help Zero keep a stable connection. Give him hell, sis, Five muttered. It happened in a few moments. The first had Riser hurl his fireball, the next had Ravel try to weaken it by surrounding herself and the others in another barrier, and the last. Raya. A female voice roared, a pillar of brilliant pink energy erupting from Naruto's body. The pillar shattered Ravel's barrier and dispersed Riser's fireball to embers. Rias and the others, who had shielded their eyes from the flash, regained their senses to see their once fallen comrade standing tall with his blonde hair dancing in a never-ending breeze. Naruto. she asked hopefully, making him turn to look at her over his shoulder. He regarded her for a moment before scoffing, but it was a female voice that was heard from the speakers of his headset. Sorry, princess, I'm not Naruto. Her eyes widened briefly before narrowing dangerously. Who are you then? Relax, Zero fired back, smirking through Naruto's body. Just sit back. A wind sword came to life in his right hand. Shut the hell up. The wind took on a double helix formation as Zero had Naruto's left hand reach into his pocket and pull out 2 vials of clear liquid and let me have Naruto save you like the pathetic damsel you are. Rias bristled at that, but she did nothing to stop whoever was controlling Naruto. Instead, she watched as his left hand uncorked the vials and direct the liquid into the wind sword. The feeling the weapon gave off made the hairs on the back of her neck rise, and it was Asia who realized what it was first. I thought that the devil's cold to use holy water. She stuttered out, making Rias' eyes widen. There were some upsides to not gaining any of the devil benefits, Zero explained before she had Naruto turn his gaze to Riser. Hey. Asswipe. He glared at that, you would dare. Boy, Chikenshat. I'm not here to listen to you prattle on like a headless hen. She had Naruto flourish the sword before pointing the blade directly at Riser's face. I'm here to make you grovel like the worthless piece of shit you are. Riser saw Red, producing a flaming sword before charging at Naruto's body. Zero smirked, having Naruto's body float off the ground before meeting Riser's charge. In just moments, the two met in a fierce deadlock, with their swords grinding against one another. Riser was growling as he tried to overpower Naruto's body, but Zero chuckled darkly through the Gail's symphony. Hey, Chikenshat, she spoke up, using her control over the sacred gear to have the wind push them down with intense pressure, slowly increasing the gravity around them by the second. As they were forced to the ground below, she continued, I have a question for you. Grunting at the increasing pressure, Riser growled out, what pointless question would a child of trash have for me? If you really are like the bird of legend, Zero began, fading away into the wind like a mirage. Riser gasped at that, his momentum pushing him forward as the increased pressure made him fall to the ground. He tried to get up, but froze when he felt a small cut at the base of his spine. Slowly turning his head through the pressure, his trembling gaze met the stoic one of Naruto as Zero finished her question. Then you can heal from crippling shots too, right? As she finished her inquiry, she had Naruto slice through Riser's spine base, the wind making a clean cut, while the holy water within tampered with Riser's natural healing. The water also made Riser's nerves burn, with the feeling of acid being poured on them, making him give a loud wail of pure and utter agony. Zero watched on blankly, simply listening to Riser scream his head off as his regenerative fire tried to heal his wound, but was denied at every attempt. I can't feel my legs, he choked out, his eyes trembling as terror gripped his soul. I can't feel my legs. He cried to the masses witnessing the raiding game. Ignoring them, Zero had Naruto's body stomp its foot where she severed his spine, making him give another cry of agony before he forced himself to shut up as the holy water-infused sword stabbed the ground right in front of his eyes. Here's the deal, you say you surrender now, and I won't take your sight too, Zero offered, Naruto's face grinning darkly at the crippled phoenix. Honestly though, I hope you turn down the offer. You still owe my vessel a payment in blood for insulting the people he loved and lost, so, go ahead, let your pride make you stay in this game. It'll be more than happy to further cripple you until you're just a worthless sack of flesh, blood, and bone. Riser's blue eyes fearfully locked onto the gleaming pink orbs that Naruto currently had. He already knew his answer, crying out, I surrender. Waking up while knowing you were gonna be in pain isn't fun for anyone, something Naruto would attest to as he opened his bleary eyes and immediately hissed in discomfort. He tried to sit up, but his body was too exhausted and his chest felt like it was burning. Well, you were skewered by a fire spear, Force applied sheepishly, trying to lighten the mood. I remember, he answered her, looking up at the ceiling of the medical ward he was resting in. Absently, he had a hand move to where he was stabbed, not feeling the hole that had been made by the javelin. Must've already healed, me still hurts, though. Injuries like that won't be forgotten so easily. Even if they've been healed, you'll probably have some phantom pains in the future, one explained. Joy was his sarcastic response. So, what happened after I blacked out? I took control of your body, Zero answered. I wound up using our contingency plan and crippled that Chikenshat. Crippled how? Our beloved sister decided to cut the nerves in his lower spine, Two answered, sounding just a tad miffed. Well, I agree he deserved it. I'm willing to bet there will be some political backlash because of this, not to mention how it was rather obvious that you weren't the one to finish the raiding game. He frowned at that. We'll just have to wait and see what happens then. The door to the room opened, and a woman with brown hair and violet eyes walked in. She was beautiful, looking like an older version of Rias with different color schemes. She was also strangely familiar to him. She gave him a gentle smile as she took a seat in a chair that was placed next to his bed, set there for potential visitors. I'm glad you're alright, Naruto-kun, she spoke to him, earning a confused blink from the blonde. To this, her smile turned sad as her hands rested on her lap. You don't remember me, do you? He frowned, closing his eyes to think. I know that I've seen her before, but I can't remember, it must've been years ago. I'm not surprised, I only saw you for brief periods of time when your father needed a hand around the house. His eyes shot open, and he looked to her in surprise. Yes, I knew Minato-san, I had a contract with him for a few years before his death. Still shocked, he dumbly rose his hand and instinctively signed out the question, you mean like a devil contract? She nodded, yes, exactly that. It was about a year after Kushina passed. His shock sobered to a blank expression, and she fought a wince. Sorry, Minato told me how close you were to her. It was one of the reasons why he formed a contract with me. It was too much for him to raise you alone and try to maintain a job at the same time. Who are you? He signed, his expression still blank. I suppose I should done that before anything else. Venelana Gremory, Rias' mother. He tilted his head for a moment, but you look like you could be her sister, not her mother. She giggled at the perplexed expression he wore. Devils have their physical ages slowed to a crawl when they reach a certain point in their lives. Trust me, her mother. He nodded in understanding. Anyway, back to what I was saying. My contract with Minato-san had me basically look after you and care for you, kind of like a nanny. I don't remember you though, he replied, visibly looking like he was trying to recall seeing her. I remember someone visiting the house on occasion when dad would go to work. Was that you? Most likely, you mainly kept to yourself whenever I was asked to watch over you. You wouldn't do much except for homework, eating dinner, and then practice your music until it was late, and you fell asleep from exhaustion. I tried to get you to stop a couple of times, but you would drown everything out whenever you were practicing. I never understood why until I asked your father. And he told you about mom, he finished, earning a nod in confirmation. Yes, after Minato-san told me, I left you alone and just listened as you practiced, getting better every night and becoming the little maestro you are now. She smiled softly at the bashfulness he had at her praise. I'm sure Kushina-san would be happy about the man you've become, especially with everything you've gone through. He looked away at that, looking somber and unsure. Naruto-kun, Venelana whispered, reaching over to gently grab his arm. You might not think she is, but I know that any parent would be happy to see their child live through their struggles and come out of it a stronger person than when they entered. The hand moved further and cupped his cheek, gently turning his head so that he could face her. You went through all of that pain as a boy, and the person who came out is a man who is willing to put his life on the line for those he cares about. Do you know why I think Kushina would be proud of you? He slowly shook his head, his eyes growing misty as she smiled, because I'm proud of you. The sincerity in her voice and the smile she never stopped giving made him gasp silently, a memory coming back to him. He was just a child, playing the piano in his parents' home before he suddenly stopped, internally struggling before he broke down into tears. He sat before the keys, shaking as he cried before he was enveloped in warmth, a warmth that reminded him of his mother. Looking to the source, he saw a pair of violet eyes gazing at him with sympathy as they cried with him. The dam burst at that, and he clutched the source of warmth for everything it had, never wanting to feel the cold loneliness again. And then, like he had done back then, he sat himself up and ignored the pain he felt as he shared a hug with Venelana. The two of them held one another, the she-devil giving him the warmth he had desperately missed. Stepping out of the medical ward, Venelana was surprised to see a young blonde woman waiting outside. Phoenix-san, she spoke up, getting Ravel's attention. Something you need in here? She fought a blush, looking away in embarrassment. I was just checking to see how Uzumaki-sen was feeling after I used my tears on him. That got the Gremory matriarch's interest. Oh? I've been told that Phoenix tears are a valuable treasure of your family, only given to those who you trust sincerely. May I ask why you used them on Naruto-kun? Her face turned redder at the question, and at how the noblewoman was smiling at her. It was a way to express my gratitude for his actions in the raiding game. Yes, you both were just about to face one another before I left my seat. How did your match with him go? At that, Ravel slumped comically with a depressing aura radiating from her. I lost. Venelana's sweat dropped at her dramatic response. I see. Standing straight again with a sigh, Ravel explained, I had trapped him with me inside of a reverse barrier. After we spoke briefly, we fought, and he showed that he had an adept talent for wind control. I decided to get the upper hand by using my fire techniques alongside my own wind magic. Sounds about right from what I would assume, Venelana commented with a nod. Then, he activated his sacred gear, calling it the Gail's Symphony. With a giggle, the older woman mused, a fitting name for something linked to his soul. Once he activated his sacred gear, he created this wind sphere in his hand and charged at me. Well, I threw my biggest fireball at him. I still can't believe that he was able to block and absorb my flame. Before he redirected it at me, I was able to withstand most of the damage, and I was prepared for him to finish me off. But he didn't, Venelana finished with a small smile. Shaking her head, Ravel confirmed, yes, he didn't finish me. Instead, he offered me his overshirt to let me cover cover myself, since the fire nearly disintegrated the top of my dress. He then promised that he wouldn't reveal my location to Rias or the others if I stayed out of the way, saying that, here, her blush returned, I was a better example of a child of nobility. How sweet, Venelana gushed, making Ravel's blush deepen. Sounds to me like Naruto-kun made quite the impact on you. He did. No one has ever showed genuine kindness to me like he did, at least, not without some ulterior motive or hidden agenda. Uzumaki-san, he was sincere, and it made me feel this warmth I can't really describe. My sounds like Shess been smitten by his simple act of sincerity. That's why I used my tears on him. I wanted to express my gratitude for his kind words and gesture, and reward him for his valor against my brother. He took a critical blow from Riser, all to protect Rias, and he was still standing afterwards. That kind of bravery shouldn't be discredited. Venelana smiled knowingly. I see now, well, Hess resting right now, so, y'all need to wait until Hess revitalized enough for visitors. Oh, Ravel sighed out, looking depressed at her missed opportunity to speak with him. Don't worry, though, the Grimoire matriarch continued, her smile still in place. Y'all have another time to profess your kindling affection for him when Hess cognitive enough. And with that, an amused Venelana walked away and left behind a stuttering Ravel, who was desperately trying to fight back her rosy cheeks. A few hours later found the occult research club visiting Naruto, who was now able to sit upright on his bed. Rias was seated closest to him, while the others sat around his bed, or on the bed nearby in Issei and Asia's case. How are you feeling, Naruto-san? Asia asked, concern evident in her voice. If you still need some healing, I could fix you up with my sacred gear. Naruto simply smiled and waved off his fellow blonde, rubbing his chest. He gave it a few pats to show that he was alright, though internally, he winced at the phantom pain. I can't believe you were able to take a hit like that and stay standing, Issei commented, amazement in his eyes as he looked to the Uzumaki. Didn't that fire spear burn your heart or something? Naruto winced at the question, not knowing the extent of the damage taken since he had mentally blacked out and Zero had taken control. To answer Issei, he shook his head with an unsure expression, something Rias capitalized on. After you took that blow for me, she began, you drew on a large surge of power and someone was speaking to us through your sacred gear. Who was she? Instinctively, he went to sign the answer before he remembered that no one there would understand. With a silent sigh, he mimed writing on something, and Akeno perked up before fetching him a pen and some paper. He gave her a smile in thanks, missing the smirk the queen gave her king. Shess, one of the spirits that make up my sacred gear. She doesn't have a name yet, but Shess answered to Zero until I can find her a name. Within the Gail Symphony, the Intoners smiled faintly at Naruto's insistence of finding them names. It was touching, really. How was she able to take control of your body? Rias continued. I'm not sure, I'm guessing that she could do it when I'm unconscious or when I give her permission. She told me what she did to Riser to finish the rating game. He took note that the others had expressions to show they weren't particularly bothered by the outcome, save for Asia. Bless her innocent heart, I'd say that the asshole deserved it. Honestly, Issei spoke up, considering how he was treating everyone and the insults he made towards your family, he might even got off easy. Frowning, Asia cut in, an eye for an eye makes the world go blind. Issei, her expression was stern towards the young man she harbored affection for. Yes, what Riser said and did was unforgivable, but there are consequences to vengeful acts taken without thought or care. That sounds like what I was saying about you possibly being in trouble with the Phoenix House after Zero's actions. Two spoke up. Mentally nodding, Naruto wrote something else before he presented it to the others. I'll have to apologize to the Phoenix House for what happened to Riser. What? Why? Issei cried. Well, I won't be as vocal about it, Kiba spoke up. I must say that I'm just as surprised as Issei about what you're saying. Why would you need to apologize? Because I crippled a child of nobility, even though it was done in what accounts as a battle simulation, Naruto explained, frowning as he showed them his writing. He then wrote some more, they may take offense to it, and I could be in trouble politically. My family would support you, Naruto, Rias cut in, trying to get Naruto to see reason. He shook his head firmly, frowning as he wrote, I don't want to drag your family into my mess when I'm not even an official member of your peerage. But you could be, she argued softly, I mean isn't that why you offered to test the probationary piece? He did nothing to respond to that, looking thoughtfully somber as he gave an unfocused stare at the covers of his bed. Naruto. Closing his eyes, he took a breath before he looked up with an apologetic smile. Another hour had passed, and Naruto was seen sitting across from Rias at the table in her personal study. Each member of the Grimoire family had one that they used for whatever they needed. In Rias' case, it was where she held most of her manga, anime, and other collectibles from Japan and their culture, both modern and traditional. I was hoping you'd join, she said softly. I know, he wrote back, but the life of a devil isn't for me. Then why did you risk yourself and your humanity by volunteering to test the piece? If something had gone wrong, she trailed off, and the unfinished statement was clear as glass. He gave her a smile as he handed her his response. What kind of guy would I be if I didn't help someone who needed it? But you never knew of my problems until you met Riser, she noted. True, but I could tell something was troubling you and your friends, to be honest, you guys were the first people in a while to ever give me the time of day, and I didn't want to lose that. Naruto. He held up a hand as he wrote his next piece. I've lost a lot of people that I loved, Rias, and over the years, I was never able to really interact with others except for Noir. Who? She asked as she watched him write, prompting him to give a short description. She was the woman who ran the music store in Kyoto. Oh, then you came along, one of the most popular people at the academy. You came to that store by chance and said that you liked my music, going so far as to include me into your circle of friends. I was happy for the first time in a while, and I didn't want to lose that feeling. So you accepted because you were afraid we'd leave you alone, Rias guessed, earning a somber nod from him. Naruto, I wouldn't have done that to you, you were and are interesting, and you were so different from everyone else at Kyoto Academy, or even Kyoto in general. She placed her hand atop his, smiling softly at him. I wouldn't have left you alone, not after you and your music hit me so deeply. He blushed at her words, looking bashful at the compliments thrown his way. If this is what you want, Rias continued, then I won't push the offer, and I won't stop seeing you. Now, she was blushing slightly, playing with a strand of her hair. You're special to me. Looking into his eyes, she saw them convey such warmth that she couldn't look away. Instead, she leaned in and slowly closed her eyes before she softly melded her lips to his, kissing him for a few seconds before pulling away with a smile. That smile grew at his flushed face, and she fought a giggle at how cute his embarrassment looked. I'm not letting you go that easily, Naruto, she promised with a wink that made his blush grow. Naruto stood with Rias Peerage as she sat beside her parents, with the Phoenix house across from them in the lounge of the Grimmery estate. Present for the Phoenix were the family's lord and lady, Ravel who was standing beside her mother, and Riser, who was seated in a wheelchair with Ubeluna standing diligently behind him. Well, Lord Phoenix began, I suppose there's not much for us to really discuss, since the terms of the engagement were clear. Our son will no longer be set to wed your daughter, due to her victory against him. I'm sorry that our families won't be able to prosper from this attempted union, Zeodicus replied, which Lord Phoenix waved off. No need for that, we made this decision before our children could form their own identities, after all. I must say, though, Lady Phoenix spoke up, you and your peerage surprised me, Rias, she gave the whiskered blonde a discreet look as she added, some more so than others. Thank you, Lady Phoenix, Rias replied, giving a respectful inclination of her head. We've all worked hard to prepare for it, even though we won, I know that we struggled to get there. Venelana gave her daughter a small smile before she turned back to the Phoenix. Is there any way to repair Riser's damaged nerves? The newly crippled blonde clenched his fist angrily, scowling at Naruto. We're still looking for a way to do so. But you know how dangerous holy water is to us devils, it won't be easy. Naruto took this as his cue to step around the couch the Grimmerys were seated on, standing before the Phoenix family before bowing. This only made Riser fight a snarl, as he tried to burn Naruto to cinders with a glare alone. You were the one who ended the game, yes? Lady Phoenix asked, giving her daughter a sidelong glance and noting how she was fidgeting slightly. Standing straight, Naruto nodded before he raised a hand to sign. Yes, I was. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, and I'd like to offer my apologies to you and your family for what happened to your son. Are you sure about that? Lord Phoenix asked with a raised brow. You don't look like you've got anyone to back you up here. I know that, but I don't want to bring Rias and her family into a situation that I caused. It isn't fair to them after what they've done for me. Venelana kept a straight face, mentally having one of concern for the young hybrid she helped care for. I don't have much, but am willing to make up for my actions, barring servitude. We wouldn't have asked that of you, even if it was considered. However, Lady Phoenix spoke up, mentally smirking, there is a way that you could, Ravel. Nodding, the daughter of the Phoenix family got up and stood before Naruto, giving him a noble curtsy like she had done during the raiding game. Naruto-san, it is safe to assume that you live in Kyoto, yes? He nodded. I live, work, and go to the academy there. It is my wish to study abroad from the netherworld, and I find myself interested in the town Rias and Sona manage. Therefore, I'd request to join your town's academy and have you act as my guide and escort. That caught many by surprise, and Venelana was able to see the faintest of smiles on Lady Phoenix's face. Oh, so that's your game, is it? Well played, Ravel. Rias spotted the faint blush on Ravel's face, and her hands clenched atop her lap with the popping of her knuckles being muffled by her clothes. She kept a straight face, but her eyes gleamed with growing irritation, aimed towards the blonde she-devil. I know what you're up to, Ravel. Don't think he'll let you just waltz in and steal him away. Hess mine. Let it be known that devils were possessive creatures, choosing to cling to people or objects that they enjoy without any notion of sharing. It makes many wonder how harems using evil pieces work. I'm not doing this just so that you could pay us back, though, Ravel continued. I'd be willing to help you with any financial concerns that may arise during my stay with you. But him, Rias mentally roared while Akeno, who was able to notice the little quirks of her friend's growing anger, fought a giggle at her actions. Taking a moment to consider Ravel's request, Naruto eventually nodded with a polite smile. I think that'll be just fine, he signed before turning to her parents. It'll be sure to look after her and make her stay in Kuo more comfortable. Yeah, I'd best do so, Lord Phoenix replied. Also, I don't need to point out what might happen to you should anything happen to our daughter, do I? When Naruto shook his head, Lady Phoenix decided to ease up on him. Thank you for doing this, Uzumaki-san. Normally, we'd have one of our servants guide Ravel, or even request Rias to do so, but she requested for us to give this task to you. She then turned to her daughter and said, you will be allowed to remain in Kuo until you have finished a year at its academy, Ravel. After that time has elapsed, we will discuss any possible extensions of your stay. Yes, mother, Ravel replied before she turned to Naruto and curtsied again. Thank you for doing this, Uzumaki-sama. Naruto choked on his spit at the title, while Riser looked ready to lash out, but Yubaluna held him down with a pleading glance. She had been tasked by his parents to help keep Riser as calm as possible, but she knew such a task won't be easy. How did you do it? Riser spoke up, and Yubaluna cringed at her master's tone. How did someone of no noble standing manage to beat me? It shouldn't be possible. Riser. Lord Phoenix snapped, enough of this. You've already lost to him, so don't start anything when we're discussing matter of repayment. Riser looked ready to protest, but a sharp look from his mother kept him quiet, gritting his teeth and giving Naruto his nastiest glare. Her growled something to his queen, and she transported him away from everyone, her face noticeably relieved when she had cast a teleportation circle. Well, if that's all, Zeoticus announced as the two noble families stood up, I believe we're done here. Rias and her friends will be leaving after the small gala we will be hosting. You and your family are welcome to attend it at our summer home near Kuo. Well, gladly accept the invitation. Until then, Lord Gremory, Lady Gremory, Lord Phoenix bid before he and his family left. Just before they fully left, Ravel gave Naruto one last smile, before giving Rias a subtle smirk that made the retarded woman bristle as her ire for the girl peaked. My, that went much better than I expected, Venelana spoke up pleasantly, turning to her daughter and her peerage. She gave them a smile and added, thank you all very much for standing beside my daughter in this. She's developed quite the peerage with you supporting her. She's our friend, Issei spoke up plainly, stating it as if it should been obvious. Of course, we'd support her. This merely made the woman smile a bit wider before she turned to her husband. Dear, I have an idea about the gala's entertainment. While Lord Gremory looked interested, Rias caught the subtle glance her mother threw Naruto's way and smiled beautifully. Turning to him, she kept that smile, and he blushed before scratching his cheek in confusion. Why did he get the feeling that, despite denying a place as a devil, he'd be associating with them much more in the future? Humming to herself in her music store, Noir busied herself by cleaning up the display pieces of instruments and equipment that her place of business had to offer. She did so with a smile, enjoying the beautiful day the cozy city had to offer. The door chime alerted her to someone entering, and she stood up from cleaning a set of drums to address them. Welcome to. She stopped dead when she saw who it was that had entered. Cascading hair with a stunning light blue shade, amber eyes that held incredible kindness and wisdom, and a dark blue-violet dress that accentuated her natural beauty. However, what really got Noir's attention was the energy she gave off and the subtle shine her pendant gave off. Lady Azura, she whispered before quickly bowing to her, making the brunette woman wave her off. None of that, Noir, I don't need the extra attention in this city, considering whose territory it is. Azura spoke, her voice soft and beautiful. I was hoping to talk to you about Naruto, I take it. Noir guessed, earning a nod. Hess doing well, though, you should know that Hess started hanging out with the Gremory heiress and her peerage. Last I saw him, he was telling me that they were leaving the city on a club outing. That was almost 2 weeks ago. Azura sighed at that, looking worried. I was afraid this may happen when Kushina left our people to live with Minato-san. I don't blame her for wanting to be with the man she loved, but I knew it was a high possibility that she or her family would be contacted by devils. She closed her eyes and gently grasped her pendant, silently mourning the loss of one of her people. How has Naruto been? That's fine, for the most part. Meaning? Azura pressed with a faint frown. My lady, Hess mute, Noir answered in a sad whisper. Amber eyes widened in horror. For a siren, their voice was a vital part of their power and life. For one to lose that voice was comparable to an angel being cast down from heaven. Hess managing from what I've been able to see, I've been able to get close to him, and he views me as a friend. He told me that he lost it the night he was born. I see, Azura noted somberly. Is there anything our people can do? There is a way, but he'd need to take the rite of Sonata for us to have a chance. Rite of Sonata? Noir repeated. It's a sacred ritual of our people, usually reserved for those who wish to become disciples of our goddesses. However, when they were defeated by the angels and sealed away, no one found the heart to attempt the ritual anymore. They saw it as a wasted effort with the Intoners gone from the world. Noir frowned at that. It's not right what they did. No, it isn't, but events like this are sadly common. Different faiths cannot accept others as equals, and they seek to remove them and prove the providence that is their faith. A scoff of anger escaped the teal-eyed woman before she turned back to her leader. You think Naruto will succeed? That's up to him, unfortunately, Azura answered turning to leave. When you see him again, guide him to me, Noir, it's time for our lost child to return home. Naruto sat on the prepared stage of the parlor of the Gremory family summer home, looking through his notebook of musical selections, seeing as Venelana requested he take charge of the musical entertainment for the evening. The young siren hoped to make an impression on the devils and guests that would be attending the gala. Personally, he thought that this display was unnecessary, but he wouldn't deny that it was a great opportunity to show his musical talents to others. With luck, he could get them to spread the word about his nearly finished CD. He was so close, just a few more tweaks and a final song was needed for it to be complete. Here again. He heard Rias speak up, making him raise his head to meet her amused gaze. You've spent more time in here than with the rest of the club. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly while holding up his notebook with his free hand. I suppose that's a fair excuse, she relented, moving closer to him, sitting herself beside the blonde, she continued, so, mind if I see what music y'all be orchestrating tonight? To her displeasure, he shook his head and pocketed his notebook, giving her a knowing grin all the while. But the pout, she huffed and turned away. Fine then, I can wait. She chanced to look back at him, only to see him giving her an amused look. This made her cheeks flush, prompting her to get off the stage and walk off in embarrassment. On the way out, she called back, I had Graphia place your evening wear on your bed. Be sure to let her know if anything is uncomfortable with it. Be cold, let her see that he heard her, for she had already left the parlor to do Ria's things, whatever those things were. Probably be a good idea to try on those clothes now before it's too late to make any changes. 4 spoke up. I'm curious about that devil girl's taste. 5 added, let's hope she made you look good, nah. Naruto blushed at the tone 5 was using as he got to his feet and made his way to the room. Rias had generously let him stay in, while the vassals of the Gremory family used the past week to prepare for the gala. Reaching his room, Naruto took note of the tuxedo that was neatly spread across the bedsheets. To his enjoyment, there was no tie thrown in, and the undershirt was his favorite shade of orange. He closed the door to the room and started changing into the formal clothes, thankful that they were a looser fit that wouldn't restrict his movements. Had worn tuxes before, and they all limited his range of motion with his arms and legs. Finished dressing, he stood in front of the full-body mirror and took a good look at his reflection. The tux was a solid black with a very thin orange trim along the edges of the collar, matching the dark orange shirt that he wore underneath. What really impressed Naruto was how the left breast, just over his heart, had a distinct swirl symbol in the same orange shade. You sure clean up nicely, 5 complimented, her voice sultry with a barest hint of desire. And of course, that undertone flew over poor Naruto's head. However, he did give a bashful blush at the compliment. A knock at his door broke him from his observation. Uzumaki-san, may I enter? A woman's voice called, one he faintly recognized. He moved to the door and opened it, revealing Graphia on the other side. She gave him a once-over before offering a faint smile. I was under the impression that orange wasn't the best color for formal wear, but it looks oddly fitting on you, Uzumaki-san. He smiled bashfully, stepping aside to let her enter. Once inside, she beckoned him closer before checking the tux for herself. She had him turn, move his arms, and stretch upwards to inspect how it looked. There are slight areas where it looks like some additions could be made, but overall, it looks well on you. Is it comfortable? He nodded with an appreciative smile, resting the back of his head in his arms to prove his point. She nodded once, very good, now, please get out of the tux so I could make those quick fixes for you. In the meantime, how is your end coming along for the entertainment? The blonde gave her a thumbs up in response, making her roll her eyes in amusement. It reminded her of when her husband would act childishly in hopes of making her laugh. Secretly, Graphia found enjoyment when Surziches would go out of his way just for a smile or a laugh. It showed how much he cared for her, and she loved him all the more for it. You had plenty of time to practice with the other musicians, yes? A nod was his reply. Excellent. Now, if you require anyone for vocals. She expertly held back an uncomfortable look, not knowing how a mute would take this. I have some suggestions for you to look through. He shook his head in response before giving a faint smile. Holding up a hand, he signed his idea to her, which made her blink. Interesting suggestion. We'll see how it plays out tonight. Given how Venelana-sama has put you in control of this, regardless, I'll leave my suggestions here. She placed some papers on the small table next to his bed, and you can look through them if you wish. For now, I'll let you get out of the tux and return to your preparations. Naruto nodded in agreement as he watched her leave. Once the door was closed, he sighed with an air of exasperation. Opportunities or not, this gala may prove to be more trouble than it was worth. Milika's Gremory, son of Surziches and Graphia, was running through the halls of the Gremory summer home with a carefree laugh. He had broken away from his father before bumping into his aunt, who greeted him with a warm hug before offering to play a quick game of hide and seek with him. Naturally, the young devil was all for a game with his only aunt. So, he was racing through the halls in hopes of finding a place to hide. He didn't know where his aunt was, and he didn't know how fast she would find him. So, he needed to keep moving and find the perfect spot. He passed by a partially open door before stopping and backtracking. Looking inside, he saw the whiskered blonde that his mother seemed to have a good opinion of. Curious, he stepped into the room and saw that the blonde was polishing a small handheld instrument. The Uzumaki looked up from cleaning the ocarina in his hands and offered a smile to the young devil in front of him, followed by a small wave. "Hello, I'm Milika's Gremory, and Rias is my auntie. Mama said your name was Naruto Uzumaki, right?" The siren nodded at the devil child's question. "What's that?" Milikas continued, pointing to the instrument. Naruto held up a finger, silently asking the boy to give him a second. Pulling out his small notebook, he quickly wrote an answer before showing it to Milikas. "Ocarina." He read, earning a nod at the correct pronunciation. "What does it do?" Instead of writing his answer, Naruto gently shook the ocarina before holding it up to his lips and playing a couple of notes. Milikas' eyes went wide at the beautiful sound coming from the small instrument, smiling in delight. "Wow. So, it makes music." Naruto nodded. "See, can I try?" Milikas then asked nervously before being surprised when the ocarina was offered to him by the blonde siren. The child looked over the instrument in his hands for a few moments before he blew into it testingly, smiling when sound came out. He then saw the other holes in the instrument and gave Naruto a confused look. The Uzumaki gestured for him to blow again, this time directing the boy's fingers to the other openings so that he could hear the different keys of sound the ocarina produced. The two continued to play the small instrument for a few more minutes, with Naruto directing the young devil into different keys and notes. "There you are, Milikas," Rias called out, making the duo stop and look to her standing by the door. "I thought you wanted to play hide and seek, not music," she teased. The poor boy blushed in embarrassment before he felt a larger hand ruffle his hair affectionately. He turned and saw Naruto grinning at him, which made him smile back before handing the ocarina back to the mute musician. "Thanks for letting me try that, Naruto-san, it was really fun," the boy exclaimed, earning a nod from the blonde. He then turned to Rias and continued, "I better go find daddy before he gets worried again." "I'll take you to him," Rias offered, getting a nod from Milikas. "Wait outside for a second, okay?" Once he followed through with her request, she turned to the Uzumaki with a soft smile. "Thanks for keeping him entertained, Naruto-kun." He waved her off with a grin before he started to polish the ocarina again. He was caught off guard when he felt her kiss his cheek, the feathery touch making him blush as red as her hair. She giggled at his blush, feeling a slight kinship with Akeno with how fun it was to tease the siren before her. She never would thought that someone like Naruto would be the one to capture her affection so easily. But, she wasn't complaining. He was a wonderful man who looked at the world differently than others. Amazing how the loss of just one of the major senses changed worldly perceptions. Still, that didn't stop her from feeling disappointed that he refused becoming a devil. It brought up anxieties of how a potential relationship would work with their vastly differing lifespans. Deciding not to dwell on such worrying thoughts, she offered Naruto one last smile before she left the room and took her nephew back to her brother. After that, she had a gala to prepare for. And a siren to knock out with her dress. It was early in the evening when guests began arriving. Of course, one of the first to arrive was the Phoenix family. Save for Riser, Rias assumed he was still angry at his defeat and didn't come out of damage pride or something similar. She wasn't complaining. What she was wary about was how Ravel seemed to take extra steps in her attire for the gala. Her hair was in her usual drilling pigtails, and she wore a silver tiara that paired nice with her moon rose-colored dress. The dress itself had two straps and fell to her ankles, with the left side having a slit that reached her mid-thigh. Over her shoulders, she wore a silver shawl that was crocheted with an avian design, more than likely a phoenix. All in all, Rias had to admit that the phoenix girl looked lovely, which didn't sit well with her. Ravel had shown interest in a certain musician, and she didn't feel up to letting anyone butt in on their budding relationship. Still, she kept a polite facade as she greeted the Phoenix family with her parents and her peerage. The Citri family came next, and she wasn't surprised that Serafal had come alongside Sona well dressed in her magical girl attire, staff and all. More and more guests arrived, much to her silent annoyance. She enjoyed the occasional party, but Rias couldn't help thinking that this was too much. Sure, she was beyond ecstatic that she was no longer betrothed to Riser, but she didn't need a huge celebration for it. In all honesty, she would rather enjoyed having a smaller one with her friends, her peerage, her family. There was finally a break from greeting guests, and Rias seized the moment to walk off in search of Naruto. She hadn't seen him since she left with Milikas, and she hoped to stun him with her dress. It was a single strap dress that was as red as her hair, but it had golden orange highlights in the stitching, a last-minute addition she requested. She felt that it would capture Naruto's attention, since he obviously had a fondness for the color. Like with Ravel's dress, there was a slit on the left side for easier movement and for appeal, to finish off her look. She wore a silver chain that had an orange gem as its centerpiece. With any luck, she'd have his full attention for most of the evening, save for his responsibilities for entertainment. Speaking of which, Hess more than likely by the stage, she mused as she headed for the parlor. Her assumption proved correct, for she saw him silently directing some of the other musicians to their positions. While handing them musical sheets, she smiled with a faint blush at his outfit, mentally thanking Grafia for her choices concerning his tux. Stepping up to him, she gently tapped his shoulder to get his attention. The way his face lit up red when he turned and saw her made her night, and she felt a swell of pride inside at how she left him visibly awestruck. "Are you ready to perform, Naruto-kun?" she asked, snapping him out of his daze. When he bashfully smiled and nodded, she returned it before taking a step closer to smooth out the collar of his tux. "Don't be so nervous," she spoke softly, so only he would hear. "I love your music, and so will they. Just play from here." Her hand rested on his insignia, just over his heart, like you always have. His heart thrummed beneath her palm, but he still was able to give her a grateful smile for the encouragement. Remembering something his father did for his mother, Naruto gently grasped her hand and raised it up so he could place a kiss on her knuckles. The way her cheeks lit up reminded him of the success his father had with the same gesture, and he fought a chuckle when he watched Rias leave with an embarrassed blush. "Thanks, Dad," he mused, relieved that his spur-of-the-moment action worked out. Turning to the musicians, he caught them giving him teasing smiles which made him rub the back of his head bashfully. It grew when a couple of the female performers gave him appreciative glances, but he got them back into focus when he clapped his hands once and took his place at the large piano near the front of the stage. An MC chosen by Grafia then walked on the stage and approached the mic. "Good evening, everyone," she began, getting the guests to focus on her. "Tonight, we celebrate the victory of Rias Gremory and her peerage in her first official rating game. By the request of Lady Gremory, tonight's entertainment is brought to you by the surprise trump card of the young heiress, Naruto Uzumaki." She turned and waved her arm to the blonde siren, who stood up nervously and gave an anxious bow to the guests, all of whom applauded politely for the young man. "Our young maestro has personally composed some music for the night, and it is both his and the other musicians' hope that you enjoy the performance." The MC finished before walking off stage, issuing another polite round of applause before the room went silent and awaited the music to begin. "And Catch a Break" by Masashi Hamazu. The music started with some drums before Naruto came in with the piano, sliding his fingers down the keys from high to low. The guitars came in alongside him, and the music started picking up. It was a jazzy tune with Naruto's piano playing, emphasizing the beginning bars before guitars became the focus. After a while, Naruto's piano became the focus again, and many spectators were left amazed that someone so young could play and drown himself in the melody. The way his eyes closed, the way his head swayed to the beat, and the way his fingers practically danced atop the piano keys surprised them, while Rias smiled and simply watched the man she cared for play. Horns soon joined in the beat, and the tempo picked up. It was enough to get people to move to the dance floor and start enjoying themselves. Rias fought a laugh when she saw Issei turning red at Asia, excitedly pulling him along with the other guests. Those two have it bad, don't they?" "But you?" Akeno asked from beside Rias, finally making the king laugh as she nodded in agreement. And music. The music kept going, getting a bit wilder towards the end before ending, prompting a round of applause from the guests before the band moved on to the next song, Snowfall by Idealism. The piano kicked things off this time, and Rias decided to close her eyes and let the music wash over her. Much like she tried to do that night, she had Naruto play for her on the guitar. Images of snow and winter came to mind, and she saw herself standing in a white plain surrounded by dark trees, while drops of snow fell and danced in the wind around her. The tone of the song changed then, turning a tad somber as she imagined the skies turning grayer above her. When she opened her eyes, she saw that she wasn't the only one who noticed the change in tone. But she also noted how it didn't bother people. Instead, they seemed more impressed with her siren, which made her smile. Switch to Ponder by Sleepless. Not even half a minute after the end of the second song, Naruto moved on to the next with his piano keystrokes, setting a lighter mood with his next piece. This time, violins joined in the melody, and Rias saw that the musician on a harp also played some notes here and there. But the piano was the main focus once again. This song felt more free than the last, and she found herself thinking on what may come in the future, pondering on where she could go next with her life, with her friends, and with a certain blonde. And music. To Ria's surprise, Naruto stepped away from the piano and accepted a guitar that was plugged into a small amplifier. While this was happening, she noted how some children were allowed on stage and lead to microphones. Curious as to what was going to happen, she waited for the music to start. Home by Tom Misch. Soft strums of the guitar started off the song, slowly accompanied by vocalization from the children. It started off slow and steady, before it picked up with stronger guitar notes and some drum beats. Once again, Naruto's eyes were closed as he immersed himself in the music and played from his heart. He was so into this song that, when the guitar notes changed and became more inspired, he unconsciously used his sacred gear to lift him up in the air air, standing on a wind platform as he moved with the song. The platform stayed in the air until the end, slowly lowering him down onto the stage once more. End music. When he opened his eyes, the guests applauded once more for the performance. Naruto smiled bashfully at the praise before beckoning the children over to his side. He bowed to the crowd alongside them, gaining further applause before the young ones were ushered off stage. The MC walked over to the mic afterwards, while Naruto placed the guitar down and returned to the piano. What a performance so far, right? She asked, earning positive responses from the guests. Now, we'll have our maestro play you all one last song, before we let him enjoy the gala for himself, if you'd please, Mr. Uzumaki. Nodding, Naruto steepled his fingers together before stretching his arms to pop his elbows and knuckles, bringing them back in. He grinned and stretched his whisker markings before getting right to his last song. Life Goes On, feat. Anthony Jackson and Simon Phillips, by Hiromi. This song had a faster tempo than the others before it, and it also proved itself to be the longest. Naruto's piano and the drums were the main instruments for this song, yet they proved that they didn't need anything else with how invested they were in the performance. This time, Naruto didn't close his eyes as he played. Instead, he shared grins and swayed to the beat with other members of the band, getting them further into the beat and showing everyone that he could have fun with his music. As the tempo increased, his grin grew, and as the tempo slowed, the grin returned to a simple smile. The guests dancing to the music took notice of this change in the atmosphere, visibly enjoying themselves further as the music played, and their bodies swayed. To Rias' amusement, even Kaneko was tapping her foot to the music and trying to keep a stoic face, despite the small blush on her face at Rias catching her. End music. When the music finally ended, Naruto stood up as he flourished the final keys before grinning at the crowd with the other musicians, all of them basking in the applause given to them by the guests. His eyes searched the crowd, and he saw Venelana giving him a proud smile as she clapped her hands. Next to her, Zeoticus applauded Naruto's performance and gave the siren a respectful nod. Looking over more of the crowd, he saw a cute black-haired woman in an anime-styled outfit whistling with her fingers while giving him a sunny grin. When she caught his gaze, she gave him a wink that made his cheeks light up faintly. Sona, who stood beside her, gave him a respectful nod as she clapped for him. He then moved his gaze over to the Phoenix family, noting how the lord and lady had faint smiles on their faces, while Ravel smiled brightly at him. When their eyes met, her cheeks were dusted pink, and she shyly waved at him, something he returned with a polite smile of his own. He searched for his friends but caught Graphia and another red-heated man applauding him. The man looked like Rias to an extent, which made him assume it was an older relative of hers, most likely a brother. He gave Naruto a polite smile, while Graphia showed a faint smirk and inclined her head respectfully, making the blonde siren blush bashfully. He finally moved over to his friends and saw that they were all giving him supportive smiles. Even Kaneko was smirking. Akeno winked at him flirtatiously, which flew over his head as he smiled at them. It was Rias' reaction he was anxious about, and those anxieties faded when he saw her smiling beautifully at him, her eyes glistening in the light of the parlor and lighting up as they locked with his. Her lips moved, and he read "You were great," making him stand a bit taller before he and the band bowed to their audience. "Nice job, Naruto," too spoke up, and he felt a warmth from his core. "You do your race proud. Your mother would be proud, too," 5 softly added. "Maybe someday you can make some songs for us to sing," 4 suggested. "I find myself looking forward to that, actually," 1 agreed. "Well, see how it goes," 3 mused before adding, "Still, good job." Naruto mentally thanked the Intoners before he heard Zero speak up. "Later, I want to talk to you about something important. For now, enjoy yourself, Naruto." Curious and slightly worried, Naruto mentally nodded to Zero before he left the stage and headed over to his friends. He was stopped a few times by devils giving him their congratulations and compliments, which he accepted with a grateful smile. It felt great to have his efforts be appreciated. Finally breaking through the guests, he stopped in front of his friends and rubbed the back of his head bashfully. Issei spoke up first. "Nice job, man. I'm not really into music much, but you did great." "Yes, it was a lot of fun to dance to your music," Asia added shyly, still feeling happy that she danced with Issei. "Your efforts have really shown tonight, Naruto-san. It was a wonderful performance," Kiba complimented, earning a nod from Naruto. "Enjoyable," Kaneko said shortly, giving Naruto a thumbs up with a faint twitch of her lips. Naruto smiled back at her before turning red as Akeno slid into his side and held him to her. "Ara Whisker-kun played such lovely music. I only wished I cold danced with you." Rias' brow twitched at the sight before she calmly walked over and pulled Naruto away from her queen. "Hands to yourself, Akeno." "Oh, is but you worried Whisker-kun may be whisked away from her?" Another browt witch, not in the least, she blandly answered before clearing her throat and smiling at the Uzumaki. I'm sure lots of people have already said this, but good job, Naruto. I could see how much you were enjoying yourself up there, and I'm glad you could share this with everyone here. He rubbed his head sheepishly at the praise before a soft clearing of the throat made him turn to see Ravel standing behind him. Superb performance, Uzumaki-sama. I can see that you are a man of culture based on your musical talent. She curtsied politely as she added, I look forward to hearing more from you during my stay in Kuo. Rias fought a frown at the Phoenix girl's words, being reminded that she would be Naruto's houseguest during her stay. Deciding to keep Naruto away from her, Rias wrapped her arms around one of his and started leading him away from the others. Let's go meet and greet, Naruto-kun. She declared, louder than she meant to. She was not jealous, damn it. It was hours later before the only guests left were the Phoenix and Citri families. The latter were getting ready to leave and were being seen off by the Gremory party. Well, tonight was fun. Serafol declared, nice music choices, Foxy. She added, giving Naruto a wink. Naruto coughed awkwardly before signing, I'm not part Kitsune, Serafol-sama. She pouted after Sona informed her what he signed, don't use that title for me. Just call me Leviathan, or Serafol. He chuckled silently at her pouty expression, nodding in agreement to her order. She smiled at his acquiescence before doing a twirl and striking in an I'm pose. YOSH, next time you have a performance, have someone let Leviathan know, so that she could join in. Just make sure to write me a good song, Foxy. Naruto blinked at the request, his face taking on a thoughtful expression for a few moments before he offered the Satan a smile and nodded. This made her grin brighter before she surprised him with an excited glomp, pressing her soft mounds against his chest and making his face erupt into a crimson shade. Yeah. We have a deal then. She then jumped back and struck another pose before vanishing in her personal magical circle, leaving a blushing Naruto, silently fuming Rias, embarrassed Sona, and amused others. Sorry about my older sister, Sona apologized. In any case, tonight was enjoyable. Thank you for the invitation and for the entertainment. I'll be sure to see you at school. She then fixed her glasses and gave Naruto a hard stare. All of you, she emphasized. Naruto sweated nervously under her stare, giving a strained smile while crossing his fingers behind his back. She then joined her parents in their magical circle and left, allowing the Phoenix to step forward to bid their own farewell. Well, in spite of our houses no longer having a future marriage, I must say that you chose your peerage well, young Rias, Lord Phoenix complimented. Hopefully, this loss will help instill some sort of humility in our son. Rias was very tempted to say something, but she held her tongue and simply nodded politely. Lady Phoenix spoke up next, we'll be having Ravel sent to the Gremory estate soon to be escorted to Kuo. Uzumaki-san, I expect you to have a suitable place for our daughter and to look after her during her stay. Naruto nodded firmly, offering a small smile to the woman. She was hard-pressed to no return it, displaying her gratitude at his acceptance to her expectations. They then moved over to say their goodbyes to Lord and Lady Gremory, prompting Ravel to step up to the orc. I'm looking forward to seeing Kuo. I've never stayed in a human settlement for such an extended period of time, so I hope that you can show me around. Yeah, Rias blandly replied, looking forward to it. Ravel ignored the tone and gave Naruto a smile and curtsy, something he doubted he'd ever get used to. I'm especially looking forward to staying with you, Uzumaki-sama. I hope to learn from you and tell you what I know of devil culture. I'll be sure to prepare for your arrival. Ravel he returned, earning another smile from her before she joined her parents. With the last of their guests gone and the staff cleaning up the decorations and mess, the Gremory leaders transported themselves and the orc to their estate in the netherworld and allowed them to stay for the night. They had more of their vassals lead them to guest rooms to use, but Rias decided to personally lead Naruto to his, much to his embarrassment. He wasn't used to seeing this side of Rias, the possessive side. She led him through the halls, giving him a short tour of some of the rooms they passed before she stopped in front of her room. You can stay in the room across from mine, it's my study, and it has a spare bed that you can use. He nodded in understanding, noting how she wasn't meeting his gaze and was instead looking at the floor with slowly reddening cheeks. He slowly started to blush when he realized what she was hoping for, having, reluctantly, helped Jiraiya edit some of his novels enough to understand this moment. Swallowing a lump in his throat, he raised a hand to gently grasp her chin, lifting it up just as gently. He had her look up at him before he leant down and captured her lips in his. At first, her eyes widened for a moment before they glistened in happiness and closed as she wrapped her arms over his shoulders to deepen the kiss. After a few moments, they backed away just enough to see the other's blushing face. Rias smiled beautifully at him before leaning against him, resting her head against his taller form. Thank you, Naruto-kun, she whispered. She looked up to see him looking at her questioningly. Thank you for everything, for meeting my peerage, for risking your freedom with the probation piece, for training so hard, and for helping me break off this this stupid engagement. Her smile grew as she finished, but most of all, thank you for being you, someone I admire and care about. He looked surprised at the Redeed's confession, not sure how to respond to such a heartfelt expression of gratitude. Nothing came to him, which prompted him to simply smile sheepishly before he was caught off guard by another kiss from her. When she pulled back again, she backed away into her open room and gave him one last smile. Good night, Naruto-kun. She then closed the door and left him standing there with a red face. His expression softened, and he opened his mouth. Good night, Rias. That was what he hoped to say, but instead a rough hiss came from his throat before he coughed in discomfort. After it cleared, he looked at the fist he coughed into, sadly staring at the small drops of blood that were seen on his skin. Silently, he turned to the room offered to him and stepped inside before softly closing the door. Never noticing a pair of somber violet eyes watching his failed attempt, they stared at the closed door for a few moments longer before closing and disappearing in the shadows of the hallways. Naruto smiled to himself as he finished packing his bag, standing in the middle of his room in his apartment. The orc had returned to Kuo the day before, and Rias dismissed everyone so that they could return to their homes and unwind until they meet again at school. Thankfully, it was currently Saturday, school wasn't until Monday, and Naruto planned to take full advantage of that fact, not that he was going to school for a few days longer anyways. Before he and the others had left, Venelana had pulled him to the side and handed him a few things. The first was a framed picture of his late family, minus Kushina, and the Lady Devil, when she had a contract with Naruto's father. That photo was currently hanging on the wall in his living room. The second thing was a tag with her personal magical circle on it. She informed him that he was always welcome to call her for any reason. He was thankful for that. The last thing was a slip of paper with an address on it. At first glance, the address wasn't anything special, but it meant so much to Naruto, for it was the location of his old home before Jiraiya adopted him many years ago. Naruto had never gone back out of anxiety. He didn't want old memories to smother him as he walked through his family home, but he had grown from the small boy who had lost everything dear to him. It was finally time to revisit the Uzumaki residence of Kyoto. Do you want to visit Kyoto? Rias asked in surprise as Naruto stood before her in her clubroom. Why would you want to go there? It's governed by the Imkai faction, and they aren't the best of friends with devils, or any of the other factions, really. He nodded in understanding, having prepared for her surprise and concern with a prurient response that he handed to her. He saw her curiosity as she took the paper and read it over before it returned to a surprised expression. You used to live in Kyoto? Why did you move away? Akeno asked right after her, serving them all some tea to drink. Taking a moment to write his response, Naruto answered, my godfather, Jiraiya, lived away from Kyoto, and he took me in after I lost my family. I never went back after that, and your mother didn't say anything when she gave me the address, other than to go see it. Rias was still trying to figure out why her mother even knew about that address in the first place. How do you know my mother, anyway? She looked after me on occasion when my father had a contract with her. She told me that she stopped coming because she thought it died with him and my family. I barely recognized her when she visited my recovery room after the raiding game. That leaves more questions, but for mother to answer, mused the ruined princess. I'm not sure about this, Naruto-kun. If I took you there, we could get in some serious trouble with the Imkai if they think we're coming to invade or scout. What if we landed a few miles away from the border and I went alone afterwards? I'm worried about leaving you by yourself, though, she admitted. This is important to him, but you, Akeno argued, if we don't take him, then hell just board a train. Turning to him, she clarified, right. He nodded without pause, his gaze showing his determination. Rias sighed at that. Let me get in touch with my mother really quick, she relented, leaving the room to contact the woman. Sitting in a comfortable chair in her office was a regal-looking woman with blonde hair and eyes as yellow as liquid gold. Her eyebrows were cut very short and round as a symbol of her nobility. Her hair was tied in a loose ponytail, reaching all the way down to her legs and ending in a spiral with taut bandages to keep it in place. For clothing, she wore traditional shrine maiden robes, and over that she wore a white coat held closed by a red ribbon and a golden crown. This was Yusaka, the leader of the Imkai faction, and one of the two nine-tailed kitsune that resided in Kyoto, the other being her daughter, Kunu. Currently, she was looking over some papers regarding a territorial dispute between two Imkai clans that lived in Kyoto, while one of her aides looked after her daughter. She was brought out of her thoughts concerning the dispute by a small magical circle holding a devil crest forming out of the corner of her eye. Raising one of her finely trimmed brows, she used her own power to accept the circle and heard a familiar voice speak up, Lady Yusaka, this is Venelana Gremory, I hope I haven't contacted you at a bad time. Smiling at the distraction from her work, the Imkai replied, not at all, I was actually hoping for something to take me away from this paperwork. It never seems to end, does it? Venelana asked in rhetorical amusement. Sharing a laugh with the devil woman, Yusaka asked, what were you calling for, my old friend? Do you remember that home I asked to take care of personally years ago? That rather small one that had been assaulted by those rogue clergy? The kitsune clarified. Yes, that one. I remember, and I've made sure it's been left alone. Why do you ask? There was a survivor, Venelana informed, earning surprise from the Imkai leader. He was the young hybrid that I would occasionally look after for Minato-san. I thought he had died with his family, but he was away at the time and was taken away by his godfather. I've recently reacquainted myself with him and told him to visit his old home. And, considering his current affiliation with devils, I'd like for him and whoever Hess with to be allowed entry into Kyoto, deduced Yusaka. Please. Tell me what his mixed blood was first, then I'll make my decision. His father was human while his mother was half siren and half human. Was his mother a retarded woman? Yusaka asked after a brief pause. Yes, her hair was similar to that of my husband and our children. I see. She was silent for a moment as her gaze went distant before she shook herself out of her thoughts. Very well, I'll allow it. I'm assuming you or someone you know will accompany him. They'd be more than happy to, but I'm too busy at the moment and he wanted to see the home today. My daughter, Rias, will more than likely accompany him along with her friend, Akeno Himejima. I understand. Tell your daughter that only she and her friend may accompany him. What is his name? Naruto Uzumaki, son of Kushina Uzumaki. Sounds right so far, my love. Is this the one you told me of? Yusaka mused. I'll let someone know to meet them at the southern border. Thank you, Lady Yusaka, Venelana bid before ending the call. Silence ruled the office while Yusaka's thoughts drifted to her old mate. Kurikun, I hope this is the Naruto you told me of, the one you said was your friend. 1. The hour good to go, dear, Venelana informed Rias. Lady Yusaka will only allow for Naruto, you, and Akeno to go, however. That's fine, thanks, Mom, Rias bid before ending the call. Well then, shall we? Naruto nodded with an eager smile while Akeno moved to stand next to him. Rias stood on his other side as she summoned her magic circle and focused on the southern border of Kyoto. In a flash of red, the trio were gone from the clubroom. Witnessing a red magic circle appearing followed by a trio of strangers was a servant of Yusaka, a one-tailed kitsune named Selkie. 2. She had been tasked to await the arrival of an Imkai hybrid and a pair of devil girls to be escorted to a random to her section of the city. She easily smelled the devil scent coming off the girls, and the lone male nearly made her recoil at the sight of his whiskers, but the lack of kitsune scent eased her. Giving a respectful bow, she greeted, "Welcome to Kyoto, visitors. My name is Selkie, and I've been tasked to act as your escort through the city. If y'all follow me, I'll guide you to the section Lady Yusaka informed me of." Thank you very much, Selkie-san, Rias replied, taking the lead with Naruto and Akeno trailing behind as they followed the kitsune girl. They started by passing through a massive bazaar that spanned a few streets and was inhabited by both Imkai and humans that lived peacefully in Kyoto. Naruto smiled at the warm atmosphere, feeling a sense of nostalgia that he believed was from his childhood memories, vague as they were of this place. It seemed to him that most of his memories were clearest when they involved his family, not about other things like his old hometown. It saddened him, since this place felt so inviting to him, making him wonder what would have happened if he had stayed and Jiraiya hadn't taken him away. The delectable smell brought him from his thoughts, and it made his stomach growl in anticipation. Recognizing the scent, he noticed that it drifted from a humble little stand that had curtains covering the patrons from sight. For privacy, of course, breaking from the others, he headed over to the stand without looking to see that they had stopped to see what he was up to. Entering from the curtains, he saw a man barely into his middle ages with a bald head but full and trimmed beard, calmly stirring a pot of tantalizing broth while adding in freshly made noodles and some cleanly cut meats. The man noticed him and smiled warmly. "Welcome to Kyoto, Ramen, young man, what do you have?" Naruto grabbed a menu and browsed it before turning it around and pointing to his selection. "Liza Ramen, huh? Not a problem, just have a seat and we'll bring it out in a moment." Accepting the offer, Naruto sat down on one of the stools and waited for his food, with Rias and Akeno sitting on either side of him, while Selkie chose to wait outside for them. The trio noticed a girl a few years older than them walk out from the kitchen, while expertly balancing a few bowls of ramen on her arms and head. She had brown hair and gray eyes like the man who took Naruto's order, except she also had a pair of brown feline ears on her head and a single tail poking out from behind her. The tail itself was even expertly carrying a bowl of ramen. Her eyes also had a slightly narrowed pupil like a cat's, making the trio deduce she was a Nekomata, possibly a hybrid on her mother's side since the apparent father looked human. "Orders up," she declared brightly, serving the other patrons with smooth precision as she slid the bowls across the counter, each one coming to a clean stop in front of their respective owner without spilling a drop. She smiled at her success and at the warm gratitude the patrons gave her before heading back to the kitchen, giving Naruto a friendly wave when she noticed him. "Welcome to our humble stand." He smiled and waved back, enjoying the atmosphere and delicious smells the ramen stand gave off. When the waitress came back, she set a bowl in front of him and gave him another smile, this one slightly showing her sharp canines. "Order up. Go on and try it." she urged, standing back and waiting for him to taste the meal. Naruto broke his chopsticks and took a quick sniff of his ramen, already eager to take his first bite, grabbing some noodles. He brought them to his mouth and slurped them up, chewing them slowly to savor the taste before swallowing with a content sigh. Looking back to the waitress, he gave her a grin so large that his eyes closed on instinct, and his whisker markings stretched to resemble the kitsune race he was so often mistaken for. She nodded once, as if knowing from the start that he would enjoy their ramen. That's good to see, not a single customer has visited our stand and left unsatisfied. We take pride in our food, and we share that pride with every person who comes for a bowl. The other patrons gave a resounding cry of support, making her giggle and wave them off with a small blush before she offered her hand to the blonde siren. "I'm Mickey, and my father's name Tenzin," she introduced, sharing a handshake with him. "What's your name?" Quickly pulling out his notepad and pen, he wrote his name and the names of his friends, making sure to point to each name and their respective owner for the waitress. "Nice to meet you all," she replied after being informed of who they were. "We've actually had a couple of Uzumaki stop by here when they were passing through. They were big spenders here, devouring a good chunk of our inventory, right, Dad?" "Oh, you won't believe how quickly we lost that inventory," Tenzin supported, his voice carrying from the kitchen, surprised that you're only sticking to one bowl, though, you sure you're in Uzumaki? Naruto gave a mute laugh at the teasing, nodding to say he was in Uzumaki. "We're actually being escorted by someone Lady Asaka provided for us," Rias informed the two cooks. "We don't want to keep them waiting for too long." "Lady Asaka, huh?" Ikki repeated, taking empty bowls to be washed. "You three must know some important people together to provide an escort, let alone let you in the city." Rias and Akeno knew that she was talking about them specifically, once again being reminded how much distrust between factions affects how they interact or deal with each other. Having finished and enjoyed his meal, Naruto left money for his food and gave the two chefs a respectful nod before he and the girls left the stand. Selkie smiled at him as they approached her. "Enjoy your meal?" she asked, earning a grin from Naruto. "Good, this stand has been around for a while now, but they refuse to upgrade from a stand to a full restaurant. No one has been able to figure out why." With a shrug, she beckoned them to follow as she resumed guiding them to their destination. From the bazaar section, they moved to a more residential area of Kyoto with humble homes, some of them being stacked atop one another. No one seemed bothered by their living conditions, and the trio saw that neighbors weren't afraid to stop what they were doing to assist one another. Seen by a young monkey Imkai stopping his chores to help an elderly Kappa with her purchased groceries. "Here we are," Selkie declared, showing them a simple-looking home. The building was one story, but a large window was seen where an attic would be, showing a possible room that had been added during a renovation. The outside was colored a dull red, while the roof was a dark brown. The front door and the borders for the windows were both colored a dark yellow shade, though the upper window had orange paint for its border. Rias stood beside Naruto as he looked at his old house, making sure the address matched the one her mother gave him. When it did, she pocketed the paper and gently gripped his hand, making him look at her, while she gave him a soft smile. "Welcome home," she whispered, making him blink in surprise before smiling back at her. Letting go of her hand, the blonde siren slowly approached the front door of the home and shakily gripped the knob, almost agonizingly slow. He turned the knob and pushed open the door, surprised that it wasn't locked. As if knowing what he would ask, Selkie informed him, "Lady Asaka had someone come here before us and unlock the door for you. She gave me a key to give to you should you want it." Nodding in understanding, Naruto stepped into the house and was greeted to side of the family living room. The floor was a dark brown wood, while the walls were a contrasting white color. The furniture was a dark red leather couch and recliner facing a simple television, while a familiar piano was situated in the corner. There was a set of stairs leading to the upper loft, while there were entryways for the kitchen and a hallway. Ignoring the piano for now, Naruto walked down the hall and saw a door on either side, while another rested at the very end. Opening the one on the right, he saw it was a full bathroom, while the one on the left presented a guest room, probably the one Grandma Tsunade and Shizune used when they stayed with them, which meant that the door at the end led to his parents' bedroom. Rias and Akeno decided to respect his anxiety and sat on the couch to wait for him to finish inspecting the home. Selkie took the recliner and pulled out a book and took out her placemark before reading where she left off. Approaching the door to his parents' room, he softly opened it and saw that it was pretty simple for a master bedroom, a bed big enough for both his parents with tall dressers on either side, one for Minato and one for Kushina. Obviously, there was a closed closet door and another that no doubt led to the master bathroom. The floor was a soft rug that was colored peach, while the bed covers held a slightly wavy design with dark and lighter blues coloring it. Against the wall from the bed was a simple desk, which Naruto guessed his father used, while a hanging shelf was placed above it full of books. Reaching for a random one, he saw that it was related to music from Latin America. He then saw that the spines of the other books held titles showing music inspired from other parts of the world. Classical music from old Europe, traditional African music, tribal music from the Native Americans, inspirational Chinese music, and of course Japanese. Must been mom's shelf, he mused with a smile, his eyes growing misty at the thought of her. "Are you alright, Naruto?" 2 asked in concern. "I will be, thank you. If you need someone to talk about how you are feeling," 4 began. "We're here for you," 1 finished. "For now, why don't you go upstairs? Your room should be up there," 3 deduced. Nodding in agreement, Naruto put the book he was holding back on the shelf before leaving the bedroom, making sure to close the door as gently as he opened it. He stepped out from the hallway and gave Rias and Akeno a small smile before heading up the stairs, where there was no door, and it simply opened up to a large room that spread out above the floor below. The flooring was the same. He saw his old bed, other instruments perfectly put away, a desk full of musical sheet drafts, and some toys from his childhood. It was the toy on his bed that made him give a teary chuckle. For it was a stuffed fox with fur the same shade as his walls, red eyes surrounded by black fur, and 9 tails. And I would wonder why people thought I was part kitsune, he thought in amusement, sharing a mental laugh with some of the intoners, though he knew all of them had some semblance of a smile. "So, what do you think, coming back to this place?" 5 asked him. "I honestly thought it'd be crying much sooner, or that I wouldn't have even made it to my parents' room. I guess I've grown up from my past, not fully, but it's a start. That attitude will only help you continue to grow from it," 0 told him, "and when you finally can grow from it completely, you will be stronger than you've even been before, I guarantee it." "Thanks, 0, and you all, as well, I'm glad you could see this place with me." They didn't respond to that, but he still felt some warmth from his connection to them. Satisfied with what he had seen, Naruto walked over to his bed and gently picked up his childhood toy. A smile was on his face as he ran his free hand from the head to the tails of the toy, and he turned to leave with it still in his hand. When he returned downstairs, the 2 devils saw that his smile was stronger than it was before. Though they were curious about the toy in his hand, they didn't get the chance to question it, because he moved straight for the piano and set the toy on top next to a framed photo. In the photo was a man with smooth features and spiky blonde hair that had thicker bangs that framed his face. In his arms was a beautiful red-headed woman with an almost angelic face and hair that reached below her waist. She was seated in front of the blonde man, and in her arms was a bundled baby with chubby whiskered cheeks, eyes as blue as the ocean, and hair a more brilliant shade than his father's. He was giving a toothless grin to the camera while the woman, with eyes closed and a bright grin on her face, held him close so she could rub her cheek to his in the photo. 3. Naruto held the framed picture, finally letting more tears fall as he smiled. It was their first true family photo after Kushina had recovered from her depression regarding the loss of his voice. They all looked so peaceful in the frozen image, peaceful and in a time that he couldn't go back to. Staying strong, he put the frame back on the piano and opened the key cover. He had been trying so hard to think of a final song for his CD, and seeing this place, seeing his old home, finally gave him the inspiration for a perfect final melody. Taking a breath and unaware that all 3 of the women in the room remained silent for him, Naruto began to play the song. Instrumental version of The Promise from Final Fantasy XIII. With nothing but the piano, started the melody with high to middle notes. The song started slow, but its sound gave off a blend of loss and hope that somehow worked well together. One hand started to focus on a slight repetition of the beginning notes, while the other added in some backup notes that enhanced the melody, and he steadily brought the tempo from its lower pace to a slightly faster one. This technique adding onto the hopeful vibe and slowly removing the one of loss. It was a song that was meant to act as a promise to his lost family, a promise to stay strong and to keep moving forward while never letting go of their memory. Smiling towards the end, he felt that it was a perfect title for the song. The Promise. End music. When his song ended, he gave one last look to the photo, and his smile grew more hopeful. He sent a mental prayer to his family, wherever they now were, and recovered the keys before he stood up and grabbed his old toy. Turning around, he saw that Rias and Akeno were giving him supportive glances, while Selkie was trying to hide the fact that some tears had been shed. He respected her pride and didn't give notice to it, simply holding out his hand for the keys to the house. Selkie, after wiping her eyes, reached into a pocket of her outfit and handed the siren a single key with a metal charm that held the Uzumaki swirl carved into it. She gave him a small grin and offered, "If you'd like, I'll ask Lady Asaka if I could look after this place for you. I figure you won't be back for a while, so." He nodded gratefully to her offer, moving to hand her the key before she waved him off. Milady has another key, she figured you won't stay either, and had a second one made just in case. She chuckled at his surprise. Don't be so shocked, Buster. Lady Asaka need foresight like that to continue her great work as leader of the Imkai. At any rate, I'll escort you 3 back to the southern border of Kyoto. People might act up if you use your devil magic within our territory. We appreciate it, Rias thanked as the group of 4 left the building. Naruto locked up the home and safely pocketed his new key before giving the others a smile to show he was ready. With that, they took off back to the border so that the trio could return to Kuo. Unnoticed by any of the 4, someone had watched them from atop a building with a perfect view of the home and through the window of Naruto's room. Behind a pair of glasses, gray eyes watched a blonde siren and studied him, looking closer than what any spectator would see. Slowly, a smile formed on their face face as the observer pulled out a book and wrote down a simple notation. Naruto gave a silent sigh of boredom as he sat through another class. Compared to the last month, give or take a week, school life was aggravatingly dull and monotonous. During his time away from school, he had learned to better harness his sacred gear. Fought a cute devil girl and her asshole of an older brother. Nearly died from having his chest impaled by a fire javelin. Played a musical performance for a devil Gala. Revisited his family home in Kyoto. And got closer with Rias. The last one made him blush faintly, looking to said redeeted devil from the corner of his eye. How she could have such an invested look on her face during history class was beyond him, but he couldn't deny that her eagerness to learn about Japan's history was pretty cute. She must noticed him looking, for she turned slightly to him and smiled beautifully, deepening his blush and making him avert his gaze to the window. After a few seconds of pretending to find something fascinating out there, he turned his attention to the clock on the wall and saw that the period still had less than 5 minutes left. He gave another muted sigh and dug into his pocket for his flash drive. This one was different from the one holding his demos. He wanted it to look more presentable than the worn-out one he used, considering how he had finally finished making his playlist for a CD. He planned to turn it in after school to the nearest music publisher in Kyoto. He smiled to himself, proud of all the time and effort he had put into his playlist, and grateful to Noir for helping him better understand how to edit and refine his music. The bell rang, and many of his classmates rushed out the door happily, some even giving a whoop for their freedom from the school day. His smile turned to one of amusement, finding that there was rarely a dull moment at Kyoto Academy, save for the classes. He spotted Rias coming over to him and gathered his things before standing up from his seat. "Ready to go?" she asked, still gracing him with a smile. He nodded once and pocketed his flash drive once more before following her out of class and out of the academy building. However, he blushed once more when she scooted closer to him and held his arm in hers, garnering the attention of practically the entire student body. Male students, and quite a few female ones, looked to him enviously, while the remaining female student body watched with a mix of excitement and curiosity. He guessed that they were excited about one of the two One-sama of the school having a boyfriend, but were also curious about the identity of said boyfriend. Considering how Naruto never made any attempts to stand out in the school. Why would he stand out when his main focus before meeting Rias was simply working on his music and getting by in his classes? He had no reason to put himself out there when most of the students worried nonsensically about the most superficial of things. Granted, he doubted that many of them paid for their own housing, worked a part-time job, or even worked toward their dream careers save for showing up for class. Was that harsh to think of them in such a way? Perhaps, but Naruto had always believed that actions spoke louder than words, and that was especially true for himself, considering that he couldn't speak. But back to the present, Naruto was both slightly embarrassed yet happy that Rias was so bold. She cold kept their newly budding relationship on a lower key, but she was proudly declaring to the school through her actions that she and him were a couple. Sometimes, he wished he could be that bold, but boldness in the face of danger had its own charm, and he definitely had that kind of boldness when he and the orc faced off against Riser and his peerage. Naruto. He heard Rias speak, giving her his attention. Her smile was one of amusement as she teased, "You were spacing out again, thinking about the past few weeks." He gave her a sheepish expression and rubbed the back of his head with his free hand, earning a giggle from her. "I suppose everything that's happened would stick in one's mind if they had such little experience with devil culture. Anyway, you're heading off to the publisher today, right?" He nodded once. "I see, well then," she once again shocked the student body when she leaned up and pecked him on the cheek. "Take that as a good luck charm." Releasing his arm, she gave him a chipper wave and headed off to her club's building, leaving plenty of stunned students and a blushing blonde that quickly recomposed himself and headed out to the publisher. "Thank you. Come again." AM bid to another satisfied customer, gathering their used bowls and depositing them into the sink as Naruto washed dishes. She smiled at him, earning a curious look from the blonde and prompting her to ask, "You must had an interesting last few weeks. You're in a much better mood than the last time I saw you." "You could say that," he replied to her. "How's your father doing?" "That's got a stomach bug today. Thanks for coming on short notice. I hope I didn't pull you away from anything important." "I wasn't busy. You texted me right after I was getting out of the publishing building. I won't hear from them in a few days, possibly a week even." "Publishing building?" AM repeated before it clicked and she smiled brightly. "You mean you finished it?" He simply nodded once, a proud grin on his face that earned him a tight hug from the ramen waitress. "Oh, I'm so proud of you. You've been working on that for so long now, and you've finally turned it in." She pulled away and bid, "I know this is silly to say, But good luck, I know this means a lot to you." The whiskered blonde smiled gratefully to her and pulled her in for another hug that she readily accepted. He made to pull away, but she held him close and didn't let go. "Just let me have this," she requested softly, a hidden blush on her face. He blinked once in confusion before simply standing and letting her hug him. Admittedly, it felt really nice in her arms. In the middle hours of evening, Naruto had finally made it back to his apartment and stepped inside to a surprise guest. Sitting on his couch was Noir, who had a key to his apartment and kept it tidy for him during his time helping Rias. She smiled to him as he entered. "Welcome back," she greeted. "Sorry for intruding, but I was hoping to talk with you privately." Curious about what she wanted to talk about, he nodded once and left his shoes near the door before joining her on the couch. Once he was seated, he motioned for her to continue. "Naruto, I want you to know that I'm glad you came to my store a few years back. It was more important to me than you think." "Why's that?" "Well," she started before hesitating and letting out a sigh. "This is harder than I thought it'd be." "Take your time," he assured her, giving him a thankful smile. She took a moment to gather the words before deciding to go for broke. "Naruto, I know that you are not fully human." His blue eyes widened in shock, not expecting that at all. "I know this because you and I are both from the same race." She smiled as his shock turned to realization. "That's right, I'm a siren, too. In fact, I serve the leader of our race by managing my store and keeping an eye on things here in Kyoto. That day you entered my store, I felt the connection we shared through our blood, and I contacted Lady Azura to tell her about you." "Lady Azura? Why would she need to know about me?" She was told because there are rarely any half-breed sirens that live away from our coven. In fact, your mother was one of the rare few who actively left our people to live her life away from the coven. He was surprised at that. Why do so few of us live away from the others? The siren's voice is a dangerous thing, Naruto. It can enrapture and ensnare the wills and hearts of anyone too weak of will to resist. Because of this, any of our race who strayed too far were hunted down either for capture to have our voices used or to have our voices silenced. His eyes widened in horror at that, and in the back of his mind, he wondered if his family was killed because of that fact. Lady Kushina was a half-breed of our race, born into the Uzumaki clan, after her father had sex with a human woman and invited her into the coven. This woman was a priestess who served the goddess Amaterasu, and she gave birth to Lady Kushina within the territory of the coven. I learned about this from Lady Azura, and she wished for me to tell you just in case you were unaware. He nodded to show her that he was in fact unaware of that fact. He knew his mother only had half her blood belonging to the siren race, but she never knew about his maternal grandparents. Hearing about them made him smile to Noir gratefully, making her smile softly in return. "I'm here to tell you about that and, by request of Lady Azura, to bring you with me to the coven to meet her. She really wishes to meet with you, since she and Lady Kushina were close before she became leader of the coven. If you think you're ready, we can leave as soon as tomorrow morning," she offered. He looked surprised at the sudden offer. "So soon? But I haven't even told the Ichiraku family, let alone the academy. I don't even know how long this visit will be. I understand that this is sudden, but Lady Azura is anxious to meet you. If you want, we can leave later in the day and give you time to inform whoever you need to." "Is it just me that's going? Or can I invite others?" "You mean the Gremory heiress and her peerage?" Noir deduced, ignoring the young man's reaction. "Our people rarely let other races within our borders, considering how our kin are hunted down when they don't have the protection of the coven, not to mention that we have bad blood with both the angels and the devils." "Bad blood?" Naruto repeated. She sighed sadly. "Admittedly, our dislike or distrust for devils is minor compared to our anger towards the angels. A few devils have forcibly inducted some of our kind into their peerages, but nothing further than that. However, that hasn't earned them our trust, and we keep them away from our borders out of concern for losing more members." He winced at that, having been told by Akeno one time that some devils who have peerages have forced other people into their control. She had said that the greed of devils, along with their pride, made them do cruel things, but it was in their nature to act on their baser desires. He didn't agree with that. The devils alone weren't the only race to act on such baser desires. After all, angels became fallen when they acted on those desires, or if they did something against the will of their god. No one race was the sole mascot of darkness. Even those in the light can have darkness in their hearts. What about the angels? He signed to her, already knowing the answer. "They were responsible for the disappearance of our goddesses, the Intoners, as sirens. We worship them for their power of song, praying and singing to them, in hopes of receiving their mercy and protection. However, the angels started to spread their faith across the world, and their god was a singular deity instead of multiple like ours, according to their faith. Their god made what was called 10 commandments. I've read those. The first commandment was what urged the angels to act, wasn't it?" Noir nodded sadly, we still don't know what happened to them, but we know that they've vanished from the world. Poor girl, Tu spoke up before directing her voice to Naruto. I believe it's time for us to show your people that we aren't truly gone. We lived through you, Naruto, one continued, it's time that they knew. He nodded mentally before getting Noir's attention. If I can bring my friends, I'll go as soon as you wish me to. Noir smiled in relief. Let me send a message to Lady Azura. You and the Grimoire Peerage come by the store tomorrow afternoon. I'll have Lady Azura's answer by then. Naruto gave her a smile in return, silently bidding her a good evening as she left his apartment, giving a muted sigh when she departed. He reached into his pocket for his phone, preparing to send a message to Rias. The following morning, 3 people were exiting the airport near the outskirts of Kyoto. 2 were wearing uniforms signifying their affiliation to the church. The first was a young woman with blue hair who had a fringe on the right side dyed green, her eyes were brown, and displayed a seriousness that was odd for a woman of her age. The second young woman had brown hair tied in twin tails held up by blue scrunchies and expressive violet eyes. Unlike her counterpart, she looked much more upbeat and cheerful to be in Kyoto, and her eyes held a sense of nostalgia in them as she looked out towards the city. The last person was a gorgeous woman with blonde hair and styled curls and compassionate golden eyes. She was garbed in a white sundress with a ruffled skirt and silver accents in the design of starlights, while a thin chain with a silver pendant rested around her neck. A gentle smile was on her face as she stood beside the 2 younger women, gazing towards Kyoto and easily sensing the energy of the 2 devil heiresses and their peerages. Lady Gabriel, the brunette spoke up, we should get moving so that we can speak with the devils here. Of course, Zenobia, the seraph replied, absently checking her pendant and seeing that it was doing its job of restraining her power. As a seraph, she didn't wish to overwhelm anyone with her naturally divine aura. It wouldn't do to break them with the radiance she unconsciously gave off as one of the major angels of heaven. I think I remember where some hotels are at where we can stay during our mission here, the brunette offered, having hailed a taxi that was pulling up to the curb. Thank you, Irina, Gabriel said with a smile aimed to her, we shall follow your lead, then. Of course, milady. She replied earnestly, happy to serve her seraph. Placing their luggage in the trunk and getting into the vehicle, the trio from the Holy Church were off. Rias stared in shock at Naruto's written message to her, while she absently reminded herself to start learning sign language. She was more focused on the fact that he was asked to return to his people, and that he had requested to bring along her and her peerage. Your people, she repeated, still sounding stunned, the sirens, you really want us to come with you? He nodded once, smiling to her and the others. Wow, Issei spoke up, never thought I'd see more sirens, are they super into music like you? The Uzumaki shrugged unsurely before writing a response, I'd guess they are, but I can't say for certain since I've never met another siren before. Noir never told me she was one until last night, and before that I always just assumed that she was a human who appreciated music enough to open a store. The siren living in Kyoto this whole time, Akeno muttered, and nobody ever knew. This is definitely a cause for concern, Kiba spoke up, she's been here for a couple years at least, and none of us ever felt her presence. Suspicious, Kaneko murmured, earning a faint frown from Naruto. Rias noticed this and declared, that's enough of that, whether we knew of her presence or not doesn't matter, what we should be concerned with is how we, as devils, conduct ourselves in a foreign territory. According to Naruto-kun, Noir-san spoke of how there is mistrust towards our race, so, it is our responsibility to represent ourselves as respectful and do nothing to warrant trouble. Assuming we're allowed to accompany Naruto-kun, that is. The others nodded while Asia asked, Naruto-san, do you think we'll be allowed to join you? I can't speak for this Azure lady, but I have hope that she'll allow it. Noir said that she and my mother were childhood friends, after all, Naruto wrote in reply. I'm sorry if this is a personal question, but do you know why your mother left the sirens? Rias asked. She wanted to explore the world beyond the coven, and she met my dad during her travels and lived with him in Kyoto. Other than that, I don't know. She was beautiful, Akeno spoke up, smiling towards the whiskered blonde. I can see some of her face in yours, and you were so cute as a baby. He blushed at the compliments, scratching his cheek sheepishly while Rias shot her queen an annoyed look that she simply smirked at. The redeeted devil knew what her oldest friend was up to, and she wasn't keen on letting her have an affair with her new boyfriend. They haven't even done that yet, for hell's sake. Looking at the time, she announced, we should get going, Noir-san is expecting us, and we don't want to keep her waiting. The others nodded and headed out for the music store, unaware of the unexpected guests that had come to Kyoto for Sona to deal with. I have good news, Noir spoke up after allowing the group inside and closing the store. Lady Azura has agreed to your request, Naruto, and your friends here will be allowed to accompany us to the siren territory. However, she turned her focus to Rias. Know that you and your peerage will be under watch throughout your stay. If you or your friends step out of line, not only will you be kicked out and forbidden to return, but we will speak with your superiors about your misconduct and demand reparations. Is that clear? Issei and Asia looked nervous about the consequences, while the others kept calm, and Rias nodded for them all. We understand, Noir-san, and we thank you for allowing us to accompany you and Naruto-kun. I'm looking forward to seeing more of his people and learning about them. Noir nodded once before leading them to the back room, which was empty save for a complicated rune circle big enough for them all to stand upon. Gathering together, Noir stood in the center and gathered her own power before letting out a lyric-free melody that caused the runes to glow brilliantly. The brightness engulfed them all before they vanished without a trace. Ravel, dear, Lady Phoenix called to her daughter, getting her to join her mother in one of the libraries of their estate. I thought you'd like to have these to read during your stay with Uzumaki-san. Ravel looked at the two books placed on a small table by one of the many bookshelves of the library. Walking over to them, she read their covers and saw that one focused on past affairs between devils and other races, while the other, which was much smaller, was a book about the siren race. Sirens, mother? She asked in confusion. It is the race that Uzumaki-san belongs to, other than his human blood. Lady Gremory informed me of this a couple days ago and suggested that I have you study up on what we know of them. Ravel nodded in understanding, gathering the two books into her arms and giving her mother a grateful smile. Thank you, mother, I'll be sure to read these thoroughly. As she made to leave, Lady Phoenix stopped her by asking, dear, why were you so insistent on being allowed to go to Kuo? Do you really think that Uzumaki-san will be someone special for you? Turning to her, Ravel replied softly, it has nothing to do with what he is, mother. I could care less that he was human, or any other race really. What I care about, and am grateful for, is that he doesn't treat me as if I was solely a member of the Phoenix family. Before we fought in the raiding game, I tried to apologize for Riser's previous behavior and his insults toward Uzumaki-san's family. Sweet of you, dear, but that wasn't your fault. I know, and Uzumaki-sama informed me that he wasn't holding us responsible for Riser's actions. After our fight, he was kind enough to give me his shirt to cover myself with, and he complimented me on how I was a better example of a child of nobility. He then showed incredible courage when he stood up to brother, and a fierce protectiveness for Rias and her peerage when he took brother's fire javelin that he had aimed at Rias. His actions throughout the raiding game have shown me that he is someone who is kind, considerate, valorous, and willing to lay his life on the line for those he cares about. Lady Phoenix smiled softly at the blush upon her daughter's face and chuckled lightly. You're rather taken with him, aren't you, dear? Still blushing, Ravel nodded once. I hope to try and grow closer to him during my stay in Kuo, even if I'm sure that he and Rias are romantically involved. Are you planning on speaking with her about possibly sharing his affection with you? I will try to. It won't be the first time two devils both pine for the same person, after all. Chuckling again, Lady Phoenix replied, very true, dear. Well, I wish you luck in pursuing him, and I hope everything works out. From what I can tell, and from what you have told me, I'm sure he'll take care of you. Smiling radiantly at her mother, Ravel bowed to her and replied, thank you very much for your support, mother. I'm going to finish packing. Watching her daughter leave with a spring in her step, Lady Phoenix knew that letting her go to Kuo was a good idea. It had been a few years since she had seen Ravel so happy about anything, and now her beloved daughter was showing signs of being in love. As a mother, she worried about the type of man her daughter would eventually pursue, but she felt those worries go away when the man in question was shown to be the one who had bested her son in the raiding game. Riser needed to be humbled, since he had grown far too proud and arrogant of late. His defeat, and his time recovering from the wounds dealt to him, would hopefully instill that humility he would need to be a great leader. She just hoped he did find that humility. Sona was understandably nervous about where she currently found herself. After all, devils and angels had been enemies since time immemorial, and here she was having a meeting between her peerage and a seraph of all angels. Gabriel, on the other hand, looked perfectly calm as she graced the heiress with a gentle smile, well flanked by her two subordinates. I'm sorry for showing up so unexpectedly, Citri-san, but I'm afraid that this was something that cold weight. Swallowing the lump in her dry throat, Sona fixed her glasses and nodded to the lady angel. And what is this issue that cold weight, if I may ask? Gabriel chuckled lightly, teasingly commenting, you can relax, you know, Seraphol-chan was never this nervous around me. In fact, she's gone out of her way to beat me in this little rivalry of ours. I don't have the heart to upset her, so I join in on the rivalry to keep her satisfied. Not to mention, it's rather fun competing with her in various things. As she giggled fondly about the rivalry between her and the Leviathan Satan, Zenobia awkwardly coughed to get her attention. Milady. We're supposed to tell these devils about our mission. She reminded. Oh. Forgive me, she apologized to everyone with a serene smile. I was lost in memory lane for a moment. She coughed once to recompose herself before speaking again. We have reason to believe that some stolen holy swords are somewhere here in Kuo. Now, we aren't accusing the devils of theft, since we know that it was a traitor of ours that performed the crime. We just have recent reports of them being spotted here in Kuo. I see, Sona hesitantly replied, feeling that this was indeed a very serious event. And how can I and my peerage be of assistance to you, Lady Gabriel? Zenobia looked ready to tell Sona off, but she wasn't allowed the chance since Gabriel sent her a warning glance from the corner of her eye. She knew of the young woman's bias against anything not associated with the church. She also knew that acting on that bias was not going to help them find the stolen swords. Zenobia held her tongue, but she still gave Sona and the other devils a displeased frown. Next to her, Irina sighed, since she had a feeling this would happen, and was glad Lady Gabriel was there to keep the peace. I know that this is rather imposing, Gabriel spoke, but we would greatly appreciate being allowed to search Kuo for the one who took the swords and dealing with them. We'd also appreciate it if you didn't try to involve yourself, your peerage, or Grimoire-san's peerage. This is a church issue, and we don't wish to endanger you by letting you get involved. I hope you understand that this is not a slight on you or Grimoire-san. I'm just concerned for your safety. Sona had to admit that, despite Gabriel's reassurance to the contrary, she did feel slighted. She wasn't some child to be coddled from the dangers of the world and the other factions, and neither was Rias. However, she knew that acting childishly wouldn't benefit anyone in this scenario, so she reluctantly nodded in agreement to their request. Very well, I'll be sure to inform Rias when she returns about the three of you staying in our territory. I only ask that you don't bring any trouble or danger to the people in our city, Sona stipulated. Gabriel looked interested and asked, if Grimoire-san isn't here, may I ask where she is? It isn't my place to say. All I'm willing to impart with you is that she and her peerage are joining a friend of ours on a trip and won't be back for possibly a week or so. I see, thank you, Citri-san, for both your willingness to speak with us and allowing us to work within your territory. As a seraph, I give you my word that we will not involve any innocent people into our affairs. I'm grateful to hear that, Lady Gabriel. Nodding with a gentle smile, Gabriel bid the young heiress farewell and left the academy grounds with her subordinates. With them gone, Sona let out a sigh of relief and looked down to the phone in her grasp that highlighted her sister's number. Slowly, she closed her phone and pocketed it, not wanting to get her sister involved just yet. She wanted to prove herself to her family and to Serafal that she could act on her own without having to go to them. She wanted to prove that she was ready to lead. She just hoped that nothing terrible was going to happen. Naruto and the others stared in awe at the floating city below them, illuminated by the setting sun upon the ocean horizon. Sitting upon multiple hexagonal platforms that were connected via bridges, the siren settlement was a sight to behold, and Naruto couldn't help but feel a sense of acceptance as he gazed upon his mother's old home. It's beautiful, Rias whispered, amazed at how the ocean waters glowed like fire in the sunset. Welcome to Asanum Opus 1, otherwise known as the ocean's composition. Come along, now, Noir spoke, waiting for them on the rocky trail that would lead them down the cliffs they stood upon. Lady Azura is waiting for us. The others followed her, eager to get a closer look at the floating city. Unnoticed by anyone, the same gray eyes framed by glasses observed them as they made their way down, specifically Naruto, stepping out of the shadows from the cliffside. It was revealed to be a young woman who had been observing him. She looked to be his age with dark brown hair styled into twin tails that rested over her shoulders and fell down the front of her long-sleeved white shirt. Around her neck was a black tie tucked into the white collar of her shirt, while a black plaid skirt covered her privates and butt. Thigh-high black boots covered white stockings, while a silvery belt held her skirt up and black gloves adorned her hands. Finishing off her attire were a pair of half-rimmed red glasses that framed her gray eyes, too. She smiled to herself as she sensed Naruto's energy, getting a much better feel for it due to being closer to him this time compared to when he was in Kyoto. Found you, Zero, she muttered softly, reaching behind her and grabbing an exceptionally large suitcase that she picked up with ease. Now, we shall see what your host will do in this timeline, she finished before silently following the others. She was a recorder, after all, she had a job to do. Thanks for watching.